On the outskirts of Gre City, a man is almost finished building his restaurant. He takes a step back and looks at his hard work. Tears of joy begin to flow from his eyes. This is Ellison, a retired Class 9 archmage. As he clenches his fist, he whispers, "Finally, my own restaurant." It's been 15 years. 15 years ago, he was heading home from school as usual and a bit sleepy. His dream was to become a famous chef after graduation and open a small restaurant. However, that dream was shattered when a truck came rushing at him. He was stunned in place. When he opened his eyes, he was greeted with the scenery of an unfamiliar world. His eyes couldn't believe what he was seeing. Just then a hand grabs his shoulder. "Get yourself together. If you mess up during evacuation, you'll die on the road." Unable to process what's happening, Ellison asks the man where they are. He informed him that they were in the city of Gre, located on the outskirts of the Dwarven Empire. He is in shock. What kind of ridiculous situation is this? A world with monsters, magic, and an empire that seems to be at war with dragons. Ellison decided to adapt and think positively. "I almost died after being hit by a truck, but luckily I got a second chance. There's no way this world is that bad, right?" Just then, an edict from the emperor came. "People of Dwarven Empire, the fate of the country is at stake. Now, you must stand up for this country yourself." Ellison is getting nervous about the atmosphere. Our emperor commands, "Let us fight in the name of the knights." With that, he was dumbfounded. He didn't even know how to respond to this situation. War broke out, and the youth had to join the force attacking the dragon, so he ended up enlisting too. Ellison lamented, "You should have just let me get hit by the truck." Soon, due to his magical talent, he was assigned to the mages squad. Compared to knights, mages didn't have to fight on the front lines. After arriving in this world, Ellison discovered the food was extremely unpalatable and hard to swallow, but the people consider the food good. He thought to himself, "If I could open a restaurant here, how popular it would be. That's right, I can still achieve my unfulfilled dream here." With his commitment to his dream, he ultimately persevered. 15 years later, Ellison finally retired. He chose to start a new life in Gre City, opening a restaurant with his former comrades. At that time, a woman noticed the restaurant. She decides to check it out, but is startled by Ellison's crying face. He's crying like he's having a really rough time, she thought worriedly. "Are you okay?" This time, Ellison noticed the woman. "Yes, I'm okay. I'm just so happy that I finally managed to open my restaurant," he said while wiping his tears. After talking, he learned her name was Rain, the owner of a nearby shop. Rain then asked if he managed the restaurant alone. Ellison answered that he was with a comrade who was sleeping soundly at the moment. Rain then recommended her husband's butcher shop to Ellison, but warned him that her husband had a temper. However, Ellison thought, seeing how kind Rain was, her husband must be easy to talk to. Yet, when he met the shop owner, he became so nervous he couldn't speak. It turned out the owner mistook him for a merchant from another store. Before he could speak and buy any meat, the owner angrily said, "I'm not selling it." He nervously asked why. "Are your ears clogged?" "I'm not selling it. You are a restaurant owner. I've seen a lot of guys like you. You all buy meat at low prices and then sell it back at double the price before it spoils." Ellison was stunned. "I don't do that though." At that moment, a frying pan slammed into the top of the owner's head. The previously arrogant owner instantly lost his temper. Then, Rain asked Ellison if he wanted Belrin meat, and Ellison affirmed. Unexpectedly, the temperamental owner was actually afraid of the kind shopkeeper. Caught in the middle, Ellison thought, "I want to go home." Under the threat of the frying pan, the owner had to obediently fetch the meat. The shopkeeper, feeling very sorry, explained he was also a soldier once but turned this way after being deceived by a colleague. Meanwhile, the owner brought the meat and gestured for Ellison to show his skills. However, when Ellison checked the bag, it was not Belrin meat. "Do you think I'll give you precious Belrin meat? Belrin meat is of excellent quality and is delicious no matter how you eat it. Only with my approval will I supply it. Otherwise, you won't even get a piece of fat. Let's see what delicious food you can make." "I didn't expect that I'd be receiving this meat instead of Belrin." Before the shop owner could finish, another frying pan flew towards the back of his head. The shopkeeper signaled Ellison to ignore his conditions. Despite the strict terms, Ellison agreed to the owner's offer and invited them to taste his cooking at his restaurant that evening. Rain was a bit shocked. Afterward, Ellison confidently left. But Rain is a bit worried that's the belly fat of a wooba though. In this world, the names of livestock and animals are completely different from where Ellison came from. Cows are called wuka, chickens as palenku, wolves as belrin, and pigs are known as wooba. Belrin meat is considered an expensive ingredient, while the most cost-effective meat choice is pork, but the locals do not appreciate the delicacy of pork belly. Considering the quality of pork belly, roasting is naturally the most delicious. Before that, the meat needs to be slashed several times to better absorb the flavors. During roasting, the surface moisture evaporates quickly, obtaining a crispier texture. Wasn't it overkill to use a technique that could instantly kill monsters to slice the meat? Just then, the doorbell rang, and the Rain couple arrived. Ellison asked them to wait a moment. While Rain praised the clean environment of the restaurant, Noel couldn't help but complain a few words. Rain silently took out a frying pan, seemingly feeling the bottom wasn't shiny enough. On the other side, Ellison was preparing for the roast. After heating the roasting tray, he gently brushed it with oil. Because pork belly is high in fat, it should be brushed sparingly to prevent sticking. When placing the meat, start from the skin side outside. Otherwise, as the inside begins to cook, the skin might dry out, affecting the uniformity of the roasting. The delicious cooking even enhanced the appetite through sound, such as the sizzling sound of pork. After frying the pork skin, adjust the heat to let the sides of the pork skin develop some color. After sprinkling with salt, thoroughly roast the pork belly to ensure the internal temperature is even. Then cut the meat into sizes convenient for eating. Next, prepare a salad to accompany the meal. Although locals might not be familiar with this way of only eating wraps, Ellison thought this combination would make the meal even tastier. Various vegetables and rich seasonings balance the rich taste of roasted pork belly. Mr. Knoll seemed meticulous, so it was best to avoid unnecessary additions. Finally, they plated it as the finishing touch: salad and roasted pork belly. When the roasted meat was served, Rain began to anticipate. "Goodness, that looks delicious," while Mr. Knoll, who is still grumpy, said, "It's just the appearance." Rain then picks up a piece of meat. Just one bite. The crispy wooba meat blossomed in the mouth as if running on the plains. Rain couldn't help but exclaim, "Is this really wooba meat?" Ellison nodded affirmatively. The rich aroma of the salad also neutralized the greasiness of the wooba meat, a combination Rain hadn't expected. Meanwhile, Ellison asked Mr. Knoll's opinion, by which time Knoll's plate was already empty, and he said, "It's not enough, far from enough." He signaled Ellison to serve more meat. At that moment, a frying pan appeared again on Knoll's crown, and Rain teased, "If you want more, just ask for it." Mr. Knoll clears his throat. "Congratulations, you passed the test. To be honest, among all the wooba dishes I've tried so far, this was the best. Whatever type of meat you want, I will provide the best from the Laverne Empire." Ellison was very grateful for Mr. Knoll's recognition. "Pleasure to work with you." Mr. Knoll then added, "Now I just want to eat more roast meat." Ellison then signaled them to wait a moment. Meanwhile, the aroma from the kitchen drifted into a girl's room, and she was attracted by the sudden fragrance. "I smell something delicious." The scene shifts. Since the restaurant opened a week ago, Ellison has adapted very well, and his diner has received unanimous praise from the locals. And behind all this success, it couldn't have happened without these spices and seasonings, which are rare and expensive in this world, so people can't use them casually. Additionally, the quality and variety of products here cannot compare to those of the modern world, but Ellison has a way to obtain them. He placed a gold coin in the center of the summoning circle and, after reciting a magic spell, modern products appeared before him. The summoning magic of this world can bring objects from the modern world, a spell Ellison stumbled upon while searching for a way back to his original world. Although there are some limitations on the size and weight of the objects, this has already provided him immense help. However, this also indirectly proves that it's not a perfect spell, as it hasn't achieved its main purpose of taking Ellison back to his original world. Moreover, grocery store food, unless processed like fresh meat, eggs, or vegetables, tends to spoil. The specific reason remains unclear. Even though Ellison possesses the capabilities of a high-ranking mage, he can only summon once a day. Just then, he wanted to grab 2 beers to quench his thirst, but when he opened the fridge, he found it was empty. Ellison quickly guessed the situation. Rurin was sleeping when she suddenly felt a knock on his head. "What is this? I didn't do anything wrong," leaving Ellison helpless. Ellison sighed. "This. You took the beer out of the refrigerator and drank all of it. At least clean up after drinking. That's the consequence of you not leaving any delicious food for me last time." As the greatest black dragon, Rurin retorted, "And this body is a dragon's. Why would I do something like cleaning? Cleaning up is something lower beings do." As she spoke, a clang sounded, seemingly heralding new trouble. "Peel all of that and organize it." "But I'm a dragon," Rurin said while peeling a basin of onions. As Rurin herself said, her true form is a black dragon. Ellison found her after she became an orphan. She lost her mother and homeland in the Dragon War. Although she has lived for hundreds of years and has taken human form, she is still young for a dragon. Perhaps that's why she is immature. Thus, Ellison decided to take her in, and seeing her pitiful look, Ellison promised to make her a steak burger. Just then, as they were about to close for the night, the doorbell rang again, and in came Mr. Knoll. He looked troubled, and the first thing he did upon entering was to ask Ellison to serve him a drink and some snacks. But Rurin had already drunk the beer in the fridge. "I should give him this." Ellison luckily summoned a bottle of liquor last time. Ellison serves Mr. Knoll his order. It didn't take long for Mr. Knoll to finish the liquor. Ellison then advised him not to drink anymore, but Mr. Knoll, numbed by alcohol, began to reveal his troubles. Hearing this, Ellison was suddenly shocked, wondering what exactly had happened. Mr. Knoll then explained the whole story. He discovered that Rain dressed up and went out every now and then, a situation that had persisted for several months. Therefore, he decided to secretly follow her, only to find that Rain was meeting an old colleague from her mercenary days, and this person was also Mr. Knoll's closest friend. After saying this, Mr. Knoll wept bitterly, unsure of what to do. After hearing this, Ellison felt that things were not as they seemed on the surface. "Please leave this case to me, sir." Although he hadn't known Rain for long, he was certain she wasn't the type to commit betrayal. Meanwhile, Rurin was muttering as she worked. Ellison then asked her, "Do you want to go out, or would you prefer to continue peeling?" Rurin nodded sadly, agreeing to go out. Moments later, they arrived at the place Mr. Knoll mentioned. In front of a restaurant, they found Mrs. Rain, and sitting opposite her was was a man, presumably that colleague. To better understand their situation, Ellison let Ruren use space magic to listen to their conversation, promising her a beef burger as a reward. The gluttonous Ruren demanded two, and Ellison readily agreed. Through magic, Ellison heard their entire conversation and found that their relationship was not as Mr. Knoll had imagined. It appeared to be a big misunderstanding. After pondering for a moment, Ellison directly appeared before the two and said, "Mr. Knoll misunderstood you too." On the other side, Mr. Knoll lay drunkenly on the table. When Ment, his comrade, and Rain appeared at the restaurant door, Mr. Knoll woke up, saw them, and angrily raised his fist, ready to attack his comrade. However, the comrade didn't seem to want to evade, but Ellison promptly used a magic barrier to block Mr. Knoll's attack. Ellison advised, "Mr. Knoll, hitting him won't solve the problem. If you knew earlier that Mr. Ment had lent you money when you opened your meat shop, perhaps you would calm down." Upon hearing this, Mr. Knoll incredulously stopped what he was doing. Ellison continued, "Let's all sit down and talk properly." Considering Mr. Knoll had drunk a lot, Ellison decided to sober him up, suggesting using hot pot as a solution. Meanwhile, Rain explained everything thoroughly. When Mr. Knoll was swindled out of all his savings, it was Mr. Ment who lent him the money to open a shop. If it had been a direct loan, Mr. Knoll would surely have refused. So Rain falsely claimed that a lord helped them recover the money. "But didn't you have plans after retiring from your mercenary life? Then how can you? The food is ready." Just then, Ellison interrupted them. "Sorry, the vegetables shouldn't be boiled for too long. Isn't it better to talk while eating?" Mr. Ment tasted it first and then asked Mr. Knoll to try it as well. After a brief taste, they began reminiscing about their past lives. Although it had been over a decade, it seemed like just yesterday. With Ellison's hot pot helping along, years of grudges and secrets were revealed, and their conflicts were finally resolved. But Ruren was not pleased on the side. "What about the 2 beef burgers you promised?" Ellison could only smile awkwardly. "I almost forgot." Just then, Mr. Ment called out to Ellison, expressing a desire to host an important figure in their mercenary group's gathering here. Ellison readily agreed. A few days later, Ellison thought of a suitable menu. This is not a chicken, but a creature similar to a chicken called Pelenku. In this world, it is considered a high-end ingredient because it is very fast and difficult for ordinary people to catch, even for Ellison, a high-ranking mage, so he had to find another way. Previously, Ellison went to Mr. Knoll's shop, and Mr. Knoll was shocked when he heard that Ellison wanted Pelenku meat. He told Ellison that this meat was rarely sold even once a year and advised him to give up the idea. However, Ellison decided to use reverse psychology. "Didn't you say you could get me any meat I want? Where's the confident Mr. Knoll now?" Fortunately, Mr. Knoll pointed Ellison in the right direction. Recently, Pelenku had been spotted in the lemon forest, so Ellison went to the lemon forest, but the Pelenku proved too difficult to catch. Then, he decided to let Ruren try. The next instant, a terrifying pressure covered the entire forest, and with Ruren releasing a dragon roar, the Pelenku was so frightened by the powerful pressure that it couldn't move and even fainted. Ruren proudly said, "If you're not careful, you'll end up like this Pelenku." Moments later, the two returned to the diner, and Ruren finally got her beer again. Ellison reminded her not to drink all the beer, as the upcoming delicacies would pair well with it. The scene shifts to the evening, and Mr. Ment's mercenary group was already waiting, all looking forward to Ellison's cooking. "Ellison, sorry, it's quite noisy, isn't it?" "It's a celebration, Mr. Ment. How can it be quiet?" Ment also brought along his junior, Miltine, who said, "The senior praised this restaurant highly, and I really look forward to it. I hope it lives up to your expectations." Then, a golden fried chicken was placed in front of them. Ellison said, "I'm sure everyone knows about Pelenku, right? This is a delicacy made from Pelenku meat." This startled Miltine. A creature even professional hunters can't catch, turned into food? Ellison urged them to eat while it was hot, as that's when it tasted best. It was their first time eating Pelenku meat, and just one bite had them conquered by its deliciousness. The crispy outer skin, fried to a golden crisp, offered a rich texture with each bite. Irresistible. Miltine ended up eating 2 in a row. "Hey Miltine, don't eat it all by yourself." Ellison knew this meal was a great success, but now there were too many guests, and Ellison couldn't manage alone, so he signaled Ruren to help. But Ruren seemed reluctant, complaining, "Are you really asking a noble dragon to serve humans now?" This stunned Ellison. Then, Ellison pulled out his Oscar-level acting skills, instantly changing his tone. "If you don't like it, then forget it. After the war, we'll open a restaurant together and run it together. I think feelings can change. But for now, I'm fine alone. You can go back now." This shocked Ruren, who quickly said, "I'll get to work right now. Surely, serving beer should be no problem for a dragon." Then, Ellison handled the cooking, while Ruren took care of serving the food and beer. The two were busy for half a day, finally collapsing on the table, exhausted. Ruren sighed. "Is it finally over?" Ellison had already prepared food for her, and the worn-out Ruren devoured the fried chicken, very satisfied with Ellison's cooking. Ellison, surprised she even helped clean up, teased, "Did you finally grow up a little?" Ruren suddenly bubbled up, slowly leaning on Ellison's shoulder, saying, "Because this is our restaurant." Seeing the exhausted Ruren, Ellison also felt very happy. Just then, Ellison sensed a strange presence quietly approaching, and Ruren immediately detected a familiar scent frantically hiding behind Ellison. Ellison. As the door slowly opened, Ellison also felt uneasy. Cities of humans always displease me. Long time no see. Black Dragon Elder Metadana. The elder's voice came through, and Ellison understood he was here for Rurin. It turns out that before this, the dragon race had abandoned Rurin and her mother. Although Ellison took her away, the Black Dragon race did not stop him, which was their promise at the time. However, the elder now intended to renege, saying, promises have an order. They are sequential. In the Black Dragon race, reaching 800 years old is considered adulthood. A dragon without its own lair by 800 years old must leave for the sacred lands. Once Rurin turns 800 next year, she must go to the sacred land. It is the rule of the dragon race. No one can break it. Breaking the rules means war. Ellison sighed softly. If that's the case, then let's begin. Seeing this, the elder immediately transformed into his dragon human form, scoffing, you might be stronger than the rumors say, but you underestimate us. Rurin panicked too, quickly signaling Ellison not to start a war. Ellison froze. What? War? I was talking about creating a dragon's lair. It turned out that both Rurin and the elder had misunderstood Ellison's words. Ellison explained, we still have a whole year, and now we've also accumulated enough wealth, so we can start building the dragon's lair. Does that work for you, Black Dragon Elder? The Black Dragon Elder nodded silently, giving an affirmative answer, then said, I will return in a year, and left. Next, Ellison's task was to create a magnificent dragon's lair with an awe-inspiring interior design. Dazzling treasures are a symbol of the dragon's lair, and obviously, creating a dragon's lair requires a lot of time and resources. At this moment, Ellison found himself in a dilemma. The guests were coming in like a tide because rumors had spread that the restaurant had Penu meat. Although Ellison told them he would no longer sell it, he was still overwhelmed. No, I need a way to reduce the number of guests. So, Ellison found Mr. Knoll. When Mr. Knoll saw the hillsides covered with Penu, he too was incredulous. He didn't understand why Ellison had caught so many Penu. To this, Ellison explained, next, I will provide you with Penu meat, the only place in the empire that sells it, sure to attract a lot of customers. What made Mr. Knoll curious wasn't these Penu, but how Ellison had managed to catch so many. Even for the top hunters of Gre City, this was outrageous. Ellison told him not to worry because he has his own ways and profit distribution will be 50-50. Hearing this, Mr. Knoll disagreed. What? You're doing too much. You're catching them and giving them to us. So why are you only keeping half? After discussing with Mr. Knoll, he readily agreed to cooperate. Just then, Mr. Knoll wondered why these Penu wouldn't run away. Ellison drew a magic circle on the ground, and instantly a huge magical barrier covered the entire hilltop. Mr. Knoll was stunned on the spot, thinking, this can't be possible for someone who's only studied magic for a few years. Just who are you really? Meanwhile, Ellison signaled Mr. Knoll to keep it a secret. I am just a restaurant owner who retired after the war, just like you, Mr. Knoll. A few days later, the restaurant's operations turned out exactly as Ellison had expected, even better than he had anticipated. But today, surprisingly, not a single guest came. Ellison couldn't help but exclaim, isn't this a bit too good? I thought there would still be some customers. I never thought it would be empty. Rurin was very happy. Now we have time to dig the dragon's lair. Will you live with me once we build the lair? Ellison flatly refuses, making Rurin shout, what? Then I don't need it. Let's declare war with the Black Dragon family. Calm down. We're going to build it somewhere near. Rurin, unsure of this, asked, are you sure it's nearby? Then, Ellison took Rurin to the foot of the mountain where the restaurant was located. Since the restaurant itself was on the outskirts of the city, the nearby land was all his. Rurin was very satisfied with this, but Ellison reminded her, we must activate the magic barrier during the digging process, otherwise the restaurant will collapse. After hearing this, Rurin rolled up her sleeves, ready to start working, while Ellison turned and left. I think the restaurant can't be left unguarded. This left Rurin stunned. So you're trying to be lazy? Ellison returned to the restaurant. He hadn't had such leisure time in a long time. Just then, the doorbell suddenly rang, and a well-dressed boy pushed open the door, asking if this was the rumored place where one could eat Penu meat. Ellison affirmed, but regretfully stated, we no longer sell Penu. You might want to check Mr. Knoll's meat shop. However, the boy seemed very anxious and immediately asked if there was any other food available. So, Ellison invited him to wait a moment, thinking of a suitable dish. He thought, a burger should suit this boy's taste. Ellison prepared the burger using beef sirloin, chopping it up and shaping it, adding a bit of salt, and frying it in melted butter. Then, he placed the patty on some vegetables, drizzled it with garlic sauce, and topped it with an egg from a Penu. Thus, the irresistible burger, even to dragons, was complete. At the sight of the burger, the noble boy seemed very interested and immediately picked it up to try. But just then, the door was opened again, and a stern butler called out his name. Young master, I searched for you everywhere. What are you doing in a place like this? Hearing the voice, he immediately became frightened and stopped what he was doing. The butler sternly said, what if you get poison eating in a place like this? Ellison took offense and retorted, I was holding back, but your words are too much. Are you saying my food is poisoned? Are you the owner of the restaurant? I don't know if you prepared the meal knowing who this person is, but he is the Lord's son, Gre City's Count Deadran Gre. Deadran quickly signaled for the two to stop arguing, then took out a gold coin, placed it on the table, and left the restaurant dejectedly. Watching his forlorn figure, Ellison couldn't help but worry. Meanwhile, Ruren came running back, all dirty, and complained, "Stinky Ellison, it's your turn now." Ellison resignedly signaled that he had more important things at hand, saying they could talk about digging tomorrow, and asked her to activate space magic to transport him. But Ruren, who had been busy all day, said she was hungry, and Ellison promised to make her something tasty when they returned. Meanwhile, Deadran was back in his room at the castle. Suddenly, a teleportation portal appeared, and Ellison and Ruren walked out of it. Ellison handed Deadran the burger, saying, "This is yours since you've already paid." Then, he urged Deadran to eat quickly. Looking at the fragrant burger, Deadran couldn't help but drool. Just as he was about to enjoy it, the room door was suddenly knocked, and Ellison sighed in frustration. "Can't we have a bit of private space?" Deadran clearly didn't know how to respond, which stunned Ellison. Seeing Deadran's lack of confidence, Ellison told him, "You are the heir to a baronet. They can't refuse your orders, so be confident." Ellison encouraged, but Deadran still felt that the guards wouldn't listen to his orders. Instead, they always ignored him. "Young master, I'll open the door and come in." Seeing this, Ruren sighed softly, then loudly declared, "It was nothing, so leave. I never ordered you to come in." Deadran was startled because Ruren's voice was identical to his. Soon, the guards outside left. Ellison then instructed him, "You must establish your superiority." However, the next moment, Deadran hung his head, hoping Ellison would become his teacher. He said he had been raised without a mother, living with his stepmother, and no one had ever taught him how to behave. Since his father fell ill, his stepmother had isolated him even more. Like his father, he wanted to become a good lord, but the servants tried to control and restrict his movements under his stepmother's orders. Hearing this, Ellison was speechless. "But my thought changed after today's events. Teacher, please teach me more ways to become a good lord," Deadran said with overflowing enthusiasm. Seeing this, Ellison was dumbfounded. That conclusion's a bit weird though. However, he decided to teach him anyway. "You say you want to be a good lord, but the position of a lord comes with responsibilities. Therefore, you must be accountable for every word you say. Always listen and think before making a decision. If the decision benefits you, then all is well. If not, then accept it and take responsibility." Then, Ellison urged him to eat the burger while it was hot and left. After Ellison and Ruren left, Deadran took a bite of the burger and was immediately conquered by its deliciousness. Inspired by the tasty burger, Deadran suddenly realized the meaning of Ellison's words, muttering to himself, "I understand the real meaning now. A good lord means someone who makes an effort to ensure that everyone can enjoy this kind of food. I will definitely work hard." Just then, Ellison and Ruren had reappeared on the outskirts of the restaurant. Ellison's words to Deadran were actually made up on the spot, and he thought to himself, "I hope Deadran doesn't take it too seriously." "Then why did you put so much effort into it? You seem to care a lot," Ruren curiously asked. Ellison showed her a gold coin. "I'm doing as much I'm getting." It turns out that Deadran gave 100,000 runes in exchange for a hamburger that regularly cost 200 runes, and Ellison just provided him with a service appropriate for the price. Meanwhile, in a forest on the outskirts of Gre City, there was a very popular clinic. The doctor there was not only skilled in medicine, but even used magic for healing. However, this wasn't the real reason the clinic was popular. Customers flocked to this remote location because the clinic's owner was a rare elf. At that moment, the elf doctor, Elena, appeared troubled. She told Rain that she was considering going back to her homeland, which puzzled Rain. Elena explained, "Although I like healing and helping others, I've found that no one is really interested in the healing. People go to all lengths just to see the elf woman, not the doctor I am. I've even been insulted by their families, which leaves me unsure of what to do, and now I don't even have the motivation to continue." Rain becomes worried and asks, "By any chance, do you not like me too?" "What? No, I like you, Mrs. Rain. Rather, you always treated me well. That's why I put up with this without prejudice." Rain understood that Elena couldn't find her true passion, which made her so despondent, just like herself. "So if there were more things that you liked here, would you still stay?" "There are so many things I don't like about my husband. Although Noel snores loudly at night, he is indeed very reliable. And before, you like the feeling of helping patients, right?" Elena nodded. Then, Rain recommended Ellison's restaurant to Elena, which confused her. Rain smiled and said, "I think you'll like it. The number of reasons for liking this place can keep increasing one by one." Meanwhile, Ellison is digging in a cave when he coincidentally runs into Mr. Noel, who has brought his nephew to the restaurant to eat. Mr. Noel tells him that an elf is about to arrive. Upon hearing this, Ellison quickly returns to the restaurant because elves are a very rare race, usually not appearing in human towns, so he cannot afford to be negligent. Elena, following Mrs. Rain's recommendation, arrives at the restaurant but finds only a little girl to greet her. Elena asks if this is Ellison's restaurant, to which Ruren confidently answers. Ruren, sensing her elven nature, exclaims, "Elves are indeed beautiful." This catches Elena off guard, and she hurriedly says, "You look very beautiful too, much younger than me." Ruren chuckles, "Are you saying I am young? In our race, I am indeed still considered young, but I am probably much older than you." Hearing this, Elena feels visibly nervous. In the next instant, a terrifying pressure erupts from Ruren. "How dare you speak so carelessly in front of me?" Frightened, Elena immediately kneels down. Ruren coldly hurriedly says, "If you become my servant, I will forgive your rudeness." This scene is just witnessed by Ellison as he returns. Seeing Ellison, Ruren excitedly explains, "I was just looking for an employee for the restaurant." She thought she would be praised, but a loud clang sounds, and Ruren becomes furious. This scene leaves Elena very confused. Am I dreaming right now? She finally realizes that Ruren is definitely a black dragon. In this world, even children know that dragons are not to be trifled with. They are walking natural disasters, capable of easily burning down an entire village if they wish. Dragons are the most powerful species, yet Ellison treats dragons like children. This leaves Elena wondering, who exactly is that guy? Then, Ellison apologizes for Ruren's behavior. "I didn't know such things would happen when I'm not around." Elena is also very curious if Ellison is a human, to which Ellison confirms, "Yes, I am human. You must have realized by now that child is a black dragon. I hope you can keep this secret. Of course, I have no intentions of disturbing a dragon because I am not ready to die." Hearing this, Elena seems overwhelmed, and Ruren's first impression on her wasn't good. Ellison quickly changes the subject, asking if Elena was recommended by Mrs. Rain, to which Elena nods. "Yes, I am Elena." Ellison worriedly says, "Did we mess up the first impression? Could we get a bad review for our restaurant?" Elena smiles and says, "I heard you can taste delicious food here, even if it's just made from vegetables, so I wanted to try it." From Elena's words, Ellison learns that elves do not eat meat because they cannot digest it. Quickly, Ellison thinks of a suitable recipe. Tomato pasta is a good choice. He begins preparing the dish, adding chopped onions, garlic, and mushrooms, frying them in heated olive oil to blend the different flavors, creating a wonderful aroma. Then, he passes chopped tomatoes through a sieve into the oil, seasoning with salt, sugar, and other spices, and slowly cooks it. He lowers the heat while ensuring the sauce doesn't burn. As the sauce thickens, he puts the pasta in boiling water, cooking it for 8 minutes, remembering to reserve some pasta water. Finally, he mixes the pasta with the sauce, adjusting the sauce's thickness with the pasta water. Thus, a delicious bowl of tomato pasta is ready. Then, Ellison invites Elena to taste freely, explaining, "There is no meat in this." The pasta, colored by the tomato sauce, looks appetizing and emits a faint aroma. Meanwhile, Mr. Noel's wooba meat is also ready, but Ellison notices that Noel's nephew seems troubled. Ellison plans to ask Elena if the food suits her taste, but turns around to see her gobbling it down. "I never knew something could taste so good." She finishes the food in a few bites, her face smeared with tomato sauce, completely unaware that Ellison is watching. Realizing this, she becomes embarrassed. Ellison smiles and hands her a napkin, signaling her not to worry. He also notices that Elena rarely dines out. Elena nods and explains, "I always thought vegetables were nothing special and questioned if there was a need for cooking, but I didn't expect Mr. Ellison's food to be so delicious. Well, it's true that the people here don't use that much spices, since they are rare." Elena then stood up and enthusiastically said, "But I changed my mind after coming here. It was really delicious. I'll have to thank Mrs. Rain." Ellison is relieved by the customer's praise. However, just then, arguing voices are heard nearby. It turns out Noel's nephew Nellen just found out he was adopted and feels deceived for over 20 years, which makes him unable to concentrate on his work, so he leaves the mine early. The two nearby also feel very awkward, involuntarily overhearing their conversation. Noel then tells his nephew, "Do you not know how Mrs. May worked day and night to raise you? She worked tirelessly because she wanted you to be well fed. Even though your father died early while working as a mercenary, don't you think she, not being your birth mother, has done so much for you?" Nellen stated that he was aware of everything, but now he dare not go home because he had an argument with his mother at noon. Hearing this, Mr. Noel became very angry, and when he saw the two in conflict, Ellison stepped forward to mediate. Just then, the door was pushed open again, and Mrs. Rain, in a panic, said, "Nellen, hurry to the mine. There's been a collapse, and your mother is trapped inside." Upon hearing this, Nellen immediately turned and ran towards the mine. At the same time, Elena also expressed her wish to go along, as they might need healing. Ellison also put on his mage robe, ready to assist. Moments later, Nellen was stopped at the entrance of the mine, as there was a risk of a secondary collapse. Ellison calmed him down and said, "Leave the rest to us." With Ellison's persuasion, the mine manager agreed to let them enter the mine. The two appear inside the mine. Just then, rocks began to fall from the ceiling, but were stopped by Ellison's magical barrier. Elena, not expecting Ellison to be a powerful mage, became very curious. Ellison, smiling, said, "More than that, I'm curious what made you willing to risk your life." Soon, the two reached a fork in the path. With just the two of them, time might not be enough, so Ellison decided to use magic to probe. Guided by the spirits, they quickly found the survivors. After Elena's examination, it was found that a survivor had serious leg injuries, which were eventually healed under her magical treatment. Next, they needed to help more people. Elena took care of healing the wounded, while Ellison used magic to move rocks and escort people out of the cave. The two quickly reached the end of the mine, where they found Nellen's mother. After Elena's examination, it was found that she had suffered a severe head injury, requiring Elena to perform more advanced healing, though she could not guarantee its effectiveness. Outside the cave, all the injured had been successfully rescued. Thanks to Elena's his efforts, Mrs. May was also out of danger. The wound near her eye was not serious, and she could live normally once the bandage was removed. Seeing his injured mother, Nellen felt very guilty. If it wasn't for me, this wouldn't have happened to my mother. Just then, Mrs. May woke up, and everyone sighed in relief. The first thing she did upon waking was to ask if Nellen was hurt, which made Nellen no longer able to contain his emotions, and he burst into tears. Mrs. May had no intention of blaming him. At the same time, Elena explained why she entered the mine. She had intended to close her clinic and return to her homeland. Although human lifespans are much shorter than those of elves, they express their emotions freely. I think there's too much here that I cherish to just leave. I like the genuine emotions inherent in humans, and now I know how good the food here is too. As she spoke, Elena, weakened from the effort, nearly couldn't stand but was promptly supported by Ellison. Apologetically, she whispered, "Thank you." Then, Ellison cast an elf's mana transfer spell on Elena, which immediately made her feel much lighter. Ellison explained that it was taught to him by an elf companion named Beaton when he was in the troop. Elena was shocked by this revelation, as Beaton was a great hero of the elves, which made her even more curious about Ellison's identity. Meanwhile, the punished Rurin was still complaining about digging in the cave. Just then, a stream of water suddenly hit her face, making Rurin exclaim, "Did I dig up a spring?" To ascertain the source of the water, Rurin began digging downward. This angered Ellison, as it was a very dangerous action. Despite Rurin's deep digging, even Ellison's magic could not clearly detect the water source. Now that the cave space had expanded, supports were needed to ensure that the top would not collapse. Ellison then began chanting a spell, conjuring an advanced level 8 magic. Rurin warned him to be careful. If level 8 magic isn't handled well, it could blow the mountain top off. Ellison confidently replied, "Of course." As the magic was released, energy instantly lit up the entire cave. Moments later, a huge shield sturdily supported the mountain top. At the same time, the previously disappeared groundwater began to stir and gushed out from the ground instantly. Seeing the steamy spring water, Ellison realized it was a hot spring, presumably activated by the recent magic. Seeing this, Rurin decided to wash off the dirt on her, but before Ellison could warn her, she had already rushed in and immediately got her face scalded. Ellison helplessly signaled to her, "You can't be so reckless in the future." Rurin, however, got sulky and stubbornly ignored Ellison. "How was I supposed to know it was hot?" Rurin complained. Following that, Ellison used isolation magic to separate the water, because once the water stopped flowing, the dirt would naturally settle, allowing the shield to contain clean hot water. Thus, a makeshift hot spring was completed. Ellison then picked up Rurin and threw her into the hot spring. Rurin, not yet reacting, thought Ellison was about to make Black Dragon hot pot. "Wait, it's just a little warm." Ellison smiled and signaled to her, "I cooled it down." Of course. Then, he too soaked in the hot spring. At that moment, Rurin asked Ellison where he had been at noon. When she learned that Ellison had gone to rescue people with an elf, she became very angry. Ellison explained that the injured people needed a doctor because he was not skilled in healing magic. An irritated Rurin declared, "I hate all races, including elves. Except for you, Ellison. I look down on everyone else." Hearing this, Ellison decided to teach her a lesson. Thus, he used a magic circle to boil water, poured the hot water into a cup, then took out a box of cocoa and had her try it. Rurin curiously asked, "What is this dark stuff?" Ellison explained, "This is a powder made from something called cocoa beans." Rurin took a sip and was surprised to find it both bitter and sweet. He further explained, "Cocoa beans might look like a simple powder, but they undergo a complex process of cultivation, fermentation, roasting, and pressing. Many people work hard so that we can enjoy it." Ellison continued, "Just like the mine collapse, although I have the power to destroy an entire mountain range, even so, I couldn't save a single injured person on my own. Without Mr. Knoll, I couldn't even get the ingredients for the restaurant. Even if I can create a large space with magic, we still need the help of others to make things go smoothly. I ultimately have to ask dwarves to help build a lair. Racial abilities and personalities may differ, but we shouldn't reject everyone because of these differences. Even dragons can't conquer the world alone." Upon hearing this, Rurin began to reflect. She understood Ellison's point but still insisted, "I will treat you differently from others." Meanwhile, Mr. Ment's mercenary group was engaged in a fierce battle with a gang of thieves, squeezing towards the edge of a cliff. Just then, Ment noticed that Miltine was in danger, but he managed to kill the robber in time. However, the bandit leader took the opportunity to launch a sneak attack from behind, but fortunately, Ment quickly dodged the attack and punched the leader, sending him flying. Unexpectedly, the leader chose to drag Ment down with him, and both fell off the cliff. This leaves Miltine in great shock. Just then, Ellison's restaurant decided not to open for the day because he had a new plan to add some milk to the coffee. For this, he decided to build a dairy farm so that he could have a stable supply of milk. After the farm was built, they also needed to catch some milk-producing animal called Berineric, which is a cow in this world. Ellison found out the specific location of the cows downstream of the Verent River, then signaled Rurin to use teleportation magic to take him there. Rurin hesitated, explaining, "My current teleportation magic can only go to places I've seen before. Last time I could go to the Count's mansion because I tracked Iron's scent." Ellison reassured her. Don't worry, I'll tell you the direction and distance. Just go by feel. Despite Ruren's reluctance, she activated the teleportation magic because she wasn't sure if the location was correct. Soon the two were above a lake, directly above the habitat of the cows. Ellison was relieved they had found the right place, and Ruren confirmed this, but she cautioned, that's great, except for the fact that we're high up in the sky. It was then that Ellison realized, Ruren, after all, is a black dragon, so why would she be afraid of the sky? He teased her, just open your wings. However, Ruren was reluctant to transform into her dragon form. Seeing this, Ellison had no choice but to cast a levitation spell. He didn't understand why Ruren hated her dragon form, seeming to have some secrets deep inside, but Ellison didn't intentionally inquire. Soon, the two safely landed on the ground. Ruren expressed that this was her first time seeing such a large lake. This is the ocean. It's normal you haven't seen it because you've always stayed in the cave. Thus, Ellison decided to catch the cows first and then play in the ocean with Ruren for a while. Hearing this, Ruren got excited and asked how many cows Ellison planned to catch, proposing a contest where the loser would do the dishes. Meanwhile, back at the restaurant, Mr. Null, Deadran, and Elena were waiting at the restaurant door, having waited from noon until midday without seeing Ellison return. Although they were very hungry, each had a craving for Ellison's hand-cooked dishes and was determined to eat his cooking. At the same time, a teleportation portal suddenly opened at the farm's location, and Ruren and Ellison emerged soaking wet, followed by a herd of docile cows. This was all Ruren's doing, as the bloodline of a black dragon could suppress many animals. Next, all that was needed was to build the barn. When Ellison returned to the restaurant, he was stunned, seeing 3 people nearly starved to death at his restaurant's door. He hadn't expected them to wait until he came back. Moments later, as Mr. Knoll was devouring pork belly, everyone finally got to eat delicious food, and each was thoroughly satisfied. Knoll joked, if we hadn't eaten today, there might have been 3 more graves next to the restaurant. Meanwhile, Ruren started dishwashing. At that moment, Mr. Knoll inquired about Ellison's plans for building the meadow, noting that such a large meadow would definitely need helpers. Ellison nodded in agreement, acknowledging that the meadow indeed needed someone to look after the grass and take care of feeding, and he planned to hold interviews for this purpose. Hearing this, Mr. Knoll also became interested and said to Ellison, I heard Elena can discern a person's inner intentions, and Deadran has learned how to find trustworthy people. Elena and Deadran confirm these facts, and I've also met all kinds of guys while working as a mercenary. We should give you something in return for making you work on your holiday. Ellison, a bit confused, asked, something in return? We'll do the job interviews for you. The next day, when Ellison posted a hiring notice for the meadow, in less than half a day, the restaurant's entrance was lined with people coming for interviews. Now, let's start with the first one. The first candidate to enter was a young man, but Mr. Knoll immediately dismissed him upon seeing his lack of energy. The second person to enter was a handsome young man, who made a very good impression on Mr. Knoll. Just then, the young man noticed Elena standing aside and instantly had some inappropriate thoughts. Elena immediately declared failure. When Mr. Knoll learned of his thoughts, he too became very angry. Next, a candidate with management experience walked in. A man with 30 years of pasture management experience came for an interview, promising that he could make the meadow the best in town. Hearing this, Deadran put him to the test. What are your plans for the future development of the Barinrix? What are the sales incentives for dairy products? And how do you handle diseases and injuries? The barrage of questions stunned the man, and before the trio could announce the result, he left on his own, muttering, so you were all crazy. Ruren also didn't expect that finding a worker would be this difficult. Then another interview commenced. Mr. Knoll immediately became angry upon seeing the next candidate enter. Failure. You are the one who tried to start a fight in my meat shop, and you looked at me with weird eyes. Your response is not satisfactory. His gaze is too weak. He's staring at me. They are just animals. How dare you say that? Failed. After interviewing everyone, they failed to find a suitable worker, which made Ellison start to doubt his life and even wondered if the salary offered in the recruitment notice was too low. Just as Ellison felt hopeless, the door was pushed open again, and surprisingly, Miltine walked in, which puzzled Mr. Knoll. I heard Ment was assigned to protect a caravan. What are you doing here? Miltine then recounted the recent encounter of the mercenary group. While protecting the caravan, they faced bandits, and Ment accidentally fell off a cliff during the battle. Hearing this, Mr. Knoll immediately became worried and asked, how is he now? His external wounds have healed, but his legs suffered severe damage, and he has retired from mercenary work. Ellison suggested, you should have Elena take a look. Maybe she can help him recover. At that moment, Ruren seriously asked, why do you want to work here? Ellison immediately signaled Ruren, you can't ask people that under these circumstances. Ruren, looking aggrieved, explained, I was just curious. After hesitating for a moment, Miltine said, I'm looking for something I can do in the future because I hope to work together with him later. This statement startled everyone. Mr. Knoll incredulously asked, are you saying you've fallen in love with him? How old are you this year? Later, it was revealed that Miltine was 29 years old, and there was a 13-year age gap between the two. Miltine said she didn't mind. Elena explained, in Elven society, this is normal, but among humans, indeed, the gap is a bit large. However, Miltine had made up his mind. I'm no longer a mercenary. If I can't work here, I'll starve on the streets. Rurin, satisfied with her resolve, said, I accept you working here. Miltine was very grateful for this. Then Ellison asked, does Mr. Met know about this? Miltine replied that she planned to tell Met once the meadow produced its first cup of milk and invite him to work together, as it was Met who had taught her everything, and now she wanted to be like Mr. Ment. Elena admired Miltine's determination while Ellison was already planning the next dish. When we get our first milk, I've decided on the dish to make when I visit Mr. Ment. I look forward to working with you. Thank you. I look forward to working with you too. The next day, Ellison was working when Miltine arrived at the meadow early in the morning, asking what to do next. Ellison instructed her to let the Barinerics out of the fence to graze. Miltine didn't expect the usually aggressive Barinerics to become so docile, thinking some special magic was used. Unexpectedly, one of the Barinerics simply turned and knocked her down. Right, it's not fun if you succeed on your first try. She had to exert all her strength just to manage barely. Even with all her strength, Miltine couldn't make the Barinerics move. Instead, she was kicked and sent flying by one. Ellison helplessly prayed for her from the side. Miltine, hang in there. The hard work on the farm continued. If these Barinerics were wild, their hooves would wear down naturally during movement and wouldn't require care, but the domesticated Barinerics needed regular hoof maintenance. It's for your own good. Just stay calm. But she was sent flying again. A few days later, Miltine was so exhausted she collapsed on the ground, having spent days busy only to find she couldn't even manage the grazing properly, let alone milking. She couldn't help but lament, at this rate, I'll be fired before I even start working with him. Just then, a Barineric licked her cheek, then all the Barinerics gathered around her. Miltine's eyes fell on a canister nearby, thinking perhaps she could try milking now. Moments later, Miltine returned to the restaurant jubilantly with the canister, having finally harvested her first labor fruits. Even Ellison didn't expect her to succeed in milking so quickly. Ellison commendably said to her, well done. Now it's time to prepare for the feast. What are we making? Miltine asked curiously. A special dish for Mr. Ment. A pizza with lots of cheese, Ellison said while preparing a huge pot for the milk. He first explained, pasteurize the milk at low temperature for 30 minutes, making sure not to let it boil. Then slightly lower the temperature and add vinegar to make the milk curdle. It would be better if we had rennet, but here we must make do with vinegar. After the milk curdled, Ellison cut the curd, separated it from the whey, soaked the curd in salt water and hot water, stretched and folded it during this process to remove residual air bubbles and excess moisture, then shaped it. Miltine was seeing the cheese-making process for the first time and was full of curiosity. Ellison then signaled to her, next, we need to prepare dishes that complement the cheese. What gift have you prepared for Mr. Ment? Ellison suddenly asked, causing Miltine's face to flush red. Though she wasn't ready, she knew this was an opportunity to express her feelings. Ellison then started boasting about himself. Back in the day, women would line up wherever I went. Miltine curiously asked, so, have you had any romantic experiences? This question stumped Ellison, as he actually had no romantic experience. None. They just line up and left. Nevertheless, Ellison encouraged her, as long as you are sincere, Mr. Met will surely feel it. Just then a knock sounded on Ment's room door, and he was embarrassed to find everyone had located his residence, apologizing awkwardly. I didn't mean to keep it a secret from everyone. Mr. Knoll was very upset. You should have told us sooner. Then, Ellison introduced Elena to Ment, saying she could be a great help. Ment, curious, asked, how did you find out about this? Only the mercenary group knows my location. He quickly guessed it was Miltine who had told them. Meanwhile, Elena used Elven magic to treat Ment's leg, and soon he was able to stand up. Elena explained, full recovery might be difficult, but this should help with the healing. Ment noticed that Miltine was acting particularly strange today and asked her, do you have something to tell everyone? Miltine found it harder to speak than she had imagined, with everyone watching intently. To ease the awkward atmosphere, Miltine changed the subject. You must be hungry, right? Shall we have a meal first? Maybe he'll understand my feeling when he sees the food, she thought to herself. Then, she brought out a heart-shaped dish. A heart-shaped pizza appeared before everyone, and Ment was seeing such food for the first time. Miltine explained, this dish is called pizza, specially made for Mr. Ment, with a lot of help from Ellison. It looks pretty good, doesn't it? Unexpectedly, Ment directly picked up a slice, breaking the heart shape apart. Ellison jokingly added, it's made with cheese. Ment tasted it. The sweet pizza with a subtle creamy flavor was very rich. He gave a positive review of Miltine's culinary effort. At that moment, Miltine could only swallow her tears while eating her own pizza, understanding that her plan to express feelings through food had failed. In no time, the pizza was devoured by everyone. Then, Miltine asked, what do you plan to do in the future? Ment said he hadn't decided yet. Miltine took the opportunity to invite him. Would you like to work with me at Ellison's ranch? Mr. Ment was stunned. You are running a ranch too? It's a recent development, but I'd be happy if you would agree. Miltine, you're already working there. What about your mercenary job? Miltine explained that she had quit her mercenary job because she wanted to prepare for their future together. Everyone affirmed Miltine's courage, but Mr. Ment sensed something was amiss. He sighed lightly. It looks like I need to work on recovering. Since you're no longer a mercenary, why not find a boyfriend? This comment left everyone agape. Ment continued, at your age, it's time to think think about finding a boyfriend. Mr. Knoll couldn't help himself. How did this happen? Where did we go wrong? Then, Mr. Ment thanked Ellison, asking when should he start working, which left Ellison puzzled. You can start slowly after completing your rehabilitation. After dinner, Miltine left, and everyone was worried about her state. Miltine signaled to them not to worry. I'm fine now. She then said goodbye to everyone, but as she turned around, tears were already streaming down her face. Mr. Knoll was very puzzled. How could Ment not understand her? Elena signaled to both. He understands Miltine's intentions. You can see it in his eyes. Meanwhile, Mr. Ment sat alone in the living room, unsure how to deal with everything. The next day, in downtown Gre City, a parade is underway to announce the arrival of the esteemed nobles of the Ruben Empire. Knights stand on guard as they welcome the arrival of Crown Prince Leon Harris. As he waves and smiles, a thought crosses his mind. It's always peaceful here, no matter when you visit, and it's very unimpressive. His handsome features draw the attention of many women, who blush and avert their gazes when his eyes meet theirs. Hearing this, he smiled, giving them his attention. Meanwhile, Duke Porgo Timiran inquires what the Grake family is doing. The question is answered by Timiran Duke's family chief magician, Medran. The Lord's castle is preparing to welcome you. The Duke can't help but express his disbelief. The Crown Prince and a Duke are coming to visit, and they're welcomed only once they reach the castle. This is presumptuous. Meanwhile, at the Lord's castle, Deadran is nervously inquiring about his father's condition from the butler. The butler tells him that the Count's health is not good, and as the heir, Deadran must face this situation himself. As the door slowly opens, Deadran gathers his courage and walks in. The prince, seeing this, greets him with a smile, and Deadran pays him the highest respect. Deadran expresses regret that the Count couldn't come to meet them personally. That's a pity. If I remember correctly, the Count was close to Marquis Saran. Prince Leon asks, yes, but I haven't seen Marquis Saran in a while. Prince Leon then shares that he heard that Marquis Saran isn't in good health either. Just then Sir Porgo discontentedly says, in that case, it means it's time to change the lord of the castle. He then hints to Deadran to join his faction, causing Deadran's heart to jump. He was not prepared to answer these complex questions yet. Sir Porgo changes the topic. Due to the large-scale flood control plans and the civil war in the neighboring kingdom, we plan to raise the taxes in Gre City. If you accept my earlier proposal, the situation might be different. Is this question also difficult to answer? Faced with Sir Porgo's relentless pressure, Deadran feels overwhelmed and then loudly says, I have prepared a dinner party. I will give you an answer then. Hearing about the dinner, the prince immediately becomes interested. Do you think you can satisfy someone who has dined in the palace? Deadran confidently replies, because there's a great restaurant in Gre City. Meanwhile, it's lunchtime. Miltine puts down the feed she was holding. Today's lunch is fried rice with eggs. At this moment, Ruren can hardly wait, but she hasn't started eating because she feels her portion seems to have gotten smaller. Just then, the restaurant's door is suddenly kicked open, and a group of soldiers rush in, appearing before everyone. This confuses Ellison, as he does not recognize these people. Meanwhile, the soldiers slowly draw their swords. Are you the owner of this restaurant? Ellison nods affirmatively, but also politely reminds, please put away your sword. Seeing this, Ruren, enjoying her meal, gestures to Ellison, do you need help? In that instant, a soldier's sword is already at Ellison's neck, threatening, kneel down now, or you won't see tomorrow's sun. Hearing this, Ellison is very angry and coldly says, this is my final warning, get out of my restaurant. Just as the soldiers are about to act, a voice stops them. Who told you to do this? The soldiers immediately cease their actions. When the leader removes his helmet, it turns out to be Ellison's former comrade-in-arms, Duriant. Duriant immediately reprimands the soldiers who had misbehaved. As the two catch up, Duriant reminisces about the old days, especially about a time when his negligence almost led to the annihilation of their forces. Fortunately, Ellison appeared in time to save the situation and declined the Empire's reward. What touched Duriant the most was that Ellison gave all the prize money to his wife. Duriant had pursued personal glory at the expense of his family, and Ellison's gesture deeply moved him. When he learned that Ellison had opened a restaurant in Grake, he rushed over immediately and prepared a plan to make Ellison's restaurant the best in Grake. Upon hearing this, Ellison was also taken aback. I'm going to close down all the restaurants in Gre City except yours. That's how your restaurant becomes the best. A perfect plan. Hearing this, Ellison thought to himself, has he gone mad? Suddenly, Duriant drew his sword and charged off, signaling the soldiers to follow, leaving Ellison puzzled and unaware of what was happening. Meanwhile, as the prince was on his way to the restaurant, Porgo reminded him to bring a guard escort. Before he could finish, several dark weapons were thrown at the prince. Fortunately, they were intercepted by a magical barrier from their chief mage, Medran. Who are you? The Duke angrily shouted while Duriant was also in shock at what was happening. Then, a group of assassins appeared in front of the squad. Hand over the crown prince, then we'll let the rest go. The Duke signaled to Medran, don't let a single one live. Medran slowly took off her hat, as you wish. Hearing this made the assassins unsettled, but their leader still signaled to continue the attack. The next second, the assassins charged at Medran, who raised her hand and cast a high-level magic spell, instantly overturning the ground, causing the assassins to scatter. The prince exclaimed, Medran is the Empire's most formidable mage. With her, I'm not even afraid of dragons. Medran humbly responded, you flatter me, your highness. Deadran, witnessing all this, was also utterly shocked, realizing that the rumors about Medran were indeed true. She is the only 7th class archmage capable of combating an entire army on her own. That moment, Ellison was magically restraining Deadran, who had a bad habit of running off excitedly without looking back. Ellison made him stand up and took this opportunity to ask him what he was planning to do at other restaurants. Deadran confessed that he was going to visit all the nearby restaurants and will tell them their food had worms. Hearing this, Ellison was stunned and responded, that's creative, but it's not what I wanted you to do. Deadran felt very sorry. Just then, the sound of horse hooves approached and the soldiers immediately tensed up. Seeing this, Deadran also saluted the approaching figure. The prince was surprised to see Deadran there, and Deadran explained, I heard there's a good restaurant here, so I wanted to try it. The prince smiled, indicating he needn't be so formal, and added that he wasn't alone. Then, the prince greeted Ellison, are you the owner of this restaurant? Ellison nodded in response, yes, welcome. Ellison couldn't help but wonder why a prince would come to the city of Gre. Meanwhile, the prince noticed Ellison's old-style mage robe. Ellison explained, I once served in the mage corps, but it's been a long time since I retired. The prince was incredulous, asking, if that's the case, then you must know my guard mage. She used to be part of the corps. Then, the prince signaled Medran to come and see her junior. At this moment, Porgo felt very displeased, believing that coming to this small restaurant was a waste of time. Meanwhile, Medran broke out in a cold sweat, breathing heavily as if she had seen a horrifying creature. It took a reminder from Porgo for her to come back to her senses, hurriedly dismounting. Medran, do you recognize the mage before you? The prince asked. Medran stammered, hesitant to answer directly, as she needed to be cautious. She knew that if she angered Ellison, everyone present could be in danger. At that moment, Ellison offered a friendly smile. I don't think we've met, have we? Medran quickly nodded. Indeed, it's a pleasure to meet you. Medran understood that Ellison saying he didn't know her might be to avoid trouble. She reminded herself, in this situation, I should try to keep everything normal. Then, Medran added, this restaurant will host a dinner for His Highness. It should be a great honor for any chef. Ellison nodded. Of course, the guests will be pleased. Then, the prince and his entourage entered the restaurant, praising its cleanliness. Ellison, smiling, said, sorry, it's not as grand as the palace. Then, Ellison changed the topic and asked boldly, how did your highness find this place? The prince responded with a smile, I heard that the food at this restaurant could even astonish the royal family. Ellison looked towards Deadran and instantly understood the reason. It seems my peaceful life is about to be disrupted again. It turned out that Deadran, due to his father's health condition, had been caught up in a power struggle and had to seek Ellison's help. Ellison also noticed Porgo, understanding that he was one of those with the strongest desire for power in the palace. Ellison then turned his gaze to the prince, his eyes suddenly sharp, thinking to himself, I cannot let this go. At that moment, the prince commented on the restaurant, we have come all this way to this restaurant out of faith in you, great boy, so shouldn't you have faith in us too? The prince then proposed a bet. If you can't produce a dish that amazes me, Deadran will have to run around Gre City naked. Hearing this, Deadran was shocked, but Ellison signaled him not to worry. The upcoming dishes will definitely surprise you. Then the bet is confirmed, the prince said with a raised eyebrow. The first appetizer, mutton mushroom soup, was quickly prepared, and the prince looked forward to it. But he knew that impressing him with one dish was not easy. After tasting it carefully, the prince gave a high appraisal but said, it's good, but it cannot be described as astonishing, as I've tasted it many times in the palace. Porgo agreed with the prince's opinion. At this moment, Ellison remained calm, smiling and saying, let's hear others' opinions. Medran nervously picked up the mushroom soup, opened it, and found that the mushrooms displayed a line of text, please give me a warm response. This startled her, making her think, isn't this a world-class problem? Despite this, she tasted the soup and bravely spoke up, displaying one of her few acts of dramatization. This soup is really delicious. I've never tasted such delicious mushroom soup before. I feel like mushrooms are growing in my stomach. This exaggerated performance slightly distorted the expressions of everyone present. This includes Deadran and also Ellison, who is stopping himself from laughing. What's going on now? Everyone wondered internally. So, shouldn't you try it again? It's so delicious, she murmured softly. Medran's unusual performance caught the prince's attention, who was very surprised. Is it really that good? He decided to taste it again, making Deadran also curious. Although the mutton mushroom soup was tasty, Deadran felt that Medran's overreaction was not just because of the soup. A mage living in the palace couldn't have not tasted this mutton mushroom soup. Who could compel a 7th level mage to do anything? Deadran pondered silently, slowly turning his gaze towards Ellison, while at this moment, Ellison let out a light chuckle. After tasting again, the prince said it wasn't different from what's served in the palace. It tastes similar to what we have in the palace. Porgo jokingly added, I never thought you liked mutton mushroom soup this much. When we return to the palace, I'll make sure it's included in your diet. Hearing this, Medran shuddered, quickly indicating, I just particularly like the lamb soup here. However, after Medran finished the soup, another line of text appeared in the soup bowl. When you're done, please come out at the back of the restaurant. This gave Medran a fright and unintentionally spit out the soup she she was eating. The prince curiously asked Porgo, "Has Medran always been this weird when eating?" Porgo shook his head helplessly. Medran walks outside the restaurant with mixed emotions. Then she found where Ellison has been waiting for some time. She cautiously approaches, and in the next instant, a powerful soundproofing magic envelopes her. Ellison greets her with a friendly smile. "It's been a long time, Miss Medran. Your performance in there was very good. However, you shouldn't be here because I remember warning you that we should not meet again." Medran quickly explains, "I swear, I really didn't know you lived here." Ellison then asks her why the prince has come to Gre City. "He is the prince with the worst reputation. I heard he is lascivious and not interested in power. I thought the same until I saw him today, but his performance showed me a clue. He pretends to be non-autocratic, but he knows how to use his position for personal gain. He uses his bad reputation as a shield, but in reality, he is pressuring the Lord of Gre City. I think the idea of annexing Gre City is Porgo's, but actually, it's the prince's own plan." Medran is surprised that Ellison could see through all this, but as the prince's guard mage, she firmly says, "Even if you torture me, I cannot tell you so much." Just then, a voice interrupts her. "Is that so? Even if we torture you, you wouldn't tell? Let's see if that's the case." Ruren's voice rises, instantly making Medran's legs go weak, and now her only thought is to go home. Moments later, when Medran returns to everyone, they are all very surprised to see her face pale as paper. At this moment, what the prince cares about most is the bet with Deadran. "If you can't present a surprising dish, then I win." "A dish that surprises me? Impossible, because I'm not in the mood for surprises today." Faced with the prince's mockery, Deadran remains silent. The prince suddenly becomes serious. "You're not stupid. You know what this means. Even if your father got up from his sickbed and start cooking for me, I wouldn't be surprised unless you can give me the answer I want." Under the prince's pressure, Deadran doesn't choose to submit. He firmly says, "A lord is a position of responsibility, and I have the right to let the people make their own choices. I can endure my own humiliation, but most importantly, I believe in this restaurant. If I lose, I will run naked around the city." The sun is setting and Ellison finally serves today's main dish. The prince signals Ellison, "This dish is of great importance. You seem very confident." Ellison smiles slightly, affirming. When Ellison lifts the lid, a lump of mud appears before everyone, making Porgo full of doubt. "Are we really eating this?" Ellison takes out a hammer, dismissing Porgo's assumption. With gentle taps from Ellison, the leaves inside reveal themselves, and a deliciously steaming palenque appears before everyone. The prince curiously asks Ellison how he achieved this. Ellison explains, "We don't usually cook them, but since you came here, I've prepared it for you. This dish looks like an unremarkable lump of mud from the outside. If a stranger sees it, they would ask, 'What is this dish?' That's because it hides itself for the element of surprise, but they can't discern it because they don't know what this dish looks like." The prince detects a deeper meaning in Ellison's words. He then raises an eyebrow and asks, "What exactly are you trying to say?" Ellison looks at the mud in his hand, casually says, "Nothing much, just a simple dish. Its profound meaning is about mass expulsions of central nobility to strengthen royal power, just like what His Highness is pretending to be, harmless and disinterested in power." At this, Porgo's cutlery drops to the floor, and Medran keeps her head down, not daring to speak. Even Deadran's eyes widen in shock. "Of course, I shouldn't give away the secret by poking at this dish. Isn't that right, Your Highness?" Prince Leon cannot answer and is utterly shocked at what he hears. "Of course, I shouldn't give away the secret by poking at this dish. Isn't that right, Your Highness?" Prince Leon cannot answer and is utterly shocked at what he hears. Ellison continues, "The Empire lost control of its city due to war against the dragons. With the Emperor's power at an all-time low, the Crown Prince had to find a way to survive." Ellison put down the mud and moved the two pieces closer, and the method he chose was to spread his authority. This agitated Prince Leon. "Our prince, you portray yourself as disinterested in governance, harmless. However, it is just a disguise. You are secretly assembling an army, ready to strike back at those nobles, to take back the lost throne." At this moment, Porgo's face turns livid, and he angrily questions, "Do you know what you are talking about?" But Ellison did not heed him, continuing to say, "What would be the consequences if this situation continues to spread? His Highness the Prince would be stripped of his title." Porgo could no longer bear it, immediately interrupting Ellison and calling Deadran and commanding him to take control of Ellison. "I want this restaurant to cease to exist nor its owner." This made Deadran very uncomfortable, wondering internally, what exactly has Ellison done? Ellison chuckled, "Do you think getting rid of me will solve your problem?" Porgo then threatened, "I suppose a man without a tongue can't speak." Seeing that Deadran hesitated to act, Porgo immediately ordered Medran to bring Ellison to his knees. This frightened Medran terribly, and she quickly said, "Sir, I can't do that." Porgo was confused by their fear. He was unconvinced and was about to order the soldiers to take action immediately, but the prince seemed to sense something and suddenly began to devour the palenque, completely abandoning his princely demeanor. This scene stunned everyone present. "What's going on?" everyone wondered internally, while the prince continued to relish the food, repeatedly praising it. "You all should try it too." However, Porgo still refused to sit down. Seeing this, the prince slammed his fist on the table, roaring, "Sit down immediately." This was the first time Porgo saw the prince so angry, and although he did not understand what was going on behind the scenes, he began to taste the food along with the prince. After eating, the prince asked Porgo, "How does it taste? Didn't it surprise you?" Understanding the subtext of the prince's words, Porgo nodded. "Of course, the taste is very good. It seems the conclusion is clear. If I said I wasn't amazed by such a delicious dish, then I would be lying. Congratulations, you've won the bet." Hearing this, Deadran was very happy, and the prince thanked Ellison and then prepared to leave the restaurant. "I had planned to stay here another day, but now that I've got the Baron of Gre's answer, it's time to return to the palace. I won't bother you anymore. Gather the first order. We'll be going back to the capital," said the prince while walking out the door. Ellison and Deadran watched them exit the restaurant. Just then, Ellison released a sigh of relief. "That went well. I'm glad we won the bet." Seeing this, Deadran was very curious. "Although I won the bet, I really don't understand what's going on." Ellison gestured to him not to worry. "You don't have to understand yet. All I can tell you is that as long as I'm here, you don't have to worry about that kind of external pressure. Alright, let's eat now. We can't waste the food." On the way back, the prince's entourage was unusually quiet, the atmosphere somewhat eerie. Deadran also did not understand what had happened. Feeling that something was not right, the prince suddenly broke the silence, asking Medran, "Is that cook the person you mentioned?" Medran nodded, confirming, "Yes, he's an extremely terrifying being." The prince nodded, as expected. "A person whom even nobles and knights dare not disrespect. Indeed, is a variable." Hearing this, Porgo tensed up. Even Medran and Deadran felt endangered in his presence. The prince agreed with Porgo's view. "What have we done so far to increase our power?" Pressuring the Templars and Medran breathing down their necks and eliminating competition. But Prince Leon pauses as he remembers how Deadran trusts the restaurant and continues the bet. "If it was me in that situation, would I have continued with the bet?" Porgo fell silent. "Would I be able to trust my life and reputation to some peasant?" But the prince already had his answer. "This time, let's start from scratch. The path we have to take is more dangerous than being stuck naked on the streets." A few days later at the restaurant, Ellison felt relieved as he finally completed the construction of the barn. However, just then, a Barineric walked by and gently kicked the barn. In an instant, the entire barn collapsed into a pile of rubble. Ellison was momentarily stunned. The house I had so painstakingly built turned out to be so fragile. Ellison sighed, realizing it might be due to his lack of building knowledge. Meanwhile, Ruren curiously asked, "Isn't the restaurant built by you?" Ellison was flustered. "I only put up the sign." "Of course, the contractors built the building. It looks like we need to go somewhere." This made Ruren even more puzzled. "Where to?" Ellison replied, "To a place where the greatest building craftsman lives." Just then, the two arrived at the foot of the Miliarek Mountains. Meanwhile, the red dragon Serena, near her cave, sensed someone approaching and muttered discontentedly, "A kindred spirit." Finally, "I was bored. I'll make you realize whose territory you are trespassing on." She was excited by the arrival of outsiders, having been bored for a long time. Just as she was getting up to meet them, she accidentally stepped on a crown on the ground. The pain shot through her body, causing her to halt abruptly. "Damn thing," Serena cursed. Ellison and Ruren, due to the issue with the barn construction, embarked on a journey to find a dwarven craftsman. Ruren curiously asked, "Can't we just find a human craftsman?" Ellison shook his head and said, "We need a sturdy warehouse, and in terms of construction, no one can compare to the dwarves." "Are they that good? Then their village must be pretty cool. It's been a while since I visited. It's somewhere around here." They quickly reached a cave entrance, found it, but to Ellison's shock, the place was completely different from his last visit. Decayed and abandoned. Even the guards at the entrance were gone. Ellison's heart sank as he noticed many soldiers' skeletons scattered on the ground. "Damn it, it looks like someone came here first." Just then, in an instant, Serena appeared at the cave entrance, seeing Ellison and Ruren, and scoffed, "I thought someone powerful was coming, but it's just a child. What a disappointment." At that moment, Serena continued to mock an angry Ellison. "A mere human dares to step into my territory?" Meanwhile, Ellison calmly asked her, "Did you do this to the dwarves here?" Serena was momentarily stunned by the question and arrogantly replied, "You should at least respect the great dragon race. Answer me. You're not any better than a pest. I can see you're not in your right mind." The next second, Serena spewed a stream of dragon fire at Ellison. Ruren immediately signaled Ellison to dodge. Human magic is ineffective against dragons, but Ellison showed no intention of dodging, his eyes filled with fierce determination. He then activated a basic level 9 spell, instantly absorbing Serena's dragon fire into the barrier. Serena was dumbfounded. What the hell is going on? Before she could react, Ellison raised his hand and unleashed a powerful spell called Plasma Break that knocked the huge red dragon back several meters, even piercing through her tough scales. "Are you really human? How did you?" She was shocked and then thought, "It must be that man, the one who killed all the red dragons single-handedly. But why are you with a black dragon?" she said while she transformed into her human form. Ellison sighed softly. "First, answer my earlier question." Seeing Ellison preparing to cast another spell, Serena quickly begged for mercy. "It wasn't me. It was already like this when I got here. It turns out, the area was already in ruins before Serena arrived." Serena explained, "That's why I haven't received any tribute." Seeing that Ellison clearly didn't believe her, she said she saw a big gate that was blocked, but she didn't get to check it herself. Ellison then asked, "Where did she see it? If you want to know how to get there, I can personally take you. Isn't it more interesting to be with me than with that child. Just as her words fell, Ruren, furious, delivered a dragon's kick. Ellison is mine. Serena's legs was injured again, causing her to kneel in pain. Where is it located? Ellison asked coldly. Serena trembled and pointed forward, and Ruren, seeing this scene, felt very pleased. Moments later, Ellison and Ruren arrived at the dwarven town, but it had already become ruins. Ruren, observing the marks of battle on the buildings, concluded clearly this was the work of dragons. Ellison nodded in agreement, but he mentioned that he couldn't yet confirm it was Serena's doing. Meanwhile, a huge iron door appeared in front of them, covered in dragon bite marks, obviously very sturdy. Just as Ellison was about to break the door, a voice suddenly came from behind it. Please go back, unlawful intruders. You are not welcome in this place. Ellison immediately asked, what exactly happened here? The dwarf paused, then angrily replied, it was a red giant dragon that destroyed this place. Upon hearing this, Ruren burst into rage. I knew it was her. That punk. Ellison grabbed Ruren to prevent her from acting impulsively. Before that, let's hear him out. He turned and asked, was it really Serena who did this? From the marks on the door, it seems like several red dragons launched the attack. Dragons, the strongest of all living beings. Ellison then whispered to Ruren that he already had a plan in mind. Ruren, puzzled, asked, what are you thinking about? Ellison smiled slightly. A peaceful solution. From the dwarf's words, they learned that the great door had been closed for a year. Ellison knew that many things had happened a year ago, and it wasn't strange for such issues to arise in this period. His biggest concern now was the dwarf's food issue. Resources were limited, and without resupply, they would eventually run out. Are you sure you won't open the door for us? Ellison asked. I say this because I want to help you, but the dwarf was very wary, seemingly unwilling to trust strangers. What if you are allies of the red dragons? This angered Ruren, who then began a furious tirade. Seeing this, Ellison helplessly covers her mouth, calmly stating, all right, we will respect your decision. At that moment, Ellison gestured for Ruren to bring over the backpack, and then he took out a frying pan. The journey back is long. We need to fill our stomachs first. The dwarves were stunned, puzzledly asking, why cook at the door of all places? Ellison began preparing lunch on his own, while Ruren took out a string of sausages from the backpack. Seeing this scene, the dwarves curiously asked, what is that? Ellison slowly explained, this is called sausage, made by stuffing minced meat and spices into casings, essential food for home travel. It only needs simple roasting to emit a rich aroma that stimulates the appetite. The scent of the sausage lingered far in the enclosed space, and the dwarves inside began to grow restless. That's true. We get to smell this delicious smell longer then. Ruren quickly understood this was exactly Ellison's plan. Ellison said to the dwarves inside the door, these items were originally brought as gifts for you, but considering the current situation, it's impossible now. However, I do want to know what exactly happened to the dwarves. Would that be too much to ask for? Seeing the dwarves still hesitating, Ellison decisively put away the sausages, took out a can of beer from his bag, and said with a smile, actually, it's a pity. I salted these sausages to preserve them as long as possible. It goes along perfectly with beer. At this moment, the dwarves were already drooling. Just then, the door that had been sealed for a year slowly opened. Ellison's lips curled up slightly, thinking, I'm really sorry. I had to resort to such measures. Looking at the sausages sizzling in the pan, the dwarves' saliva was practically dripping. Seeing this, Ellison knew their food supplies were seriously low. He smiled and cautioned, you must be starving, but be careful not to burn yourselves. Just tasting a bite, the dwarves felt revitalized. One remarked, who knew we'd eat such food again? Although it's not ideal to drink beer on an empty stomach, the dwarves have a high tolerance for alcohol, and the alcohol content did not affect them. Then, Ellison noticed a dwarf nearby and asked, is there a dwarf called Gultazar there? Upon hearing this, the dwarf was startled and nervously asked, how do you know that name? It turned out Ellison and Gultazar were old friends, and the sausages were actually a gift for him. Moments later, Ellison was inside the dwarven cave, and observing the area, he noticed only about 20 to 30 dwarf households remained. How could they have ended up like this? Ellison wondered. Soon, Ellison reached the end of the cave. After a soldier announced his presence, a weak voice came from behind a curtain. Come in. It's been a while. Gultazar. The speaker was the current leader of the dwarves, Gultazar. It really has been a while. At the same time, he noticed Ruren behind Ellison as her aura felt familiar. Seeing the leader so respectful towards Ellison, the soldiers couldn't help but be curious about their identities. Ellison straightforwardly asked, tell me, what exactly happened here? Why has a perfectly good dwarf settlement turned into ruins? Gultazar paused, then finally revealed the truth. Red dragons had attacked them. Faced with a massive power disparity, only a few dwarves survived. Ellison followed up, what are the features of those red dragons? Do they have red hair and horns that grow backward? Gultazar, agitated, covered his forehead. Not just one. We were attacked by a group of red dragons. Thinking of the bite marks on the door, Ellison thought, it all seems to be true, but that makes no sense. Ellison frowned. Why would red dragons with their big egos collaborate unless something caused them to lose control? Ellison speculated that there must be something particularly enticing here to attract the red dragons. Hearing this, the soldiers were visibly shaken. Gultazar pondered for a moment, stroked his beard, then pressed a button under the table. Shortly after, a secret door appeared appeared. I have something to show you. Goltazar began to recount the history of the dwarves. In fact, the dwarves had been attacked by red dragons multiple times and had avoided extinction each time thanks to an ancient dragon bone, their protector. The noble and ancient dragon, Colored. When Ellison saw the dragon bone, he was also astonished. Judging by its size, this dragon was at least 5,000 years old. Before leaving, Colored entrusted its essence crystal to the dwarves. Colored had hidden its essence in this incredibly secure cave because it had the potential to give birth to a new dragon lord, a lord who could make all dragonkind submit. If these dragons unite under one commander and act together, no kingdom or mighty warrior can stop them. It can destroy the whole world, Goltazar explained. Rurin felt incredibly familiar with this essence because she had seen something similar as a child at her mother's. Later, her mother was confined by the dragon elders, and at that time she did not understand what this meant. Whenever she remembered these things, Rurin couldn't help but cry uncontrollably. Seeing her so upset, Ellison stepped forward to comfort her, softly saying, "I won't let anyone hurt you." Goltazar felt very sorry for this, saying quietly, "I'm sorry to have brought up some bad memories. This essence crystal often comes with sorrow and pain. Colored once tried to destroy it, but was unsuccessful." Just then, Ellison said to Goltazar, "I plan to build a lair in the city of Gre, and I hope you dwarves will join us there to establish a new dwarf village." Hearing this, Goltazar is stunned. As for the essence crystal that could birth a dragon king, I'm not interested in it. This place has already been discovered by other dragons, and they could attack at any moment, Ellison said calmly. Goltazar looked back at the dragon bone, and Ellison could see the turmoil in his heart. Knowing how important home is to dwarves, Ellison decided not to force the dwarves to follow him and left the decision to Goltazar. Then, Ellison turned to Rurin, asking with concern, "Are you feeling better now?" Rurin wiped the tears from her eyes, asking, "Are we just going to leave that essence crystal unattended?" Ellison reassured her with a smile, "Don't worry, I've already cast several powerful protective spells." At this moment, Goltazar was deep in thought, unsure of what choice to make. Indeed, this place held too many memories. Just then, soldiers brought in several hot sausages, a new sight for Goltazar. The soldiers explained, "This was left by that human. The others are already eating it. I told them to wait, but they couldn't resist it." Seeing the dwarves immersed in the joy of food, Goltazar felt ashamed, as it had been a long time since he'd seen them laugh so freely. He wondered to himself, was I really wrong? This reminded Goltazar of what Colored had said when he departed. At that time, Colored had asked Goltazar, "How do you find this cramped space?" Goltazar hadn't understood Colored's meaning at the time and replied, "Sir Colored, this place might be too small for you, but for us dwarves, it's vast enough." Hearing this, Colored smiled. "I wonder how you've managed to survive." He then took out an essence, solemnly handing it to Goltazar. Colored had said to Goltazar, "But if I am no longer here one day, you will become the target of all dragons. So, when I die, please take the dwarves and leave this place." At the time, Goltazar didn't understand what Colored meant, asking, "Are we to abandon you in our homeland?" Colored waved his hand and laughed, indicating not to worry. "By then, I'll just be a pile of bones." "Don't say such things," Goltazar nervously answered. Then Colored became serious. "Listen, if no one alive remembers me in this place, it will all be meaningless. So, survive. The dead should not hold back the living. My existence is not meant to send dwarves to their demise." Goltazar didn't understand the meaning of Colored's words. "Don't you know how much you are already helping us?" Seeing the dwarves' smiles reappear, Goltazar finally understood the message Colored wanted to convey as he left. He felt deeply apologetic. It was his stubbornness that had caused everyone so much suffering. Just as Ellison and Rurin were about to leave, a voice made them stop in their tracks. Ellison turned around to see that the dwarves were fully armed, ready to follow him to build a new dragon lair. "We will follow you. Please accept us." The scene shifts as the dwarves arrive at the cave Rurin had dug, solving the problem of constructing the dragon's lair. Ellison hadn't expected the dwarves to start working immediately upon arriving. Goltazar smiled at him and said, "Don't worry, although we've faced many hardships, the dwarves are still strong and capable." Then, Goltazar whispered to Ellison, "It's just that everyone was craving sausages." Ellison smiled, indicating he would take care of the food. Then, Goltazar solemnly took off the essence ring he was wearing on his hand, ready for a new beginning. Watching the busy dwarves, Rurin also felt hopeful. However, the only remaining issue was that essence crystal. Seeing this, Ellison paused and asked, "Do you want to absorb it?" Rurin, in shock, shouted, "Don't joke about this." Then she punched Ellison. "Then I'll keep it safe for now. The birth of another dragon lord is absolutely not allowed." Ellison agreed with Rurin's view and mentioned that they still had an important matter to handle. Meanwhile, Serena was still soothing her injured leg, not expecting to be so unlucky. Just then, she heard noises from afar and said, "Who is it? Is that you, Jard? Get lost. I have nothing left to tell you." But when she saw who it was, she couldn't even sit still on her throne. It turned out that Ellison and Rurin had only come to gather some information, but now they felt it was unnecessary. He asked, "You said you never received gifts, but why is your lair full of shiny things?" Serena, frustrated, didn't expect to encounter these two formidable figures. "I already told you everything earlier. Go away. Why is it always me? Who is Jard? Did you attack the dwarves' mine with Jard?" Ellison suspected she might be the one who attacked the dwarves, but Serena awkwardly revealed revealed the truth. It turned out that Serena's ex-boyfriend often came here to see her, and she mistook him for someone else, leading to the earlier misunderstanding. Ellison was stunned and sighed. It seems I was mistaken. Serena said she had only settled here for half a year and had never encountered a group of dragons. Ruren still remained skeptical and asked, "Then what's with these gold coins on the ground?" Serena clenched her lips and snapped her fingers, and the coins on the ground instantly vanished. "So all of these were illusions?" Ruren asked. Serena burst into tears, pleading, "If you're still not happy, just take everything here away." The two returned to the restaurant but gained nothing from the attack on the dwarves. It seems that it really had nothing to do with Serena, but luckily Ellison still had that essence crystal, which seemed to have some connection to the dragon's plans. Just then, the doorbell suddenly rang, and Mr. Ment and Elena walked in. Ellison noticed that Mr. Ment's cane was missing and inquired about it. Mr. Ment nodded, thanking Elena for her help, which allowed him to get rid of the cane. "I didn't do much." His will was more impressive, which resulted in his fast recovery. "Still, it's because he trusted you, just like the rest of us." Ruren just listening at the side. Then, Ellison asked about the situation at Elena's clinic, whether it was as usual. Elena happily reported that with the help of Nellen and some miners, the clinic was running very smoothly, and no one dared to feign illness anymore. Ellison knew that this must have involved Mrs. Rain's participation. As they were talking, the sudden appearance of a dwarf startled Elena, who hadn't expected to see a dwarf here. Ellison was speechless and thought to himself, did they build that far already? Immediately afterward, the restaurant's main door was pushed open again. "Wooba belly," Mr. Knoll shouted, then walked in, smiling and saying, "I didn't expect everyone to be here. It looks like the restaurant is busy again." Everyone's favorite dishes were quickly served. The mushroom pizza that Mr. Ment had been longing for was finally on the table, and as he tasted a piece, he said, "I should start learning to make one for Miltine." Upon hearing this, Miltine blushed, while others enjoyed their meal, and the dwarves still liked to eat the food while drinking beer. After a busy day, Ellison could finally take a break, but only one person stood outside the window, hesitating to enter: Deadran. He didn't know how to start. Just as Deadran was about to quietly leave, the restaurant's door suddenly opened. Ellison had already sensed his presence. "Deadran, why not come in and enjoy the food with everyone?" Seeing Ellison, he nervously asks if he can make dessert as well. "Desserts? I do know how to make them." Deadran hesitated for a moment and then knelt down directly in front of Ellison. He requested Ellison's help making some desserts to make his mother smile. He was very worried that his mother might become ill, so he hoped Ellison could help make a special dessert. Just then, at the kitchen of Great Castle, Ellison was surprised to find the kitchen so large and equipped with many unexpected ingredients. Soon, he found the ingredients he needed and prepared the dessert. However, when the food was served in front of Mrs. Verna, she didn't touch it and sent it back untouched. This surprised Ellison. It was the first time in his culinary career that he had encountered such a situation. He quickly understood the reason. The stomach is an organ affected by emotions. When a person is in a bad mood, she is likely to be unable to enjoy any food. Thus, Mrs. Verna must be troubled by serious worries. Deadran also confirmed this, recalling that his mother used to love desserts the most. When Deadran was a child, Verna was a very strict mother. Since she came to Great Castle, Deadran had not seen her smile for many years. Seeing this, his father, Ridden Grake, was also very sad. At breakfast one time, they discovered Mrs. Verna's favorite food. Since Grake was under construction at the time, Ridden did not spend much time with Verna. He knew that Verna was also under a lot of stress, so she was very strict with Deadran. But Ridden just wanted Verna to be a little happier. However, over the years, Verna never confided her feelings to Ridden, and he didn't even know what food she liked. Verna was speechless. Just then, Ridden noticed her empty plate and said that it was the first time Verna had finished all her food, so he thought she liked sweets the most. That's how Deadran found out that his mother likes desserts. From that day, they ate many desserts continuously until everyone could not bear to look at sweets anymore. Eventually, Verna broke the deadlock because she too was tired of sweets. It was then that Verna finally showed a long-lost smile, which leaves Deadran and his father delighted. One day, Deadran accidentally overheard an argument behind the door, and out of curiosity, he eavesdropped. But the door suddenly opened and a man stormed out, sending Deadran flying. At the same time, Deadran recognized that the man was the Lord of Deadran City, Count Deadran. Verna reassured him not to worry because she belonged to Gre City. At the time, Deadran was young and did not pay much attention to this. In the following days, Verna was still as strict as usual, but the difference was that her face often had a smile. She was happy, and the house started to feel like a normal, warm family. However, this happy time did not last long. One morning, it abruptly ended. That day, Deadran was making desserts with his mother as usual, but no matter how Verna tried, the desserts were unsuccessful. Just as they were enjoying this happy time, the butler suddenly broke the idyllic scene with shocking news. The Lord was ill. This news left them at a loss. After the doctor's examination, no clear results were obtained, and even the Lord himself had trouble eating. Just as Deadran turned to ask his mother, he saw an expression he would never forget in his life. His mother's face was filled with sadness, anger, and helplessness. From then on, the atmosphere in the home changed dramatically. She no longer touched any dessert inserts Deadran made for her and clearly drew a line between them. Their conversations could only be conveyed through the butler, and everything Deadran did was under her surveillance. To live a peaceful life, Verna even kept her distance from Deadran. Eventually, Deadran encountered Ellison and others. Could the once beautiful family scene now be an unreachable dream? While walking back home, Ellison is full of doubts about this situation. Although there are many unclear aspects about the Lord's illness, it doesn't mean Verna must distance herself from Deadran. Could it be because Deadran is not her biological son? If that were the problem, she wouldn't have opened her heart to Deadran in the first place. Although her family arranged her marriage, it looks like she truly fell in love with the Lord later, and some secrets involved may have forced her to keep her distance from Deadran. Then Ellison's eyes widened. Could this be out of guilt? Moments later, Ellison immediately went to Rurin's room, which startled Rurin. She thought Ellison was there to scold her. He told her that he needed help with something, and then Ellison asked her two strange questions. If I suddenly became paralyzed and couldn't speak, would you be sad? Rurin nodded affirmatively. Then would you lose your appetite for sweets because of my condition? Ellison continued. This left Rurin stunned, and she responded, confused. Are you drunk? On the other side, Verna was carefully feeding the Lord, watching Ridden, who seemed like a vegetable. Verna's eyes also lost their sparkle. Just then, a voice interrupted her. It was the butler of Count Deadran. This gave Verna an ominous feeling. A moment later, Verna turned and left. Just as the door was closing, a teleportation portal suddenly appeared, and it was Ellison and Rurin. Immediately after, Ellison asked Rurin to see if there was a way to cure Ridden. However, after Rurin's careful examination, she didn't find any problems. So, Ellison turned his attention to a cabinet on the side of the room. Perhaps there were important clues in the room, and now they needed to figure out Mrs. Verna's real intentions. Just then, Ellison noticed that Ridden made a faint sound. He seemed to be hinting at something. When the two followed Ridden's gaze, they saw he was looking at a piano. After Rurin searched around, indeed, she found a strange scroll inside the piano. Obviously, this was an important document. When Ellison read the contents, he was surprised to find that it was proof of Verna embezzling taxes from Gre City. The document detailed how much tax money was embezzled. Even more shocking was who wrote it. Immediately after, Ellison signaled to Rurin, you need to make a trip to the Imperial capital now. Go there and bring one person back. Meanwhile, on the other side, Verna had gone to Count Deadran's room. Deadran was not only the lord of Deadran City, but also had another identity. He was Verna's father. After Ellison obtained the scroll of Count Deadran's crimes, he found Deadran. He then gave the scroll to Deadran. When Deadran opened the document, his face was full of shock. It recorded evidence of Verna stealing taxes from Gre City, and all these funds had gone into Count Deadran's pocket. Ellison then signaled him to keep quiet since Count Deadran is in the castle. At this moment, Deadran understood that this was why his mother had been avoiding him, but he didn't understand who had written this record. Ellison then had him look at the signature at the end of the document. Deadran could hardly believe his eyes. The confession was written by Mrs. Verna herself, but he didn't understand why she would do this. Once discovered by the Empire, she would not escape legal punishment. Ellison then cast a spell that he only used in dire situations. We can find out from now then. On the other side, Count Deadran greeted Verna with a smug look, but Verna did not want to talk to him. Count Deadran had never really treated Verna as his daughter. His smile was like a knife hidden behind his laughter. Then, he suddenly changed the topic and said, I heard Deadran welcomed His Highness the Prince and others. It seems he is a very brave child. This is quite different from what some people have told me. Hearing this, Verna had a bad feeling. It turned out that Deadran had been having people monitor Deadran's every move. Now, seeing Deadran growing up, he felt very annoyed. Does this mean I should make him like Ridden? Deadran said coldly. This statement was clearly not a consultation with Verna, but a notification. What? Verna asked while suppressing her anger. Then Deadran laughed. You didn't know, did you? It's something I did without telling you. Then she looked at Verna with a crazy smile. I'm the one who made Ridden ill by poisoning him. I'm planning on doing the same to Deadran. Hearing this, Verna was furious to the extreme. She had never thought that her own biological father would be so cruel, not even sparing his own grandson. Just then, a butler sneaks at her back, holding a rope. I didn't ask for your opinion. Through a magical sound transmission, Ellison heard Deadran's plot clearly. Mrs. Verna had written this confession intending to go down together with Deadran, but at this moment, Deadran could do nothing, and in his urgency, he planned to summon the army to attack Deadran. Seeing this, Ellison immediately stopped him. Under the current circumstances, no one will obey your orders. Deadran's people have already infiltrated the castle. Can you really trust the soldiers in this castle? And Mrs. Verna was still in their hands, and Deadran would not be foolish enough to carry poison on him. So, even if you catch him, it will be hard to prove that the poison was his doing. If this evidence is handed over, Mrs. Verna will also be implicated. Then what can I do? We need to create new evidence and find a powerful and influential person to provide reliable testimony. Just then, Rurin comes back using a portal and brings Madrine. This is the one, right? When Deadran saw Madrine, he was also surprised, and this was exactly Ellison's plan. Next, it was showtime. The next day, Mrs. Verna was already under the control of Count Deadran, and now they had to go somewhere. Verna didn't understand. She had had done everything her father asked. But why wouldn't he let Deadran go? This made Deadran laugh. How could I possibly ignore a huge threat? I was planning to wait until you had an heir before deciding to act, but after waiting so long, nothing happened. So, I decided to kill everyone and then annex Gre City. Just then, Deadran grabbed her hair, then looked down at her. It seems like you already knew I was the one who poisoned Ridden, right? Learn some acting, would you? You should have had a more surprised look when I told you I poisoned him. Then she threw her onto the floor. At this moment, Verna was desperately pleading with her father to spare Deadran. But how could her father agree? His breakfast has already been poisoned, Deadran said while opening Deadran's door. When Verna saw Deadran's lifeless eyes, her heart nearly broke, and she never expected it would end this way. You are a monster. Then tears began dropping. I'm so disgusted to share the same blood with you. Tears streamed down her cheeks, unchecked and relentless. Meanwhile, a soldier handed a document to the count, who was curious about it. But when he saw the contents, he broke into a sweat. The document detailed all the embezzled tax records that Verna had kept, but now she had no chance. Deadran looked at the document and laughed heartily, feeling as if even the heavens were helping him. As long as this evidence disappeared from the world, no one could prove his crimes. In despair, she killed her husband and son, and then committed suicide. Surely, this was a perfect story ending. At this moment, a soldier gestured to Mrs. Verna not to worry, because the perfect story ending was not like this. When Deadran thrust his dagger at Deadran, suddenly, fierce flames erupted. Simultaneously, Medran burst through the door and subdued the soldier. Seeing Medran, Deadran immediately sensed trouble. Deadran slowly rose. It's all over, Count Deadran. Seeing Deadran unharmed, Mrs. Verna's hanging heart finally relaxed. Seeing the supposedly poisoned Deadran speaking, Deadran realized he had fallen into their trap. Medran signaled Deadran to give up his futile resistance. As everything was about to be lost, Deadran reluctantly put down his weapon and attempted to explain his actions. All of this was just for self-defense, nothing more. Ellison had already anticipated that Deadran would not easily confess, so he had Medran fully prepared, even bringing the food Deadran was supposed to have. If what you say is true, eat it and prove your innocence. Hearing this, Deadran broke into a cold sweat, fully aware of the poison hidden in the food. Trembling, he picked up the bread, but in the next instant, he knocked all the food over and also spilled out what he called Verna's crimes. Deadran tried to use Verna as a shield before his death, betraying his own daughter without hesitation. At this point, Deadran interrupted him. I don't know what you're talking about. Where's the evidence of that? Deadran was instantly shaken with rage, cursing, you despicable people. Immediately, he ordered the soldiers beside him to act. However, how could ordinary soldiers contend against a powerful magician, especially the 7th level great magician Medran? Medran calmly indicated, there are some things that no one, whether a general, a noble, or even an emperor, can touch. So, it's time for this to end. Meanwhile, Darian had already led soldiers to surround the Count's mansion. If anyone still wishes to resist, let them not see tomorrow's sun. Seeing this, Deadran still did not give up, trying to persuade Medran to spare him. However, Medran ignored him, and he could only rage powerlessly. In just a moment, all soldiers laid down their weapons and surrendered. The traitors of Gre were also controlled one by one. After things settled down, Ellison approached Mrs. Verna and released her bonds. Just as she was still stunned, Deadran stepped forward to ask if his mother was injured. However, Verna dared not meet Deadran's eyes. Don't worry about me. I'm so thankful to God you're okay. Deadran then asked why she would not meet his eyes. She felt guilty for putting Gre in jeopardy and for believing Deadran, embezzling the taxes. Verna felt deep remorse for her actions, hoping Deadran would not forgive her. However, Deadran did not blame her. He knew that none of this was her fault. He was angry, but more so, he was heartbroken. Angry that Verna had hidden everything and refused to tell him. Regardless, you should have told me about your situation. I believe Father would also support you because you are our family. So, please don't bow your head. Verna did not expect that her wrong decisions had caused Deadran to endure so much. She finally understood that family was the most important. Meanwhile, at the Deadran city, Deadran, still imprisoned, continued to curse, his anger unquenched. At this moment, Deadran still harbored delusions of rising again, for he had backers in the palace. He claimed that once he was released, he would annihilate everyone who opposed him. Hearing this, Ellison coldly chuckled. Don't delude yourself anymore. You no longer have a chance. When Deadran saw Ellison able to walk on air, he broke into a cold sweat and asked, are you a mage sent by the Empire? Ellison did not answer directly, only suggesting that he look back at his own castle. In his view, such a vast castle now seemed so fragile. Look how fragile the castle that you spent your whole life building really is. Deadran's eyes widened as he watched his castle fall to the ground. He could not believe this was possible. After the crisis in Gre was resolved, Deadran invited all his friends to the Count's mansion for a long-awaited dessert feast. Mrs. Rain was full of anticipation, but Mr. Knoll seemed to have said something he shouldn't have, followed by a loud bang. Fortunately, this time without a frying pan. Rurin and Elena had never seen so many exquisite desserts before, and Mrs. Verna beside them could hardly conceal her surprise and joy. Just then, a voice interrupted everyone's merriment. To commemorate Gre's victory, there will be a special performance tonight. Everyone looked up, all faces filled with astonishment astonishment, Deadran's castle was actually floating in the air. As Ellison activated the magic, the castle gradually transformed into an energy sphere, and Deadran's lifelong efforts vanished in smoke. The more spectacular part followed. In an instant, the castle blossomed like fireworks in the sky, dispelling everyone's gloom. Verna's eyes brightened. Then she picked up the long-missed dessert, and tears of happiness couldn't stop flowing, because this was the best dinner of her life. With Ellison's help, everything finally came to a perfect conclusion. The Count Deadran affair was quickly concluded, and Mrs. Verna never expected that she could eat desserts carefree like before, because the castle in her heart had been completely destroyed. From now on, she would not avoid reality because of guilt. She had always had something buried in her heart, thinking she would never have the chance to say it, but now God had given her another opportunity to speak. Actually, her choice to marry Ridden was because she truly wanted to marry him. Deadran heard everything and was very happy about this. On the other side, seeing his castle turn into fireworks, Deadran felt as if his heart had died, for he had devoted his life to it. He even gave up his own daughter. Meanwhile, Deadran completely cleaned up Gre's spies. At the same time, he was curious whether Medran was the only one Ellison had brought along. Ellison could only smile awkwardly, explaining that it was an emergency, so he had no choice but to do so. Does Duke Tamarin have any complaints? It turns out Porgo was initially confused, but after knowing that it was Ellison's doing, he dared not say more. If he knew there was a fireworks show tonight, he would surely come by himself. Deadran sighed, knowing Ellison had always been powerful, but he hadn't expected him to be so terrifying. It is quite a spectacular sight, just like a cannon fire. Ellison continues. After this night, Gre would welcome a brighter tomorrow. The next day, Ellison was stunned after waking up, not expecting that a better tomorrow would be a torrential downpour. Ment and Miltine were still working hard when, in the next instant, Miltine was blown away by the strong wind. When Ellison learned of the situation, he immediately prohibited their outdoor activities, as it was not suitable to work outside in a storm. So, he arranged for them to help in the restaurant, as there were still many customers. Ellison then helped Rurin wipe the rain off her body to prevent her from catching a cold. Miltine looked expectantly at Mr. Ment. At that moment, a voice interrupted everyone. It's surprising that such a beautiful scene can exist in a restaurant. What a lovely sight. Ellison then looks up to see who it is. It turned out to be his old friend Venin. What's the menu for today? Moments later, a steaming bowl of chicken soup noodles was served in front of Venin. Having a warm meal in a storm might be one of life's happiest things. As the two chatted, Rurin interrupted them, holding a towel, indicating Ellison to help her dry off. Venin, standing beside them, had a complex look in his eyes, seemingly hiding many stories. Then, Venin poured himself a glass of wine and asked, "Have you ever made a decision that you regretted for a lifetime?" Upon hearing this, Ellison was suddenly stunned. Venin continued, "If time could be reversed, a decision you would never make again. That kind of decision that breaks your heart every time you close your eyes." He then sighed. "You and your wife seem to get along very well." This left Ellison dumbfounded again, and he quickly explained, "We're not what you think." Emboldened by the alcohol, Venin revealed a story buried in his heart. "Even though I'm alone now, I once loved someone. It's been 30 years since, and I can never forget the name Meal." After listening, Ellison asked, "Since you've loved her for 30 years, why haven't you confessed your feelings to her?" Venin gave a bitter smile. "Because I made a decision I regret the most. Back then, when our love was just blossoming, I thought liking each other was enough to be together. It wasn't until we grew up and she started talking about marriage that I came to my senses. Her family had already arranged everything for her." Thus, Venin finally gathered the courage to tell her, and arranged to meet her outside the city. But that evening, they did not meet each other, because that night, a fierce dragon suddenly appeared in the sky. Faced with this sudden event, Venin was scared and fled. Later, he heard that Meal was safe, but he never had the courage to find her again, feeling he was a coward. Ellison continued to listen. "I heard that Meal, who I haven't seen for 15 years, returned to Gre City a while ago." After speaking, Venin put down a few copper coins, knowing no one could understand his feelings now. Nowadays, he doesn't even have the courage to look up, because he's afraid he might meet Meal again. Just then, Rurin pretended to cough. "That person over there, please take good care of your wife." Venin then wears his cloak and says, "While leaving, take care of her so that even if she leaves tomorrow, you won't have any regrets." At night, Rurin was sleeping soundly. Ellison looked at her sleeping, sighing. Missing someone for 15 years? Has it been 150 years for Rurin? When he came to his senses, he couldn't help but mock himself for daydreaming. It seems he needs to find out more tomorrow. The next day, he found Mrs. Rain. When Mrs. Rain heard that Ellison was looking for Meal, she was very happy. It turns out Meal has a very friendly relationship with the neighbors, but recently her expression has become worried, always with a look of sadness, which made Ellison curious. Rain then continues. She also mentioned a strange question. "Have you ever made a decision that you regretted for a lifetime?" Upon hearing this, Ellison was suddenly stunned. Wasn't this what Venin had said? Mr. Venin, the one who manages the orchard. He realized there must be a misunderstanding, so he decided to learn more about Meal. Then, Mrs. Rain told Ellison everything she knew. She had chatted with Meal, who immediately noticed that Mrs. Rain was not a local of Gre, as Meal had lived in this city since she was a child. And indeed, night. As Meal had said, Mrs. Rain and Mr. Knoll had come here to escape the war. What made Mrs. Rain curious was why Meal suddenly left Gre 15 years ago. It turns out there was someone Meal could never forget. 15 years ago, they could have seen each other one last time, but unexpectedly, a fierce dragon appeared in the sky. Faced with the powerful dragon, she fled that place. Later, she learned of Venon's whereabouts from a flower vendor, which made her feel devastated. She didn't expect that her fear had driven her from that place, and since then, she no longer had the face to see Venon again. Ellison learned of the misunderstanding between the two and sorted out the sequence of events. Mrs. Rain was shocked after hearing it. The person Meal spoke of in the orchard was Venon. They both went to the agreed meeting place, but each fled separately when the dragon suddenly appeared. Both thought they had abandoned each other, causing this misunderstanding that lasted for 15 years. Mrs. Rain felt it was extremely unfair to them. They had lived with guilt for so long, all because of a misunderstanding. Ellison quickly thought of a solution. Just then, Ellison found Mr. Venon working in the orchard and told him that he had arranged a meeting with Meal and then handed him a magnifying glass to give as gift to Meal. They would reunite at the place they had once planned to meet tonight. Hearing this, Venon was suddenly flustered. Ellison reminded him that no one is without mistakes, nor can anyone predict the future, but one should not run away from the past again. You shouldn't let the same mistake happen twice. Time quickly moved to the evening, and Mr. Venon walked toward the agreed spot with a heavy heart, his mind swirling with countless questions. He was worried that Meal might not come to meet him, but he knew this was his last chance, so he refused to give up. Thus, Venon arrived at the place they had agreed on long ago, and this 15-year delayed date was finally about to begin. Reunions sometimes serve to end an outdated journey, and sometimes to pick up past regrets. Both harbored a secret they wanted to confess to each other, and Mr. Venon decided not to run away anymore. Whether it was reprimand or condemnation, he had already missed one opportunity. In the next moment, both simultaneously apologized, regretting that they hadn't met all those years ago. Leaves drifted by with the wind, adding a touch of awkwardness to the atmosphere. It turned out that neither had shown up at the agreed time for their meeting. Upon learning the ultimate truth, they couldn't help but shed tears of joy. Seeing the two reconcile, Mrs. Rain was also happy for them and was curious why Ellison hadn't told them the truth earlier. Ellison responded with a smile. It was a simple misunderstanding. Isn't it better that they resolved it themselves? After all, it troubled them for a full 15 years. With that, the two walked hand in hand back to Gre City. A few days later, they came to the restaurant together, where Venon decided to sell his long-cherished orchard to Ellison, who bought it at the highest price. Clearly, Vernon wanted to build a new house, because he had hesitated for 15 years, and this time he didn't want to leave any regrets. Now with the orchard, Ellison had just the right place to build a village for the dwarves. Ruren also agreed, as she didn't like the idea of the dwarves sleeping in the lair. At that moment, she really wanted to invite Ellison to live with her, but didn't know how to bring it up. Ellison, noticing her hesitation, suddenly remembered Vern's words. Flustered, he asked, "Should I move into the dragon's lair once the construction is finished?" Hearing this, Ruren was instantly delighted. "Are you serious?" She then insisted that Ellison couldn't back out. A season has passed. The construction of the cave was already 70% complete. Hearing this, Ruren is pleased. "Good work," Ellison said while serving Gultazar his meal. "We've still not paid back our debts. You even gave us land to build the dwarven village." At this moment, Miltine reminded Ellison that due to an increase in the Barinrik's population, they should also expand a barn. Ellison agreed with her suggestion, indicating that another hiring fair might be needed. Meanwhile, the aroma drifting from the restaurant attracted the attention of a brother and sister who hadn't eaten decent food in a long time. They came to the restaurant holding a recruitment poster of Ellison's, asking if there was a chance to apply for a job. Seeing this, Ellison was surprised because that was a flyer he had discarded not long ago. "Where did you find this?" Hearing this, Lindy became somewhat nervous, and the two hesitated to explain clearly. Ellison signaled them not to be nervous and informed them that the restaurant was preparing to make new recruitment posters. "Now we can talk while eating." Considering the cold weather, Ellison prepared some warm food for them. He first seared the wooka meat in butter to lock in the flavors. Then, in another pan, he fried onions, garlic, and mushrooms. Once they started to color, he added tomatoes and potatoes, followed by some spices, beer, and the wooka meat to cook together, without needing to add MSG to ensure the flavors remained pure. However, Ellison couldn't help but sprinkle a little MSG in the end. After simmering on low heat for a while, the delicious wooka stew was ready. Lindy incredulously scooped up a piece of meat with a spoon, not knowing how long it had been since he last ate meat. Ellison signaled them to help themselves, as he had cooked enough portions. The siblings then devoured the meal voraciously. With each bite, the wooka meat was chewy yet exceptionally tender inside, and the rich sauce made each bite spread warmth throughout their bodies. They immediately thanked Ellison, as this was the tastiest food they had ever eaten since birth. Then, Ellison asked why they wanted to work here. Lindy stated that he and his sister greatly enjoyed working with animals and felt confident they could handle the job. Afterwards, Ellison asked Elena's opinion, and she immediately sensed they were hiding something else, making the siblings nervous again. Lindy instinctively covered his own hands. Ellison reminded them that lying would cost them their job opportunity. Reluctantly, they unwrapped the bandages around their hands, revealing the clear marks of handcuffs on their wrists. This revelation shocked everyone present. "Are you guys criminals?" Matt wanted to explain, but Lindy stopped her, saying, "No." Lindy apologized for hiding their identity, but he stated they meant no harm. Knowing that hiring them might bring unwanted trouble, he turned to leave. Matt hoped he would tell Ellison the truth because they are not like criminals. Lindy responded, "Our identity as criminals can never be changed. Although I make no excuses for what happened then, I do not regret the decisions I made." Just then, Matt asked indifferently, "Don't you regret not finishing the food?" This stunned Lindy, who hesitated for a moment and then laughed, saying, "Perhaps a little. Under those circumstances, we really didn't have the opportunity to finish it." In the evening, Ruren wondered why they weren't selected, and Ellison knew they seemed to have a story to tell, but if they don't explain clearly, there's nothing I can do. Moreover, rashly letting them join might put Met and Miltine in a dilemma, so we need to understand the situation clearly. Indeed, it's hard to find subordinates. Ruren agrees. Just then, Ellison noticed the spices were gone, and he immediately placed a gold coin into the magic circle. Accompanied by the release of magic, products from the real world appeared before him. But this time, for some reason, he felt unusually tired, different from usual. Before he could react, he lost consciousness and collapsed heavily to the ground. This scene left Ruren completely at a loss. Amid Ruren's constant calls, Ellison finally regained consciousness, reassuring Ruren not to be nervous, stating it was just a depletion of his magical power. However, Ruren wasn't so easily fooled. She retorted, "But you're a level 9 mage." To allow Ellison to rest properly, Ruren said she could take over the tasks. Ellison felt relieved by this, but also mentioned there indeed was one thing she needed to do. Moments later, Ruren muttered to herself, "I did tell him I could do anything, but how could he ask me to cook?" Meanwhile, the siblings were still looking for work, but people in town would reject them due to the criminal marks on them. That's why they chose to go to the restaurant in the suburbs. They've been through a lot and are no longer concerned about others' opinions. But a cat nearby was frightened by them, its fur standing on end. It turned out they had stolen the cat's bowl of food, making Matt feel like they had become real criminals. But the next second, Lindy suddenly froze because the cat cried pitifully after having its bowl taken away. Seeing this, Matt asked her brother to return the plate. Just then, a man caught their attention. They spotted the figure of construction supervisor Radanda. Unexpectedly, at this time, he still wouldn't let the siblings go. Lindy was furious, grinding his teeth, ready to confront Radanda, but Matt stopped him, as getting caught again would mean more than just 2 years in prison. 2 years ago, when Gre City was under construction, construction supervisor Radanda was in charge of supervising the construction. He was lecherous, liked to take advantage, and specifically bullied the workers privately. Once, he was harassing a woman when the siblings interrupted him. At that time, building number 3 on the site collapsed, and some workers have sustained injuries. The woman's family was at that site, so she hurriedly ran out. At that moment, Radanda was very angry and scolded the workers for not doing their jobs properly. The workers argued that they followed strict construction standards, but the supporting pillars suddenly broke, suspecting there was a problem with the building materials. Faced with their questioning, Radanda immediately ordered Lindy to be arrested and began beating him. Radanda believed, even if he embezzled the workers' material money, the workers couldn't do anything to him. Seeing this, Matt stepped forward to plead for forgiveness, but Radanda revealed a sinister smile, his gaze becoming lewd. If Matt was willing to repay his wounded heart, he could let the siblings go. Hearing this, Lindy became enraged, broke free of his restraints with all his might, and rushed at Radanda, punching him so hard that his face swelled up. But that wasn't enough. Lindy's anger was not appeased, and even the guards couldn't stop him. Afterward, the siblings were sent to prison and were incarcerated for 2 years. Matt urged Lindy to calm down, while on the other side, Radanda was also visibly angry. Because they didn't find Lindy and Matt, Radanda became enraged and immediately slapped one of his subordinates nearby, who dared not speak out. Just then, Elena was returning from Ellison's restaurant and happened to be encountered by Radanda. He immediately harbored malicious intentions and approached to detain Elena under the guise of questioning. On the other side, due to Ellison absorbing the energy of the essence crystal, his magic was interrupted during spell casting. Now he must stop absorbing from the source. After all this, Ellison lay down to rest, looking forward to the midnight snack Ruren was preparing for him. Ellison had great faith in her cooking skills. After all, Ruren had watched him cook for many years. However, he had a nagging feeling of foreboding. After Ruren's efforts, a secret recipe for scrambled eggs with tomatoes was finally ready, but the result was less than satisfactory. It didn't look like scrambled eggs at all. Ruren knew that if Ellison ate this, he might die on the spot. Suddenly, she thought of Elena, feeling that if she could add a bit of healing magic from the elf, the problem might be solved. But the issue was she couldn't locate Elena because she doesn't smell like anything. Quickly, Ruren thought of another remedy, which was to buy a portion from the restaurant next door. But just as she was about to go out, she hesitated, because Ellison had always taken care of her, and now that it was her turn to take care of him, she felt helpless. Meanwhile, the unprepared Elena was quickly captured. It turns out that Radanda had visited Elena's clinic before, but but not for medical treatment. I'm looking for someone, you see. As long as you answer me well, I'll send you on your way. Radanda asks while putting down Elena's hood. If you can't answer, I personally look forward to that much more. Lindy and Matt, do you know where those siblings are? Hearing their names, Elena was very shocked. Meanwhile, the subordinate of Radanda thought, this perverted bastard, how would an elf know two people who just got out of prison? There's no way she would know. Unexpectedly, Elena answered that she knew where they were, which leave Radanda and his subordinate dumbfounded. This time, while he and his subordinates were not paying attention, Elena secretly cast a spell that made Radanda and his subordinate take a step back. She then took the chance to escape. Enraged, Radanda decided to show the elf just how formidable he was. Just as he reached out to grab Elena again, a fist suddenly slammed into his face. It was Lindy who had struck. He could no longer tolerate the villain's actions, and Matt stood by her brother, supporting his decision. Seeing that the situation was bad, Radanda blew his whistle to call for reinforcements. Soon after, 3 thugs appeared. They were the underlings of Roman, the gangster leader of Grake. Meanwhile, Ruren is knocking at the butcher shop of Mr. Knoll. Mrs. Rain was woken up by the noise outside and felt very puzzled, not knowing what was happening outside. When she opened the door, she found Ruren there looking helpless. This was the closest place with a familiar scent coming from it. Could you tell me the location of Elena's clinic? On the other side, Lindy is getting beat up. Facing Roman, Lindy had no chance to fight back. Despite being badly beaten, he still chose not to compromise. Seeing this, Matt stepped forward to help, but she too was quickly subdued by the gangster leader, letting his subordinate hold her while Lindy crouched from pain. Radanda watched everything with satisfaction. Roman then asked if Radanda wanted them to beat them up more. Radanda then ordered them to continue beating Lindy and not touch the sister because she will be useful in many ways. Lindy then grabs Roman's foot, begging to let the others go. Seeing this, Roman is enraged and continues beating up Lindy. Seeing this, Matt cries while shouting his brother's name. Elena rushed forward to treat Lindy, but faced with the numerous enemies, she was powerless. Lindy was still being beaten up. He asks himself, what did he do so wrong to deserve something like this? Just then, they heard a voice coming closer. Found you. After asking Mrs. Rain, Ruren hurried back to the restaurant, unexpectedly encountering them on the way. Finally, Elena saw a glimmer of hope. At this moment, Roman was trembling with fear, every pore on his body telling him to run. He knew the girl before him was extremely dangerous, and if he didn't bow his head, he might lose his life. Before Ruren could even speak, Roman quickly released them. This left Radanda very puzzled. Elena immediately took the chance to heal Lindy. When Radanda looked back, he found his men had already fled. Unexpectedly, he directly made a move to grab Ruren, but in the next instant, his arm was twisted around twice and a half, followed by a scream of agony. Seeing this, everyone around trembled with fear, but Ruren didn't have time to care about these people, as Ellison was waiting for her. When Ruren arrived, Elena immediately proceeded to Ellison's treatment. After Elena's treatment, Ellison's health had improved significantly. Ellison thanked her, remarking, "Thank you, you helped me again. That's a relief." Then she thought, I poured in all of my mana. Just how much magic power does he have? At that moment, Ruren was staring at Elena. Then she called her by name. It was the first time Ruren had taken the initiative to call her by name, and she appeared very shy, but still thanked Elena. This surprised both of them, as it was the first time they had heard Ruren thank someone. Just then, Ellison noticed the siblings behind the door. Then, they told Ellison what had happened. Initially, Radanda had come for them, but inadvertently involved others. Ellison signaled them not to blame themselves too much, as Radanda was notorious for cutting corners in construction. But Ellison was curious why they hadn't explained earlier, which shocked Lindy. It turned out that Lindy knew it was illegal to hit someone, but he didn't regret doing so, and thus felt it unnecessary to explain anything to others. Then, Ellison smiled and asked if they have a place to stay for the night. Then he pulled out a gold coin, puzzling Lindy. Why would you give this to us? Why? That's because you'll be working at the ranch starting tomorrow. Hearing this, the siblings were very happy. Then they repeatedly thanked him, as they would no longer have to go hungry. The next day, Lindy and Matt arrived at the farm in clean clothes. Miltine welcomes them, but she is a bit embarrassed when they call her senior. Mr. Ment then noticed the chain marks on Lindy's wrist. Although Mr. Ment dislikes criminals, he said if it were him, he wouldn't hesitate to beat up Radanda as well. These remarks made Lindy happy. At this moment, Ellison's magical power had mostly recovered, and he had greater control over the essence of magic. Just then, he noticed Ruren fixating on something, which made him curious. It turned out that Ruren was watching the customers. Hearing this, Ellison thought, Ruren is interested in other beings? What's happening? She even thanked Elena last time. Is there something wrong? Just then, Ruren noticed human women often wore shiny objects, which she didn't understand. While dragons also like treasures, there was nothing in her mother's cave. Then, Ellison explained to Ruren, humans do this as a way to express their emotions, just like how Venin gives jewelry to Meal. But Ruren still didn't quite understand. Meanwhile, a voice interrupted them. Deadran brought good news. Radanda had been confirmed for multiple crimes and would likely spend the rest of his life in prison, and his guards had also exposed his other misdeeds. He said that Deadran was the one behind Radanda, and even though Count Deadran was dragged away, Ratanda still continued his actions. Then, Then, Ellison asked Deadran if he was free in 3 days because he had a secret plan. Upon learning this, Deadran said he would definitely attend. 3 days later, and Ellison went to find the dwarves. However, he wasn't there to rush the construction timeline but to bring sausages and beer to the dwarves, as today was a day of remembrance. Mr. Knoll and Mrs. Rain also went to Ellison's restaurant for the event, along with other farm staff. This made Ruren very curious about what was on those plates. Ellison is shocked, asking, "You really don't know what today is?" Then, Ellison welcomed everyone's arrival, as he had prepared a little game for the evening. "What do I have in my mouth?" Quiz. After explaining the rules, Miltine was the first to go. Ellison then started to serve the food to Miltine. When Ellison saw the food, he was momentarily stunned, and then the game started. After a moment of tasting, Miltine feels like there's something squirmy inside. In a panic, she vomited the food. Wrong. Miltine is disqualified. She was actually eating marshmallows. Miltine had never eaten this one before, so she didn't know. Ellison then said that it's food that came from a very far away land. Unexpectedly, Mr. Ment really likes the taste of marshmallows. Next up was Mr. Knoll, who unexpectedly ate a chili and instantly turned into a fire-breathing dragon because he was very sensitive to spice. But Mrs. Rain was different, picking up a chili and munching on it. The third to go was Ruren. Hearing her name, Ruren was momentarily stunned. "Am I participating too?" Before she could react, Ellison blindfolded her and gave her the food. Because she had to participate in this game, Ruren confidently thought, "Don't forget, I'm a black dragon. My senses are several times stronger than humans." Then, she can fell a soft bread with some sweet cream on it. It was also mixed with fruit. Quickly, Ruren thought of the answer. "It's cake." Immediately, everyone came forward to congratulate her. Specifically, it was Ruren's birthday cake. Today was her 800th birthday, and everyone was happy to celebrate with her while she was completely unaware of it, having forgotten her own birthday. This made Ruren blush instantly. Living so long, it was the first time someone had thrown a birthday party for her. Seeing her shy demeanor, Ellison was also very pleased. Just when he thought Ruren was about to express her gratitude, she did the opposite. "Don't think I'm going to say thank you, you little rascals." Everyone was amused by her comment. Then, Ellison took out a gift from his bag, an earring that he had the dwarves craft especially for Ruren. He had noticed that Ruren had been observing human earrings intently in the days leading up to her birthday, so he decided to give her this gift on her special day. Ellison personally helped her put them on, marking the first time Ruren had ever received such a thing. Looking at herself in the mirror with the earrings on, she felt happy inside but didn't know how to express her feelings. At that moment, she wondered why human women acted so strangely when receiving gifts, and now she seemed to understand the feeling. Ruren showed a smile that had been long absent. The party continued, and next up was Mrs. Rain, who was also disqualified, as Mr. Knoll had intentionally misled her that she is eating a bug, which resulted in him getting a lesson with a frying pan from Mrs. Rain. Then it was Lindy's turn, but he too failed to guess the food. Thus, everyone spent a pleasant evening at Ellison's restaurant. As time moved quickly into the night, Ruren thanked Ellison again, although her manner was still somewhat awkward because this was her last birthday before coming of age. Meanwhile, snowflakes suddenly began to drift outside, and Ellison invited Ruren to watch the year's first snowfall together. At that moment, Ellison remarked how quickly time flew, which puzzled Ruren as they had only been there for a year. Ellison explained that a year might be short for dragons, but for humans, a year was a considerable amount of time. Although he had absorbed the heart of an ancient dragon, no one could guarantee that it had life-extending effects. Just then, a shooting star streaked across the sky. Ellison suggested that Ruren make a wish. Watching the brilliant meteor light up the night sky, Ruren silently made a wish. She wanted to be with Ellison for longer. Ellison was curious about her wish, but Ruren wouldn't tell him, saying, "It won't come true if I say it out loud." At the Black Dragon Palace, a man barged through the palace doors, cursing, "How much longer will you tolerate that arrogant person? Is a promise to a mortal that important?" This man was Nis, known among the Black Dragons for his unruly nature, not believing a human could be that significant. But Elder Dihegma said little, understanding why Nis was so upset. It was for Ruren. The reason Ruren had left the dragonkind was that they had disappointed her and driven her away. But now they wanted to bring Ruren back, not out of concern for her, but because in the Great Dragon War, most of the young mother dragons had perished. "So what are you trying to say? Do you want me to force Ruren back here?" Nis showed a fierce look. "If the Elder permits, I wouldn't mind causing that mortal some trouble." The Elder sighed helplessly, knowing that Ellison sparing Nis's life was already an act of tolerance. Nis was so bold because he had never truly faced Ellison, and the Great Elder would not agree to the Black Dragons stirring up trouble. Just then, Nis thought of an interesting idea. Elder Dihegma did not comment, merely stating that he had never mentioned such a thing. Hearing this, Nis knew that Elder Dihegma was actually on his side, so he decided to create some justifiable trouble for Ellison. Meanwhile, at the Mount Miliorek North Pole, Ruren was curious, asking, "Aren't we here to pick something up? Mushrooms. How can mushrooms grow in such a place?" Ellison then explained that these were not ordinary mushrooms, but an extremely rare variety. It turns out that Ellison had overheard a conversation in the restaurant about a farm family who, while steering their wooba, discovered some black mushrooms after the animals animals started digging in the ground. When the farmer sold these mushrooms, they were bought by the palace at a high price, and the farmer earned a significant amount of gold coins. Ellison speculated that these were not ordinary mushrooms but truffles or a similar rare variety because truffles usually grow deep underground and are hard to find. Ruren understood why Ellison had brought her here, jokingly saying, "So I'm just here to work?" However, Ruren didn't know what truffles smelled like, which left Ellison at a loss for words. After all, how could they search for truffles if Ruren didn't know the scent? Was their trip going to be in vain? Just then, there was a commotion nearby. A group of fierce goblins was attacking a white yeti. Although the yeti was visibly scared, it bravely defended the cave behind it. Faced with the goblins' aggression, it chose to fight back. However, outnumbered, the yeti was soon overwhelmed. At this critical moment, a shield spell protected the yeti. It turns out it was Ellison casting a spell. Ellison and Ruren noticed the fight and told the goblins to stop. The goblins, still not giving up, lost their grip on their weapons when Ruren released a killing intent and then hastily fled. Ellison could only smile awkwardly, as these goblins really had no foresight. Just then, the yeti leapt up and then bowed several times to Ellison and Ruren, mumbling something. Ellison thought that the scene felt somewhat familiar. As a black dragon, Ruren naturally understood what it was saying. It wanted to sincerely thank Ellison for saving its life. It wanted to repay them for their kindness. The two entered the cave, and two young yetis were playing together. Seeing this, Ellison concluded that the yeti didn't let the goblins in because there were two young yetis inside. At that moment, Ellison was also curious about what the yeti would give him in thanks. Just then, the yeti approached, holding some dark objects. Ruren, with her keen nose, already smelled a strange scent. "What's that smell? That's not a treasure." Ellison looked at the object with delight. "You're wrong, Ruren. This is definitely a treasure." Meanwhile, on the other side, Nis gathered a few black dragons, intending to teach Ellison a lesson. "I will bring Ruren back to the Holy Land." They suspected Nis did this because of Ruren, as he had been looking for a mate. Although he wouldn't admit it, he felt that dragons should belong to dragons. He also got support from an elder, but they were still hesitant because they had signed a treaty forbidding attacks on humans unless their personal safety was threatened. The elders specifically warned the black dragons to stay away from Ellison, as he was not someone even dragons should provoke. Just then, a voice interrupted them, suggesting he knew a red dragon near Gre that could be used to execute their plan. Back to the Yeti cave, Ruren, seeing these for the first time, was puzzled. Could these really be edible? But for Ellison, it was a different matter. These were exactly the truffles they were looking for. Seeing Ellison's satisfied expression, the Yeti also breathed a sigh of relief. However, Ruren thought they smelled bad and casually threw them away. This stunned Ellison. "Stop it. Do you know how expensive they are?" Just then, Ellison thought if the Yeti could find enough truffles to feed on, that meant there were many more truffles to be found. Looking at the clueless Yeti, Ellison asked Ruren to translate some words for him because he thought of a solution that would benefit everyone, making the Yeti the guardian of Ruren's underground palace. Hearing this, the Yeti is surprised and doesn't know how to respond. The next second, the Yeti was very willing. After all, it was cold here, and there wasn't much food, and it had to take care of two cubs. Meanwhile, at the Serena's lair, Serena was idly sitting on her throne. Apart from that guy who scared her last time, no one else had visited her. Ellison had not expected her to be so poor, so he hadn't planned to take any advantage from her. Ruren even mocked her place as looking like a dilapidated hut, but Serena was helpless, as she was indeed very poor. After the mockery, Ruren left arm in arm with Ellison because they had their own restaurant to attend to. "Even though the restaurant isn't as spacious as this lair, I've never once felt frustrated," Ruren teased. Serena wasn't sure when she would see them again to pass the time, which wouldn't make this place seem so empty. Just then, her thoughts were interrupted by a voice, and then a man appeared before her. Looking at him, Serena felt anger starting to surge within her as it was her ex-boyfriend, Jard. Serena was not welcoming, as she had already been warned about him, but shameless Jard suggested starting over. "If you don't mind, I'd like to spend the rest of my life with you." Serena was well aware of his nature and knew he was up to no good. The next instant, she transformed into her dragon form, sensing that Jard had not come alone. This impressed Jard. "You're still so sharp." Before Serena could react, a group of black dragons had her surrounded. They began attacking her simultaneously, which put her in a tough position. Although she was prepared to defend herself, she was outnumbered. What she didn't expect was that her ex-boyfriend would stand on their side. Meanwhile, Jard took advantage of Serena's distraction to cast a control spell on her, which infuriated her. However, Nis didn't give her a chance to react, attacking her from behind. Meanwhile, on the other side, Gultazar is looking up, confused. "So you're saying this monster is a guard for the lair?" "That's right. They're called Ruruns." It turns out that Ellison brought the Yeti family to Ruren's cave and the truffles as a reward for helping them. Ruren was puzzled about this. "So, how do we prepare the truffles?" Ruren genuinely asked because she didn't know how to prepare these truffles. These ingredients had a very strong aroma and could change the taste of any dish, making it feel different to eat. So, when Ellison returned to the restaurant, he added truffles to the dishes, and everyone enjoyed their meal except Meltine, Mr. Knoll, and Ruren, who didn't like the taste. Ellison was stunned, realizing they all had mixed reactions about the food, and concluded that that he wouldn't be able to put it on the regular menu and will be serving truffles to special customers. Meanwhile, at Serena's lair, when the smoke cleared, Serena was gone. She had prepared a spatial teleportation circle in advance and used it to escape. Seeing this, Jard panicked. If she goes back to complain, we're done for. But Manhwa signaled him not to worry. I tracked the mana flow of this lair, and the other end of the teleportation circle is in Gre City. Then, he signaled to Nis what to do next. Nis smirked slightly. So it takes us directly to Gre City. Looks like there's no need for us to move there ourselves. You're sure that the dragon that ran away doesn't have anyone to ask for help? Hearing this, Jard felt nervous but answered, I'm sure she could not teleport to the castle, and Serena has always been a loner among red dragons. Hearing this, Manhwa smirked. We've seen how you enslaved humans just like we did. Nis gestured that he was not interested in Jard's taste, and his goal was to make Ellison give in. He assures Jard that if they happen to make Ellison give in, he will turn a blind eye to the mess Jard made. That red dragon is seriously injured. The blood she lost is beyond recovery. She will eventually die. So, we just need to pin the blame on Ellison. A perfect way to justify things. As night fell and the restaurant was about to close, the doorbell suddenly rang. When they turned around, they were surprised to see Serena. Seeing the red dragon unexpectedly, Ellison was puzzled as they had no prior dealings. But out of courtesy, Ellison served her some food. Serena didn't say much, just ate quietly. Rurin, however, was not pleased. Whatever, just say what you're here for, she exclaimed while serving the water. Meanwhile, Serena noticed the earrings on Rurin's ears, and Rurin proudly introduced them. Ellison gave them to me as a gift. Although Serena said nothing, her expression showed envy, a feeling she had never experienced. Just then, Serena indicated that her time was short. Perhaps this would be her last meal. This puzzled both listeners, as they didn't understand what Serena meant. Then she continued eating, saying that she had always wondered if love truly existed or was just a momentary lie. She then raised her hand. Because of that, I dated several dragons, elves, and even humans. Thinking of that now, all of that was a waste of time. I only dated them because I was lonely, she said as tears continued flowing from her eyes, then snapped her fingers. As Serena dispelled the illusion magic, the wound on her back also became visible. Ellison was completely unprepared as he saw Serena suddenly collapsing. Both of them are completely shocked, unable to process what's happening. After Rurin's examination, it was found that Serena's wound was too deep, and the situation was clearly not simple. At the same time, a teleportation portal opens, and several men suddenly appear outside Ellison's restaurant, obviously up to no good. Both of them felt the aura of the people outside and concluded they were all dragons. The whole situation was too coincidental, perfectly staged. Clearly someone was framing them. Now, the most important thing was to save Serena's life. As long as she could wake up, everything could be resolved. Ellison tells Rurin to take Serena to Elena to cure her. Before going, Rurin asks Ellison what about him. I'll need to welcome the guest after all. Then, Ellison tentatively asked them what had happened, but the red dragon named Vaint seemed prepared and pushed open the restaurant door directly. The bloodstains on the floor emitted the scent of a red dragon. Seeing this, Ellison invited them to have a proper conversation as they drank some tea, but the red dragons were not pleased and immediately started transforming into their dragon form. Seeing this, Ellison's eyes, I guess this is your choice then. Ellison tentatively asked them what had happened, but the red dragon named Vaint seemed prepared and pushed open the restaurant door directly. The bloodstains on the floor emitted the scent of a red dragon. Seeing this, Ellison invited them to have a proper conversation as they drank some tea, but the red dragons were not pleased and immediately started transforming into their dragon form. Seeing this, Ellison's eyes, I guess this is your choice then. Nis, sensing the fight from afar, was smug. Just then Darba spoke. I never expected the red dragons to use that to attack Ellison. What was his name again? Vaint, the leader of the younger generation of red dragons. Although they don't pay attention to each other individually, they emphasize unity greatly and would not let the killer of a red dragon get away. How dare you touch a red dragon? In an instant, a stream of dragon fire shot directly at Ellison, but Ellison showed no intention of dodging, merely raising his hand to neutralize the attack. Ellison, not wanting the fight to affect the nearby innocents, suggested settling matters in an uninhabited area. Vaint then agrees. At the same time, a teleportation portal suddenly appeared at Elena's clinic, and Rurin hurried out carrying Serena. She then lays her on the bed and urgently commands Elena to save Serena. The most urgent issue now was to heal Serena's wounds, or she would surely die from excessive blood loss. Just then, Elena started healing Serena. At this moment, Ellison was in a forest, needing to think calmly. Those men suspected him of killing Serena, but he needed to clarify the situation. Were they part of this framing plot, or were they also being used by the person who designed this trap? He then asked the red dragons to calm down, but seeing the bloodstains of the red dragon in the restaurant, they were convinced that Ellison had killed their kin. Ellison then explained the situation, telling them that the red dragon had already been injured before coming to the restaurant and that he was trying to save her. Vaint was shocked by this revelation, and then Jard suggested they check on Serena's condition, but Ellison directly refused his proposal. Unexpectedly, Jard then launched an attack on Ellison. Ellison understood that he could not dissociate himself from the situation, especially since Jard was instigating others by claiming that Ellison wanted to drive Serena out of her lair. So this punk is part of those who framed me. Vaint, being misled, transformed into his dragon form, unable to tolerate being deceived. Ellison, how dare you try to weasel out of this situation by lying? What a sly bastard. Ellison knew that explanations would be futile at this point and decided to teach them a lesson. Seeing Ellison's arrogance, all the red dragons unleashed their firepower, but Ellison blocked all their attacks with just one hand, which shocked Vaint, who couldn't believe all the damage could be so easily neutralized. Jard couldn't believe that a human could possess such strong power. Just then, other figures appeared in the sky. Mies and his companions had been waiting there for a long time. The red dragons didn't expect to encounter black dragons here. Seeing Mies, Ellison seemed to guess the answer, assuming all this was likely his doing. Meanwhile, on the other side, despite Elena's continuous treatment, Serena's wounds still couldn't heal, and her magical power was also depleted. Rurin knew she couldn't let Serena die, so she grabbed Elena's hand and lent her own magic power to her. Elena felt the increase in her mana, as Rurin told her to keep treating Serena. Facing the attacks of all the dragons, Ellison could only defend passively because if he killed these dragons now, even if Serena woke up, it wouldn't explain anything. However, injuring them could be considered self-defense. Then, Ellison started gathering his magic and launched a counterattack. The black dragons didn't expect Ellison to be so powerful, capable of withstanding all attacks simultaneously. They didn't hesitate to use their most powerful moves, feeling that this powerful human was a threat to them. Damn, these guys want to kill me, Ellison thought to himself. Just then, a hollow voice came from the sky asking everyone to stop, and several teleportation portals appeared before everyone. You little rascals, are you trying to start a new war? Hearing this, Vaint was stunned, not expecting that their actions would alarm the elders of both tribes. Seeing Elder Metadana appear, Ellison breathed a sigh of relief. If he hadn't arrived, Ellison really feared he would have had to flatten these youngsters. Mies, seeing the elder, immediately felt uneasy, quickly reverting from his dragon form and bowing to the elder, but he was not panicked internally because he was confident that his actions had been flawless. Moreover, since Serena had fallen to his secret technique, she definitely wouldn't survive the night. All the blame pointed towards Ellison, and even if the dragon elders sided with Ellison, they wouldn't be able to help him. Then, Mies would have the perfect excuse to execute Ellison. However, Ellison had already anticipated his thoughts, now only hoping that Rurin could heal Serena quickly. Meanwhile, Elena was doing her best to treat the red dragon, but despite exhausting her magical power, Serena's wounds still couldn't heal. Although Rurin was trying to infuse her with magic, Elena's capacity for magic was too small to handle Rurin's power. Rurin knew that Elena was the only one who could help Ellison now, so she signaled Elena to synchronize their magic. If her body couldn't handle it, there was a risk of exploding from the inside, but the choice was still Elena's. After some thought, Elena agreed to Rurin's suggestion, wanting to help Ellison as well. As the magic flowed into her, Elena almost collapsed. Compared to the power of the dragon race, her magic was like dust. A suffocating feeling almost made her lose consciousness. Seeing this, Rurin encouraged her to hold on, because saving Serena's life depended on her. Then, using the last of her strength, Elena slowly stood up. As a doctor, she was duty-bound to try to save each patient to the fullest. At that moment, Elena unleashed an unprecedented amount of energy, and Serena's wound began to heal rapidly. Now, all that was needed was for Serena to stay conscious, or all efforts would be in vain. On the other side, the dragon elders were inquiring about Ellison's situation. They could tell something was off with a few people. After all, everything was too coincidental, and most importantly, they believed in Ellison's character. But Vaint believed his own eyes, because he saw the bloodstains of a red dragon in the restaurant, and Ellison's identity was still that of a dragon slayer. At the same time, Jard jumped out, claiming he had witnessed the entire process of Ellison killing Serena. Nisa's uncle saw right through this as Nisa's plan, intending to frame Ellison using the red dragons. Even if someone investigated, they would not suspect the black dragons. Hearing this, Elder Dedank asks for Elder Metadana's thoughts. Seeing their confidence, Elder Metadana asked Ellison if he had anything to say, which made Ellison pause, as he hadn't spoken much from the beginning. Then, Ellison raised a few points of doubt. First, they accused me of killing Serena because her nest was near Grake. Anyone who understands the dragon war knows that I would never kill a dragon for such a reason. The dragon elder agreed with Ellison's view. Next is the treaty I signed with the dragon race. I wouldn't take action against dragons unless they maliciously destroy human towns. To kill Serena just because she was in Gre City would be too absurd. That's just your one-sided claim. Vaint interrupted. Ellison continues that the most important point is that the relationship between black dragons and red dragons has become so close that it looks like a long premeditated plan. So you think all this is a setup? Ellison immediately gave a thumbs up. Elder Metadana really understands me. However, the red dragon elder still wanted evidence. Ellison smiled and said, why don't we let the person involved speak for herself? When Nis saw the teleportation portal, he instantly broke out in a cold sweat, as did the other black dragons and Jard. Nis clearly remembered having punctured Serena's organs. She shouldn't have survived survived an hour, yet here she was, perfectly intact. Ellison knew Elena had provided a lot of help and promptly thanked her. Ruren briefly explained the mana transfer process, and Elena had also made a significant effort. Just then, Ruren saw Nise. She immediately knew it was his scheme. Ellison signaled Ruren not to be impulsive, as he had already thought of a countermeasure. Then, Ellison asked Serena about her physical condition, but she even joked about it. The next moment, Ellison's fist fell on her head. "You almost got me in big trouble. Didn't you see my situation? Hurry up and explain." Serena immediately agrees to explain while caressing her head. At this time, Nise and the others were pale, not expecting the situation to spiral out of their control. Serena looked around and noticed that Jard had disappeared. She then recounted the events. "It was these 5 people who suddenly broke into my den and injured me. If it wasn't for Ellison, I would now be a corpse." The dragon elders were also grim-faced, because if this were mishandled, it could lead to war. Vaint felt very angry and rushed up to Ellison to beg for forgiveness. Seeing his sincerity, Ellison did not make it difficult for him. After all, he was also used. The people behind them began to panic, but the elder had no time to listen to their excuses. At this moment, Nise still did not repent, regretting that he hadn't killed Serena with one blow, believing it was all Ellison's fault. Suddenly, he moved behind Ellison and prepared to ambush. Taking advantage of Ellison's distraction, Nise launched a full-force strike. Ellison did not expect him to act in front of the elder, cursing silently, "Damn it," and at the critical moment, he chose to push Ruren away. Then the attack heavily fell on his back. Seeing this, Nise's face showed a satisfied expression, while Ruren, seeing Ellison suddenly fall, was at a loss, having not anticipated such a situation. Elena also felt the same. Seeing the lifeless Ellison, Ruren still tried to cover his wounds, because if it wasn't for Ellison pushing her away, she would have been the one lying on the ground. At this time, Vaint finally saw Nise's true nature, not expecting him to use such despicable methods. However, Nise confidently stated that he was saving the dragon race, which left Vaint full of doubts. Nise shouted, "Open your eyes, everyone! Why should we abide by those stupid agreements? A human fantasizes about saving the world. He didn't even properly counter our attacks. He just endured a combined dragon assault." However, the elders just quietly watched him rant. Meanwhile, Elena continuously treated Ellison, but her power alone wasn't effective. She needed Ruren's cooperation. At this moment, Ruren was already in chaos. Clearly, losing Ellison would break her at any moment. Next to him, Nise couldn't help but mock, "Stupid elf, give up. Your efforts are meaningless. He is but an ant. He cannot survive without a shield." Just then, Serena gave a slight smile because she had already seen through Ellison's ruse. "I guess your specialty is a surprise attack from behind." Serena then calmed Ruren down and told her that Ellison's magical power had never weakened. On the contrary, it was growing stronger. Meanwhile, a hand gently wiped away Ruren's tears. Then Ellison released a powerful force. Seeing this, Nise, who had been full of bluster just moments before, suddenly lost his nerve. Elder Metadana was also shaken internally, for he felt a familiar presence. It was the essence of the dragon essence crystal. It turns out this was all part of Ellison's plan. He had bet that a scoundrel like Nise would attempt a sneak attack, and clearly, he had bet correctly. Ellison had studied the use of the essence crystal for a long time without success, so he guessed it might require a trigger. Therefore, Ellison didn't activate his shield and took Nise's attack head-on. Because of this, the essence crystal had now integrated with him. Ellison's sudden revival left Ruren momentarily unable to react. Ellison then comforted her, "It's all over now." At this moment, Nise, frightened by a human being able to block his ambush, was extremely unwilling. He then gathered his power again, intending to make a final strike against Ellison. This time, he decided to overdraw from the essence, planning to go down together with Ellison. However, Ellison simply waved his hand and caught his attack barehanded. Still too weak, Ellison said calmly, "You should be aware of my agreement with the dragon race, which prohibits dragons from killing, kidnapping, or invading other races, and humans cannot wage war against dragons unless their lives are threatened." Ellison continued, "So, Nise, this time I allow you to strike back with all your might." As Ellison released his magic, several meteor-sized fireballs appeared in the sky, stunning Nise, who couldn't believe that a human could possess such power. But it was already too late, and as Nise screamed, the meteors smashed straight into the ground. When the smoke slowly cleared, Nise was dead beyond dead. Seeing this, his subordinate was stunned. To Ellison, the dragons were like insects that could be crushed by hand. Having done all this, Ellison turned to Ruren with a smile. "It's time to go home." Hearing this, Ruren rushed to him. Afterward, Elder Metadana was very disappointed with the dragon tribe, and the 3 of them were banished to the deepest prison in the Holy Land for 3,000 years. Serena also received many rewards because Vaint believed they had stolen Serena's treasures, otherwise she wouldn't have appeared so destitute. Meanwhile, Serena was more concerned about Jard's whereabouts, unwilling to let this despicable man go easily. Vaint felt the same, to be played by such a person in charge of the Red Dragons. "Once we catch him, I will make him suffer twice as much." Serena nodded in satisfaction, as she had no feelings left for Jard. The restaurant incident also came to a close. Meanwhile, back home where Ruren was very angry, dissatisfied with Ellison's plan. If Nise had been a bit stronger, you would have been the one to die today. Ruren could not accept it no matter what. Seeing this, Ellison did not hesitate, hugged Ruren from behind, and apologized for his actions. This caused Ruren to bubble up with emotion like a teapot. Suddenly, a voice startled them both. "It's you, old man, causing trouble again." Ruren swung her fist at the elder's face. "What the heck? Why are you here? You're so clueless." Ellison could only smile awkwardly because he had asked the elder to come here. Elder Metadana rubbed his nose, feeling wronged. "So, what was the purpose of calling me here?" Ellison directly told him. It was about the essence crystal issue. As Ruren's elder, Ellison naturally brought out his best wine to entertain Elder Metadana. The curious elder did not hesitate and took a sip, instantly captivated by the unique taste. The instant it touched his palate, it felt refreshing, like a spring breeze carrying the scent of flowers, and it seemed to be a mixture of various different aromas. Clearly, this wine seemed to have been aged for a long time. "It must have a history of 60 or 70 years, the elder commented. "That's right." Ellison did not expect that with just one sip he would guess correctly, and his senses are really of a monster. Hearing this, Ruren also became curious, as this was her first time encountering such wine, and it must have tasted very good. However, Ellison immediately stopped her, as this was no ordinary wine. Seeing the close relationship between the two, the elder was much reassured, thinking that Ruren must be much happier here than with the dragon tribe. Then, Ellison changed the subject, asking the elder what he thought about the events of the evening, as he had killed Nis in front of so many dragons. The elder signaled him not to worry. "This conflict was initiated by Nis, and you did nothing to violate the treaty. If you hadn't acted, I would have intervened personally." The elder also noticed something about Ellison. "It seems you knew Nis would attack, so you deliberately didn't resist, right?" Ellison did not deny it, because he needed to complete the absorption of the essence crystal. During the Dragon War, he had already absorbed 2 crystals, gaining the power to control the dragon race, and absorbing a third meant he would gain the power to rule all dragon races. "Ellison, you absorbed another essence crystal now. If I'm right, you have." "Yes, I have absorbed 3 essence crystals." However, theoretically, if Ellison were a dragon, after absorbing 3 essence crystals, Ellison would transform into a dragon lord. Ellison nodded in agreement, which was exactly why he had summoned the elder. If someone absorbs 3 essence crystals, will more ancient crystals appear? When a dragon becomes the dragon lord, the remaining essence crystals will all disappear. But there has never been a case in which a human has absorbed 3 essence crystals. The elder indicated that Ellison's case was difficult to tell. Besides, there was another extremely important matter. Someone was attempting to revive the dragon lord. This made a sudden impact on Metadana's heart, and Ruren also recalled the incident at the dwarf's cave. At that time, a group of dragons had attacked them, aiming to seize something in their possession. The elder saw the reason for Ellison's public absorption of the essence crystal. "If they intend to revive the dragon lord, then I am definitely the target. So you set yourself up as bait, which is really a foolish method." Before the elder could finish, a fist the size of a sandbag heavily fell on his head. The elder also didn't understand what he had said wrong. "I'll leave the investigation to you, elder," Ellison said with a smile. Meanwhile, at Elena's clinic, just as she returned from grocery shopping, Serena suddenly appeared behind her, startling her. It turns out Serena felt too bored alone, so she came to chat with Elena. Because her injuries were not yet fully healed, she considered herself still a patient. Before Elena could react, Serena pulled her inside. "If you tell me about the mana transfer, I might be able to help heal people. I'm the type of dragon who repays both favors and grudges." Elena awkwardly bowed her head. "All my meals are vegetarian. Are you alright with that?" This scene was just witnessed by Lady Rain outside, her eyes as wide as copper bells. Meanwhile, Jard was desperately running because he was being pursued by red dragons. Just when he thought he was safe, Sydney appeared behind him. Her task was to deal with Jard, as he had failed to steal the essence crystal from the dwarves. To prevent this secret from leaking, she coldly said, "Tell me, do I have a reason to let you live?" Seeing this, Jard quickly tried to explain. "Because Ellison has already absorbed 3 essence crystals, now no dragon can defeat him. Maybe if we can find a way to control him, the plan still has a chance of success." Sydney paused and sneered. "You make some sense, but that's not a reason for me to let you live, is it?" Accompanied by a slash on Jard's neck, he immediately lost consciousness. A few days later, Ellison continued running the restaurant like usual. Just then, Nellen carried a stone to Ellison's restaurant as a gift. "I dug it out while working at the mines. The seniors thought you would like it." Ellison recognized at a glance that it was rock salt, a natural mineral salt. Curious, Ruren tasted it with her fingertip, instantly turning herself into salty dragon jerky, which reminded Ellison of his early days in this world. At that time, Ellison had just arrived in this world, coinciding with the Dragon Wars, and he was also drafted into the army. When he was drafted, everything felt strange. Initially, Ellison thought he was dreaming, assuming he would return the next day, but instead, he stayed in this world. Of course, the most painful thing for him was the food here, which was utterly flavorless, not just bad tasting, but completely devoid of taste. He thought he was the only one who felt this way, but after seeing everyone's reaction, he realized the problem was with the food. Thus, opening a restaurant became Ellison's biggest dream. To achieve this dream, he had to improve his capabilities necessities to survive. But before that, he had to change the ingredients here, even if just by adding a little salt. Otherwise, he feared he would die of malnutrition before dying on the battlefield. A few days later, the training camp welcomed a new magic instructor named Vane, who is a 5th class Imperial mage. The effect of this magic circle is simple. It only gathers mana in one place. By applying additional magic circles here, you manipulate the mana's attribute. This marks Ellison's first encounter with magic. For example, if you add a fire attribute here, it becomes the most basic offensive magic, Fireball. Then Vane blasted the training decoy with a fireball. After the instructor's brief explanation, they began formal magic practice. As most were first-time magic users, many couldn't even control the power of the flame and the direction of their spells. Vane becomes very angry at this scene, as he feels that these people are not worth his time. Just then, a huge spell burst from Ellison's hands, destroying the entire training field with a single strike. Ellison himself was stunned, not knowing what had happened. As even the mountains collapsed, everyone was left in shock. Immediately afterward, Vane hurriedly asked Ellison how he had managed to do it. Ellison answered nervously. It turned out that he could see the flow of mana in the air, which frightened Vane. Soon, Vane consulted instructor Theron, who had been aware of Ellison's capabilities from the beginning. A person who could see mana flows without having studied magic could be considered a genius among geniuses. No, I also studied magic myself, but it's too strange to explain it just like that, Vane said to express dissatisfaction. Instructor Theron then said that perhaps delaying Ellison's frontline deployment and sending Ellison for advanced magic training would be better considering his achievements. Vane was very dissatisfied with this, but could do nothing about it, realizing it was impossible to take Ellison away. Meanwhile, Ellison is hearing everything on the other side of the door. The door immediately opened and Vane left angrily, leaving behind a remark. Don't get cocky just because you've learned Fireball. Since you damaged the training field, restore it to its original state. The sun set in the training ground, and Ellison had to clean up the training field alone. He couldn't believe that such a high-ranking instructor could be so harsh. Couldn't he be a bit more friendly to the trainees? Recalling his childhood, his mother often praised him, which had been his motivation to persevere. Since then, he had been particularly meticulous about his cooking skills. Thinking of this made Ellison miss his mother. He then crouches on the ground. A little praise wouldn't have hurt. Just then, Ellison discovered some translucent crystalline substances. Curious, he picked one up to examine it, thinking it might have fallen from the mountain. He wondered, could it be that thing? Then, Ellison tentatively licked it and, to his surprise, it really was rock salt. With this, he was confident the food the next day would be radically transformed. Quickly, the next day arrived, and his comrades showed little interest in the usual food, having become numb to it. But one man tasted it and immediately noticed something was different. Today's flavor was significantly better, more than 10 times better. Thus, everyone began to devour the food eagerly. Ellison was very satisfied. Just adding salt had completely changed the flavor. On the other side, Theron also noticed something unusual. Was there a new chef today? But the answer he got was that nothing had changed. Little by little, Ellison started to improve the meals. He cleaned the potatoes and peeled them, a step the previous chefs never bothered with. He then added some side dishes, prepared the sauce separately, and mixed them together. A simple potato soup was thus created. When Ellison took a small sip, tears of happiness streamed down his face. It made him appreciate the joy of living once again. Ideally, he would add some spices or mushrooms too, but this is enough for him. He was about to scoop another spoon of the soup when someone called his name. Trainee Ellison, come to the instructor's office after your meal, Theron said, startling Ellison. You know the reason best, don't you? Hearing this, Ellison felt nervous as cold sweat began to drip down his face. Ellison had arrived at the instructor's office and was silently facing Theron. Theron mentioned that he had heard Ellison showed exceptional talent in magic, to which Ellison nervously agreed. Theron then praised him, noting that this talent provided them with a strategic advantage in the war. However, he also mentioned that unsettling rumors were circulating in the kitchen. Hearing this, Ellison immediately became anxious. Theron then warned, someone keeps sneaking in at odd hours and leaves before the cooks start using the kitchen. If that person leaves before 5 o'clock, we won't be able to catch him. Ellison understood this was Theron hinting at him. Then, Theron handed Ellison a scroll. But that's not why I called you here. I called to congratulate you on your achievement in magic training. These are some little things I've been working on personally. Now I'm thinking of throwing them away. Before he left, he reminded Ellison again that if the person left the kitchen before 5, there was no way to catch them. Ellison didn't understand the meaning of the scroll mentioned by Theron until he opened it and realized Theron already knew it was him, as the scroll contained records of which foods were edible that Theron had researched. With Theron's help, Ellison gradually learned more about the food in this other world. Eventually, the northern training camp became famous for its delicious cuisine, and even after Ellison left, the chefs continued to use his recipes and maintain that reputation. Just then, Nellen curiously asked what Ellison's cooking now. It turns out Ellison prepared the potato soup to relieve the memories together. He planned to let Rurin and Nellen taste the army's food. This made Nellen excited. Eagerly, they began tasting the soup but found it to be mediocre. Ellison also tried some and noticed it didn't taste as good as before. before. He speculated that perhaps the difference in environment affected the flavor. It's been a long time since Ellison has been able to remember old times, and today he realized he doesn't miss it at all. Meanwhile, at Elena's clinic, Serena waiting at the elf clinic and unexpectedly encountered a pair of crying children. It turns out the little girl's brother had accidentally hurt himself, and Elena was not at the clinic at the moment. Serena suggested they go home for their parents to bandage the wound, but the little girl said their parents were out working and no one was at home. Seeing this, Serena felt conflicted, lamenting, "Why does everyone have to poke my soft spot?" Moments later, the siblings walked out of the clinic happily, telling Elena that a red-haired sister had healed their wounds. This puzzled Elena. Just then, Serena stood at the door shouting her name. "Did you treat those kids?" "Well, I can do simple healing magic." Elena didn't expect the usually aloof red dragon to also have a kind side. Serena felt embarrassed and quickly changed the subject. "Where did you just go?" "I'm starving." It turns out Elena had just been to the Lord's mansion for a medical examination, but all treatments had failed. Hearing this, Serena thought of someone who specialized in brain diseases. Elena was surprised and immediately inquired who was it. However, the problem was it had been so long that Serena had forgotten that person's name. Meanwhile, a blue bird carrying a letter arrived in front of Elena. Serena was curious where it came from. It turns out that these birds only live in the elf forest. Could something have happened in the elf forest? As Elena read the contents of the letter, she was visibly shocked. Serena, noticing her distress, inquired about the contents of the letter. Elena, in tears, said, "The elf forest is in danger of being destroyed by a dragon, and to avoid destruction, I might have to become a dragon's bride." Serena, hearing this, is dumbfounded. "Oh man, I thought it was something serious. What should I do? I thought marriage was supposed to be with someone you love, or at least someone you could be friends with for a while." Serena reassured her. "Hey, you fool, calm down." Elena immediately stops crying and listens to Serena's words. "What's there to worry about? With me here, no one can hurt you. I'll make that arrogant dragon cry all the way back to his mother," Serena fiercely declared. Just then, the bird that delivered the letter to Elena safely returned to the elven forest. An elf saw this and informed the elf chief Neria that it seemed the letter was delivered safely. Hearing this, the elf chief Neria was relieved. The other elf curiously asks why the letter is too detailed. Will Elena really return to her homeland under the dragon threat? She will. That child is very selfless. However, even if she returns, I'm not sure she can solve the current problem. On the other side, Serena angrily questions Elena. "Don't you trust me? I was trying to look cool. Why else would you call them?" Ellison announces the restaurant is closed while Ruren asks Serena if she has a problem with them coming. Elena explains in a panic, "It was just a precaution. I was worried you might get hurt." Thus, they argued all the way to the elven forest. Due to the elves' magical barriers limiting teleportation within the forest, they had to proceed on foot. Just then, Ruren sensed a dangerous presence. Arrows were pointed at them. It was the elven warriors who had detected them. Even though Elena came forward to explain, the elven captain still wasn't convinced of their identities. To ensure they wouldn't harm the elven people, the captain said she needed to verify their identities again using elf's eyes to figure out another person's intention. So, Ellison revealed his identity to them. The elf captain acknowledged his answer and proceeded to ask Serena next. Serena was about to reveal she was a dragon, but Ellison interrupted and talked more about himself. The elf captain is visibly irritated when another elf stops the captain. She delivers a message from the elf chief Neria. Quickly, the elves put away their bows and apologized. "We apologize for failing to recognize our guest. It was disrespectful to do so. Please enter. Lady Neria is waiting for you all." Hearing this, Elena breathed a sigh of relief. When they meet the elf chief Neria, she seems to recognize Ellison. "Thank you for your hospitality, Lady Neria." Elena didn't expect Ellison to know their leader, but perhaps that wasn't surprising, considering he's capable of casting terrifying magic. Regarding Elena's situation, the elf chief expressed her regrets. Serena then interrupted her. "But why choose her as the bride? Which idiot wants to marry her?" Hearing this, Neria appeared very nervous. "You shouldn't insult him because he might hear you. He is the noble yellow dragon." As soon as she finished, Ruren and Serena released their own aura, speaking as if who isn't a dragon. "We're just here to kick that noble being ass across the moon." This left Neria dumbfounded, her brain going offline for 2.5 seconds, still processing the situation. "Pardon?" Ellison and Elena quickly explain everything and also mention that both Ruren and Serena are both noble beings as well. Hearing this, Lady Neria is sweating coldly from shock. "Pardon," she exclaimed, shaking the elven forest. "The yellow dragon's name is Iramantium." Then, Neria explained the situation. "The elves have been offering tributes to the yellow dragon for generations." Hearing this, Ruren is visibly disgusted. "That beggar." Then Neria continues, "That dragon hadn't appeared for the last 100 years until just a few days ago when he suddenly demanded a bride from the elves." Ellison asked Neria to sit comfortably. Then Ruren asked, puzzled, "Why choose Elena specifically? There are many other elves in the village." The queen explained, "Originally, I tried to resolve the matter all on my own. I intended to offer myself to the yellow dragon. It would be my honor to sacrifice myself for a race. But unexpectedly, he refused because he didn't like my hairstyle. He was quite picky about it. All the warriors in the tribe are like this. We're all rejected due to different reasons, so we pinned our hopes on Elena. Otherwise, the elves wouldn't be able to withstand his wrath. At this, Serena felt she had heard the yellow dragon's name somewhere before. Serena tried hard to remember but couldn't recall. Suddenly, she thought of that person, the one specializing in brain diseases. That's the dragon I'm telling you about. Perhaps he can treat the Lord of Gre's illness. The little kid's dad? Then it looks like we'll have to kidnap the yellow dragon, Ruren suggested to Ellison, to which he agreed. Just then an elf opens the door, informing Neria that Iramantium is heading to the elf forest. He must be mad since we haven't sent another candidate. Then, Neria reminded them he is a very cunning dragon. Although he often demands tributes from us, he has never protected anyone. His first reaction upon seeing other dragons is to hide. This left them all stunned, not expecting him to be so cowardly. They thought of needing something to capture his attention so he wouldn't notice anything else. With this, all of them look at Elena. Hearing this, Elena is visibly nervous. What's wrong, guys? Meanwhile, on the other side, the yellow dragon had been waiting several days without the elves delivering the bride. Angry, he declared, "Tiny elven race, prepare to face my wrath." Soon, he arrived at the elven forest, ready to attack, when the elf chief appeared with Elena. When Elena's veil was lifted, she looked ethereally beautiful and shy. Seeing her demure appearance, the old yellow dragon was immediately thrilled. "This is exactly my type. You should have brought someone like her earlier." At this moment, high above, Ellison and others were watching the yellow dragon's every move. Now, we just wait for him to return to his lair. Soon, the yellow dragon took Elena back to his cave. Although Elena was frightened, she had to endure for the plan. Just then, the yellow dragon looked back at her and pulled out a piece of clothing, a delicate maid's outfit. His face flushed red. "From now on, you call me master." This stunned Elena, who couldn't believe the old yellow dragon had such tastes. But for the sake of everyone's plan, she had to change into the maid outfit. As she approached the yellow dragon's lab, he was reluctant to let her in, thinking it was too messy. Elena awkwardly smiled. "I just wanted to help you tidy up a bit." This sent the old yellow dragon's heart racing, too nervous to speak. Seeing this, Elena thought he was angry and quickly apologized. The yellow dragon signaled her not to worry and vainly said, "You must be overwhelmed by my charisma. Although you were cold to me at first, you'll warm up to my kindness in time." Hearing this, Elena's expression became uncomfortably awkward, as if she had eaten something she shouldn't have. The old yellow dragon was too self-absorbed. Meanwhile, the trio spying from above were also shocked, unable to believe how thick-skinned he was. Elena was furious, and just about to explode seeing the three still spectating, when the old yellow dragon suddenly noticed Ellison and others, panicking because he sensed their powerful auras. "You're not humans." Then, he turned to flee the cave but found his teleportation array had been destroyed. As he tried to escape through the cave entrance, Ruren and Serena's spells had already securely blocked it. Serena sneered, "Old guy, you can't run away now. Now you have nowhere to go." At that moment, Serena and Ruren suddenly felt a cold presence behind them. "How long have you guys been watching from up there?" Ellison acted as if he didn't hear her question, so Elena then turned her gaze towards Ellison. "I apologize. These dragons thought it would be fun to see Elena's reaction, so we thought we'd wait and watch." Serena and Ruren were shocked that Ellison had just outed them. "You wanted to see Elena's new outfit too? What are you talking about? Anyone who hears you will misunderstand." Ellison's defense. Hearing this, Elena blushed deeply. "Is that so? Do you like this outfit?" "No, this one made it up." Ellison denies it, while Serena seems to hear something else from the yellow dragon. Just then, Ruren also sensed the old yellow dragon was up to no good, noticing he seemed to be quietly chanting a spell. Soon after, the old yellow dragon taunted, "You've made a huge mistake." Meanwhile, at the elf forest, the elf chief heard the commotion from afar. She looked up to see a dark green energy orb appear in the sky. Before anyone could react, the orb exploded, and a green smoke instantly covered the entire elven tribe. By the time they realized the danger, it was too late. All the elves lost consciousness and then drew their weapons, pointing them at their own throats. At the yellow dragon's command, everyone would commit suicide. Seeing this, Elena panicked. They rushed out of the cave to find the old yellow dragon had cast a hypnotic spell on the elven tribe. He then smugly declared, "This is a mind control spell I've developed over a century. If you don't agree to my demands, I will sorrowfully kill all your people. Will you abandon your family?" Elena hastily agreed, fearful the old yellow dragon might give the order at any moment. Just then, a powerful energy burst from Ellison. "Before you do that, you might want to ask if I agree. Blackmail won't work on me." As he spoke, a powerful magical array covered the entire elven tribe, securing everyone with Ellison's magic. Relieved, Elena finally breathed a sigh of relief. With his leverage gone, the old yellow dragon started panicking. "Ladies, let's talk this over." Ruren and Serena looked at him with kindness, ready to make him experience some spanking. Elena also expressed her anger. "You are the worst dragon I've ever met." However, flushed with delight, the old yellow dragon hadn't expected to be a masochist dragon, growing even fonder of Elena as she scolded him. With this, he receives extreme beating from Serena and Ruren. The evening arrives with a bonfire in the heart of the elven forest, where everyone is celebrating their freedom. Some are playing instruments, while others are dancing. Elena happily jumps into Neria's arms. Iramantium had been beaten into a pig-headed dragon, helping helpless before a table of vibrant vegetarian dishes. Serena was unsure how to begin eating, while Rurin took out a bottle of sauce and enjoyed her meal enthusiastically. "It's a sauce Ellison gave me. It makes the grass taste delicious." Neria saw Serena and Rurin and expressed her gratitude for their help. "You're mistaken. We just beat the shit out of that meatball. It was Ellison who saved you." Hearing this, Neria was stunned. Serena pointed at Ellison. "I thought you already knew it was him. We don't have the power to cast such a powerful spell. Only he does." Meanwhile, Ellison shared the salad dressing he had made with the elves, who absolutely loved it. Then he slowly moved out from the crowd, approached a statue, and placed some food before it, whispering, "Here, have some too. Good to see you again, old friend." Seeing the statue in front of him, Ellison couldn't help but reminisce about the times his group had teamed up. "To be honest, I think you look better as a statue." Back then, Beaton would bicker daily with Ellison for not allowing him to eat meat, as Ellison knew that the elven race couldn't digest meat. But Beaton couldn't resist the allure of Ellison's cooking. The dwarf Deadran had gotten used to their constant bickering. Just then, Deadran interrupted them. Instead of arguing, "I think fighting is more interesting." He pointed to the side, where a group of goblins was chasing some merchants. At the critical moment, a spell hit one of the goblins in the face, followed by a flurry of arrows. The goblins could only howl powerlessly outside their shields. Seeing the trio, the merchants felt a glimmer of hope, as they were the well-known heroes of the Empire. Ellison missed those days, but hadn't expected what happened afterward. He always felt guilty about it. "Maybe you will resent me for this, Lady Neria." 2 years ago, during a mission, Beaton was tragically caught in the enemy's trap and died on the battlefield. Ellison brought his body back to the Elven tribe, but Beaton had already turned into a cold corpse. Beaton had once promised he would return to the Elven tribe, and in the end, it was Ellison who fulfilled this promise for him. Therefore, Neria didn't hold any resentment towards Ellison, as he had also saved the Elven tribe. Then, Ellison pulled out a bottle of wine from his bag. "I owe Beaton not just this power, but my whole life. So, the real hero who saved the elves wasn't me," Ellison said while giving Neria a glass of wine. "Cheers to Hero Beaton." Then they toast in front of Beaton's statue. The next day, the elves once again thanked the group for their help, and Ellison and his companions set off for home. As for the old yellow dragon, after seeing Ellison's strength, he no longer dared to target the elves. At that moment, Rurin interrupted Ellison's thoughts because she had overheard the elf chief's conversation with him the day before. Hearing this, Elena is confused and thinks Ellison had a conversation with Lady Neria. Rurin wondered why Ellison hadn't mentioned anything about eating the Lord's heart. Ellison answered that it's a secret to everyone else. Hearing this, the three behind him were stunned. Ellison explained everything to Rurin, and the old yellow dragon also broke into a cold sweat, fearful that Ellison might unleash some casual magic on him. Just then, Ellison and his group arrive at the city lord's mansion. Deadran knew that Ellison had been away for a while and was surprised that he came to the mansion first upon his return, presumably with something important. This was Ellison's first official visit to the Count's mansion. Hearing the noise outside, Mrs. Verna was puzzled. "Deadran, is that a guest?" Then, Deadran introduced his teacher, but Mrs. Verna kept staring at Ellison, feeling that he looked familiar. She soon remembered what had happened before. She had wanted to thank Ellison, but had never been able to find him. "Thank you for saving me and Deadran," she said while grabbing Ellison's hand. Just then, Ellison interrupted her thoughts. "You don't have to thank me yet. There's still one person I haven't saved." This left Deadran and Mrs. Verna even more puzzled. Then, Rurin walked in with Iramantium. He was much more subdued now, no longer as arrogant as before. Seeing Ridden lying on the sickbed, Iramantium immediately knew that this was a major brain issue, likely caused by a powerful toxin. But this was not a difficult problem for him. Then, Iramantium cast a spell, accompanied by a bright light, and Ridden's vision gradually cleared, and he started to make faint sounds. Seeing this, Mrs. Verna and Deadran could no longer contain their emotions and immediately embraced Ridden. With that, the issue with the city lord of Gre finally came to a close. Seeing this, Ellison also remembers her mother, and he started missing her more. Seeing that Iramantium had behaved well, Rurin released him from her magical control. For the time being, Ellison called Rurin, telling her that they should get going now. They decided to leave the time to this warm family. The evening comes at the restaurant. Because Rurin secretly finished all the beer, Ellison had to use a summoning spell again. This was his first time using a summoning spell after absorbing 3 essence crystals. Unexpectedly, the spell's power exceeded Ellison's expectations, instantly engulfing him and Rurin. When Ellison opened his eyes again, he found himself in a familiar yet strange environment. Ellison clearly remembered that he was preparing ingredients. As the scene before him twisted, Ellison remembered this was where he had been before he went to the other world. He was finally back in the real world. As Rurin kept calling to him, Ellison gradually came to his senses. However, Rurin was very nervous when she saw the glowing iron lump in front of her, as she didn't know where it was. Once Ellison realized this wasn't a dream, a passerby asked if they are all right. When passersby were about to call for an ambulance, Ellison hurriedly picked up Rurin and ran away. Passersby, curious about Ellison's strange attire, couldn't help but wonder, is this a cosplay? A moment later, the two found a secluded place. Only then did Rurin realize this was Ellison's home. Ellison hadn't expected to return to Earth in this manner. Looking Looking at the brightly lit city around him, Ruren excitedly wanted Ellison to take her around for a tour, but Ellison was quite embarrassed because he had just noticed that the girl's phone in her hand was something he had never seen before, along with the surrounding skyscrapers and the complex traffic. He began to realize that his location was completely different from his memories from 15 years ago. Ellison did not know his exact location, but in this familiar yet unfamiliar place, he still had a destination in mind. However, before that, he needed to exchange some real-world currency. Meanwhile, at the farm, everyone was at work as usual, taking care of the Berinerics, but they were puzzled as the restaurant opened much later than usual. As Ellison learned to sleep in too, they wondered. Soon, Ellison and Ruren changed into modern clothes, but Ellison was saddened by not being able to exchange much money. A gold coin could have been exchanged for 4 million Korean won, but the shop required his ID information, and ultimately Ellison had to sell the gold coin at half the price. Just then, Ruren's stomach embarrassingly growled. The two spotted a Chinese restaurant in front of them, and Ellison quickly decided what to eat. Jjajangmyeon might be a good choice. Ruren started devouring the noodles, savoring their delicious and savory taste. But when Ellison picked up the menu, he was shocked. He remembered that jjajangmyeon used to cost only 4,000 won, but now it had risen to 8,000 won. Our clothes weren't the only expensive things? Ellison was stunned, looking at the menu. You sound like an elder dragon. However, Ellison wasn't planning to save money. Filling their stomachs was the most important thing for now. Afterward, Ellison took Ruren to try foods unavailable in the other world and to reacquaint himself with this era, as the world now contained many things he had never seen before. Meanwhile, outside Ellison's restaurant, many customers gathered, but the restaurant had been closed for 2 days. Serena is visibly irritated. Where did they go? No one knew where Ellison had gone, and it was unlike him to leave without a word. Some customers are leaving. The reputation of the restaurant might be affected. If this continued, they began to worry that something might have happened to Ellison. Seeing this, Lindy proposed his idea. Perhaps we could try managing Ellison's restaurant, as all the ingredients should be here. Hearing this, Ment and Meltian were stunned as they knew that it wouldn't be easy. Meanwhile, Ellison and Ruren had finished their day's adventures and boarded a train. Although Ellison could have used magic to fly or teleport, he was concerned that it might frighten others. At that moment, Ruren asks if they are going to meet Ellison's mother. Hearing this, Ellison was surprised that Ruren knew all along. Just then, Ruren admired the scenery outside through the train window, finding Ellison's homeland very appealing. Ellison was thinking seriously and then called out Ruren. Ellison suddenly asked her, "What would you say if I asked if we could stay here? If we live here forever without ever going back?" Hearing this, Ruren was speechless. Ellison continues while the train moves. "Since I'm here now, the essence crystals won't appear in that world, and the threat of the Lord's birth also disappeared. So I was wondering, what if we start anew here?" Hearing this, Ruren felt conflicted and unsure how to respond. Ellison signaled that she didn't need to rush her answer. Meanwhile, Ruren also asked him, "If I refuse you, would you be willing to give up living here and return with me?" This reminded Ellison of the time when he first arrived in the other world. At that time, he studied teleportation magic every day just to return to Earth. No matter how much energy he used, he could not open the gateway back to Earth. Ellison had once tried to touch a teleportation portal that was only the size of a finger, but his companions stopped him because the magic was extremely unstable. If he had reached out to touch it, his fingers might have been severed by the energy. With all his might, he wanted to at least send a letter to the portal. When the letter got in, the portal blasted. After witnessing this, everyone fell silent for a moment. Then Beaton, feeling furious, scolded Ellison, insisting that he give up the spell. He reminded Ellison that, because of that spell, he wouldn't be able to use magic for several weeks. At that time, Ellison had only one thought: to go home. "Darren, you'll return to the mines after the war ends, right?" Hearing this, Darren was speechless. "Beaton, you'll return to the elves' forest," to which Beaton agrees. Ellison feels hopeless and can't hold back his tears. "As for me, where am I supposed to go?" Beaton and Darren both don't know how to respond to Ellison and remain silent by his side. As Ellison was sinking into a sense of loss, he answered, "Have I ever abandoned you before?" Hearing this, Ruren's mood brightened. "You would never, right?" Then they continue to chat happily on the train. Meanwhile, at the restaurant, Lindy was meticulously mimicking Ellison's way of cutting meat, slicing the meat just as Ellison would. Next was starting the fire, but he realized there was no fuel underneath, leaving him somewhat at a loss. Then, Miltine suddenly remembered that Ellison used magic, so they both looked at Elena. Along with her incantation, a small flame appeared in front of everyone. Seeing this, Serena, not to be outdone, silently recited a spell, and instantly, a powerful flame covered the grill. "Don't worry, I've got enough flame here." Seeing this, Lindy thought, "I don't know who she is, but the problem has been solved." With everyone's help, all the ingredients were prepared. However, when a piece of blackened food was brought to the table, the customers were immediately taken aback. The customer, confused, asked, "Did you serve me cold because I'm a minor?" To which Miltine apologized. Mr. Knoll attempted to prepare the salad ingredients as Ellison would, but the customers found it nearly inedible due to excessive saltiness. Mr. Ment also tried to help by adding salt, but mistakenly handed over a bottle of sugar instead. As a result, the customers could hardly hardly take a bite because the salad was overly sweet. Seeing the customers' reactions, Lindy felt very nervous. If this continues, the restaurant might have to close early. He could hardly focus on grilling the meat. Looking at the blazing flame, the meat burns as soon as he puts it on. He tried to get Serena to reduce the flame, but clearly, she had no intention of reducing it. What can I do to prevent the food from burning? Just then, he noticed a metal bucket nearby and thought, maybe I can try this. Meanwhile, Ellison had returned to the neighborhood where he used to live. Although much had changed, some places were still as he remembered. He quickly found the house from his memories, and his heart finally settled. I'm finally home. Then, he knocked on the door, nervously waiting for it to open, wondering how to greet his mother. Will she recognize me? After all, my hairstyle is still the same as 15 years ago. However, after waiting a long time, there was no response from inside. Ellison thought, could my mother be asleep? Just then, the door next door suddenly opened, and out came a neighbor. Ellison immediately asked the neighbor if she knew where the people of Unit 604 had gone, only to be met with the girl's shock. Are you Miss Jianhua's son? Ellison quickly nodded. Do you know where my mother is? The girl wiped the corner of her eye. She doesn't live here anymore. Then, she led Ellison and Ruren to another place. She always boasted about her son whenever we ate together. She told me that he would be the same age as me. By the way, I'm a novelist. Ellison cut her off. Excuse me, but where are we going right now? Hearing this, the girl stopped, then continued walking. Miss Jianhua missed you a lot. I suggested she hand out flyers, but she refused. Along the way, the girl sighed softly. Why are you only coming back now? If you had returned 2 years earlier, you might have been able to see her. Hearing this, Ellison was stunned, unable to process the situation. He couldn't believe what was in front of him. Then, the girl continued speaking while serving the tune with soju. It turned out that his mother had been diagnosed with stomach cancer years ago, and despite having a gastrectomy, the cancer recurred 3 years ago, and she eventually passed away. Hearing this is too much for Ellison. No, this is not the reunion I hoped for. He imagines his mother asking him if he is hungry, and then inviting them to eat dinner together with a wide smile on her face. Just then a great tremor overtook him. Then tears raced down his cheek. This isn't the farewell I had in mind. Then, the neighbor wiped down her tears. Honestly, I'm not really curious about what you were doing until now. It's already too late. Even if you explain, it's not like Ms. Jianhua will come back. She searched for something in her bag and handed Ellison a letter. This is the only thing she left behind. She said it fell into her house one day. You wrote it, didn't you? She wrote a reply, just in case you came back to retrieve it. Then the neighbor left them. Ellison looked at the worn envelope, his fingers trembling as he anxiously opened it. He then read the content of the letter. Ruren glanced at the letter and said, this seems to be paper from the Roburn Empire. Could it be the letter from you? It turned out that after Ellison had mastered teleportation magic, he wrote this letter, talking about becoming a mage and planning to open a restaurant. However, due to the instability of the magic, he was unsure if his mother ever received the letter. Even though I had a way to send letters, I soon gave up thinking there was no way to receive a reply, he said, trembling. Looking at the signature on the letter, Ellison's tears could no longer be held back. He had never thought he would meet his mother in this way, filled with regret for not sending more letters. Maybe if I had, I wouldn't regret this so much. Ruren looks at Ellison with so much sympathy and then hugs him to comfort him. Back to the restaurant, which is still bustling with people. Lindy, through trial and error, gradually mastered the preparation of several dishes. With the help of others and their frequent experience eating Ellison's cooking, they were able to largely recreate the previous flavors. Mr. Met felt relieved. Now, the guests were not a concern. All that's left is for the manager to return. Meanwhile, in the forest, Ellison had been there for a day and a night. Ruren, worried about his health, suggested he eat something first. Then, Ellison stopped her. I'm sorry, Ruren, I lied before. If you don't want to stay here, I'll let you go back alone. Hearing this, Ruren was shocked, unable to respond. It's been 15 years. Mom is only me, so no matter what you said, I intended to stay here. Now, I have nothing left. Ruren immediately interrupted him. Do you really think you have nothing left? Do you remember the question you asked on the train? I never thought about refusing your offer. Besides, I couldn't bear to leave you here alone. After speaking, Ruren firmly took his hand. If you want, I will stay here with you forever. But what about those who remain on the other side? Meanwhile, the news of Ellison's disappearance had reached the mansion. Ritten, who had just regained consciousness, hadn't had a chance to visit him and decided to personally look into Ellison's whereabouts. At the construction of Ruren's lair, the dwarf Goltazar also heard about it, but he wasn't panicked. All we need to worry about is the final deadline for the building and the completion of the den. Ellison will definitely come back. The dwarf apologized and said to get back to construction immediately. Then Goltazar leaned against his back and looked up. Ellison isn't someone who would abandon us. Don't you agree, Deadran? Everyone was waiting for Ellison's return, whether humans, dwarfs, or elves. Maybe even dragons are knocking on our restaurant door, Ruren said as she stood up. Then she looked back at Ellison. You say there's nothing left? There wasn't a single meaningless thing among what you did. Don't you think the 15 years you spent there is a good reason to go back? Ellison listens to every word Ruren says. Then he asked her, the things I wrote in the letter, do you think Mom believed them? Ruren smiled. Of course. I've never seen a parent who doubts their child. Then she pulled Ellison up. Let's go back to where we belong. 2 days have passed Since that day, the neighbor had not seen Ellison for 2 days. She began to feel that maybe she had been too harsh with her words. As she was lost in thought, a voice interrupted her. She curiously looked up to see Ellison and Ruren, their attire making her puzzled. "What is this heavy bag?" the girl asked. Then she slowly opened the bag. The woman was stunned by the sight of the bag. Then, a portal appeared in front of them, and Ellison said, "It looks like we need to get back to the restaurant. There are a lot of people waiting." Ellison turned to her and said, "Thank you for taking care of my mother's grave." After speaking, Ellison and Ruren disappeared in front of her. This reminded her of what Ms. Jongwa had once said. "I want to get well soon. There's a restaurant I really want to go. Although it's a bit far, I know it's already open, and it's called a 9th-class Archmage restaurant." Watching the spot where Ellison and Ruren had disappeared, the woman was taken aback for a long time. She couldn't believe that what Ms. Jongwa had said was true. Her son really was a 9th-class Archmage. At the top of a snowy mountain, Ellison and Ruren returned to another world. However, they seemed to be quite far from the restaurant. Ruren was about to use teleportation magic when Ellison interrupted her, creating an even stronger portal with a casual gesture. Ruren was astounded. "When did you learn spatial magic?" Ellison smiled. "I found it similar to dimensional magic, so I just practiced it a bit, and surprisingly, it actually worked." Back at the outskirts of the restaurant, Ellison looked troubled. "It seems we have some explaining to do about our disappearance these past few days." Ellison didn't know how to explain his long absence to everyone. He assumed they must be angry, and Ruren guessed that the restaurant's customers had probably left as well. But as the two approached the restaurant, they were stunned by what they saw. A statue had been erected outside the restaurant at some point. This made Ellison wonder if he had gone to the wrong place. Meanwhile, inside the restaurant, Lindy was passionately recounting Ellison's heroic deeds, and the customers listening were deeply moved. Then, Lindy shifted gears. "This is the dish that cured the count back then." Hearing this, the customers scrambled to place their orders. Just then, a turtle head peeked quietly from behind the door, startling Lindy. Ellison walked into the restaurant and said, "What's going on here? I'd better get an explanation." At that moment, Ridden stepped forward and interrupted with a smile. "Good to see you again. This was all my idea. The night comes at the restaurant," and Lindy continued to explain. "The night you disappeared, everyone panicked. To keep the restaurant going, we tried everything." Then, Ellison tried a piece of boiled meat Lindy had prepared and found it quite good. So he smiled and thought, maybe this suits him better than working at the ranch. "Well, I'm at fault this time, so I'm not going to criticize you. But what's with the statue outside? Can someone explain that to me?" Ridden happily replied, "It was meant to commemorate your achievements. Don't worry, the Count's castle will take care of it." Ellison is confused and asks what achievements he is referring to. "Back then I heard stories of a legendary soldier in the Dragon War who ignored orders and worked alone. He was the worst soldier as well as the best sorcerer. From what I heard, his name was Ellison." Hearing this, Ellison began sweating. Although it's a story that not many people know of, the day Deadran came to the castle, and when you entered the Count's mansion, I knew who you were. Ellison breathed a sigh of relief and smiled. "Wow, I never would have guessed you were conscious. You didn't just save the city, you saved me and my family as well. So I'll do whatever I can to help you, Sir Ellison. Do you understand now?" Hearing this, Ellison immediately smiled, and then quietly released a small spell to end the conversation. "No, I don't." Ellison's small spell directly shattered the statue. "I don't want people to include backgrounds items when evaluating my restaurant." Ridden could only offer an awkward smile. Perhaps the statue was indeed a bit much. He then said, "There's another matter. Could you help me deal with the rumor that my dishes can cure diseases?" "Of course, I'll explain that to the people myself." Meanwhile, outside Gre City, a girl bumped into someone and accidentally spilled her books on the ground. Medrin, seeing this, promptly used magic to organize the books. Her actions made the girl amazed and envious because they couldn't even see Medrin's spellcasting actions as it is performed at such speed. So rumors that Medrin had been kidnapped and tied up crying were surely false. Hearing the girl's whisper, Medrin clenched her fist and then blushed, hoping these rumors weren't true. When she reached the door, Medrin paused. She felt that someone was inside. "Duke Tamurin is the only one who can enter my room without permission, but the Duke is out of town. Then it must be that black dragon who came to greet me." Thinking of this sends a shiver down her spine already. This time, she wasn't sure if it was Ellison finding her, so she blasted open the door and plaintively said, "Please don't tie me up and drag me with you again. Rumors of it have already spread throughout the entire city, so please be nice this time," she said while closing her eyes and crying. Hearing this, the prince was also taken aback. "Medrin, what's going on?" Medrin realized that it really was the prince seeking her and was immensely embarrassed, not knowing where to put her face. Shortly after, the prince and Medrin discussed the matter of Deadran City. The increasing crime rate there was disturbing him. However, he curiously asked, "Medrin, why don't you dare look up and talk to me?" The prince reassured her, "Don't worry, this prince won't spread rumors." Then he quickly changed the subject. "So far, how many personnel have been dispatched, and how many have died so far?" Medrin, having regained her composure, replied, "3 have died." "Do you want me to go and deal with those criminals?" Medrin asked. Puzzled, the prince immediately shook his head. "If someone as heartless as you went, they would all hide in fear, and then we wouldn't be able to find out who was making this poison." Medrin was even more confused confused. But we don't have any personnel available to dispatch now. The prince smiled. There is one more person. Although he looks like a normal human, he is actually a monster who doesn't care about assassinating criminals or the state. Hearing this, Deadran immediately knew who he was referring to. Meanwhile, after returning to the other world, Ellison also brought back different cuisines. Currently, the most popular is grilled meat bibimbap. He slices the grilled meat into strips and grated radish, then arranges them attractively and sprinkles a little radish and green onion on top, completing a simple grilled meat bibimbap. Ellison had Ruren serve this dish to customers in need, but when the food was set before Serena, she was stunned. This doesn't look like grilled meat bibimbap at all, because there wasn't a single piece of grilled meat on it. Seeing Ruren secretly chewing something, Serena immediately realized she was up to something. The two immediately got into a fight. Meanwhile, Mrs. Verna was enjoying her meal. It turns out she had heard that Deadran always came to Ellison's restaurant to eat, so she wanted to try it herself and fell in love with the food at first taste. Just then, the restaurant's door was pushed open again, and a man walked in. "Can I have 2 of what they're eating?" Ellison glanced out of the corner of his eye and sighed softly. "Of course. Please wait a moment." Soon, 2 servings of grilled meat bibimbap were prepared, and the man eagerly began to taste them. "The flavor here is really surprising," he complimented. The woman sitting nearby agreed. Seeing this, Ellison joked with a smile. "Is that so? You don't seem like someone easily surprised." This made the Crown Prince Leon, who was in disguise, very embarrassed. "I thought I made the perfect disguise for this." Ms. Verna over there didn't seem to notice. As Ellison had recognized their identities at a glance, he casually asked, "What's going on? Why are you disguised?" The prince smiled. "First, I wanted to taste the food here." Then he pulled out a blue potion from his pocket. "The second matter is about this potion." Ellison curiously asked what it is. "It's a lethal poison that can destroy a human's brain. The reason Count Ridden has been bedridden for years is because of this poison." Hearing this, Ellison turned serious. "And now, this poison is slowly spreading throughout the empire. It's a miracle that the Count woke up from it. We can't expect that from everyone, right? We need to find out who's behind it." Suddenly, the restaurant door was kicked open by 2 men. "If you don't want to die, do exactly as we say." Hearing this, the customers who were enjoying their meals suddenly stopped. Mrs. Verna was startled, not expecting to encounter robbers here. "What are you doing? Do you think we're joking around?" This scene stunned Ruren and Serena, who obviously didn't budge. Ellison and others look at them like they are a joke. There are so many hornets' nests in the world, yet these 2 chose the biggest. It wasn't long before the robbers were easily subdued by Deadran. The men quickly begged for mercy. "Spare us, Chief Mage. We'll never dare again." Hearing someone call her Chief Mage, Deadran proudly said, "That's right, I am the Empire's only 7th-tier Chief Mage." This left Prince Leon somewhat embarrassed, chuckling. Perhaps Deadran has been under some stress lately. Then, Ellison changed the subject. "You want me to take charge of investigating the source of the poison?" The prince nodded in confirmation. "That's right. No matter how much we interrogate Count Deadran, he says nothing, and the commanders sent there have been successively killed. So I'm sure these 2 men are from the outskirts of Deadran City. But why would you assign such an important task to a restaurant owner?" The prince explained reluctantly. "Count Deadran's castle has been destroyed, and many leads have been lost. I want to know if he feels a bit responsible for the current situation we can't control." This made Ellison uncomfortable. "Who told you this information?" The prince waved his hand. "I can't tell you. It must remain strictly confidential. However, I can reveal that this person is a 7th-tier mage of the Empire." Hearing this, Deadran couldn't help but break into a cold sweat. Ellison sighed helplessly. "I didn't expect setting off fireworks to lead to so many issues." He then accepted the prince's mission. "However, there's another matter. Deadran, come see me later." Meanwhile, on the outskirts of Deadran, most of the people here are homeless, and the city has become chaotic due to Deadran's financial issues. Ellison didn't expect the situation to be worse than he had anticipated. Coupled with the spread of the poison, no one dares to take charge here. He realized that he couldn't catch everyone alone. Acting rashly would only alert the criminals, so he needed to come up with a plan. Then, Ellison called out to Ruren, "I have a plan. Do you want to hear it? But it's a bit dangerous." Ruren smiled, indicating Ellison shouldn't worry. "As long as you arrange it, I'm willing to do anything for you." A moment later, Ruren is locked in a cell. The prisoners gawk at her with sleazy expressions, like a pack of hyenas seeing a lamb. However, Ruren didn't expect that the cell would not separate men and women, but who the lamb really is remains to be seen. As Ruren faces the prisoners, a voice interrupts her. "I heard there's a girl prisoner today. This person is Ricardo, the Lord Chamberlain of Deadran City." Ruren didn't expect that the city's gang leader would be in charge of managing it. The guard points at Ruren. "It's this prisoner. She was arrested for assaulting passers-by on the street." Seeing Ruren's rebellious look, Ricardo is very pleased. A bit rebellious, but that's exactly her selling point. Ruren's eyes fill with murderous intent. At that moment, the maid behind interrupts Ricardo, apparently because the Empire's 4th count has arrived. Soon, Ricardo heads to the reception hall, but he is inwardly furious. Does this guy have a death wish? He should know that 3 counts have already disappeared here. Despite this, Ricardo maintains a smile on his face and greets him. "Welcome, esteemed count. I heard you are from the palace." Ellison sits on the sofa, legs crossed, and states nonchalantly, "It's nice to see you. I'm Count Rivolk, and from now on, I will take charge of Deadran City. Earlier in the morning, after receiving the appointment letter from Prince Leon, Ellison arrived at the Duke's residence as Count Rivolk. Ricardo, seeing the Imperial seal, realized this was indisputably true, but the new city lord arrived faster than he expected. He unhappily reminds him, Count Rivolk, do you know, before you, there have already been 3 of the dispatched officials who mysteriously died. Ellison smiles and responds lightly, are you saying I should be careful so as to not become the 4th? Ricardo does not answer directly, but chuckles dismissively. How could I dare joke about such a matter? This gives Ellison a reason to act. Then, in front of Ricardo, he tears up the Imperial appointment letter and acts greatly offensive and disrespectful. Seeing this, Ricardo breaks into a cold sweat, shocked that the new count would be so bold. It should be noted that such actions could lead to imprisonment. However, Ellison appears unconcerned, like a young man unaware of the gravity of the world. Rather than those boring administrative duties, I'd prefer this to be a place of interest. Isn't there an area where our interests align? Ricardo doesn't respond immediately, but looks significantly more sullen. Meanwhile, Rurin is being taken to transfer cells. Although she could easily leave, she must endure her temper to cooperate with Ellison's mission. Soon, she is led away by the jailer. The prisoner's faces light up with excitement. It won't be long before you miss this place dearly because, compared to the outside, this cell is practically paradise. Rurin glances at them with the corner of her eye but ignores them. She knows that where she is being taken next is precisely the place Ellison wants to find. Meanwhile, Ricardo observed Rurin's every move from the shadows. Compared to the previous counts, Ricardo found he preferred Count Rivolk's personality. He could no longer kill officials lightly. He thought, let's see if you're just putting on a show or if you're really worth recruiting. At the count's office, Ellison's sitting at a table, staring at the potion in front of him, deep in thought. He didn't know if his acting had deceived Ricardo, and mentioning more might arouse suspicion. He could only hope that Rurin would achieve something on her side. Just then, the door was softly knocked, and the housekeeper came in with a cup of tea. Ellison made polite remarks, gesturing for the housekeeper to place the tea aside, but she didn't move. The Lord Chamberlain instructed me to ensure you drink a sip of tea before I can leave. He said it's a symbol of trust. This gave Ellison a sudden jolt, thinking, does this guy dare to openly poison an official? But to gain his trust, he had to drink the tea. Refusing would expose his real intentions. Looking at the tea, Ellison didn't hesitate and drank it all in one go. Suddenly, he felt a rush of heat surge through him, and seeing the housekeeper's slightly upturned mouth, he pretended to be calm and said, your tea is quite good. I almost choked because I drank too fast. Ellison gambled right. The tea was not poisoned. He thought, it seems I passed his test. Then, the housekeeper opened the door again, saying, there's just one more thing. He asked me to give you this gift after you passed the trust test. I hope you enjoy it. Seeing this, Ellison was stunned, and then he sighed lightly. This is a lot more complicated than I thought. I didn't think they had slaves. The housekeeper turned and left, leaving behind a woman with vacant eyes. Ellison immediately saw that the woman had been controlled. Just as he tried to awaken her, unexpectedly, the woman pushed Ellison down, pinning him underneath her. Meanwhile, in the other part of Deadran City, a man is angrily interrogating 2 men, the same robbers subdued by Medran. Seeing them brought back, the man was very upset and immediately ordered his subordinates to take them to the laboratory. Hearing this, the 2 panicked, quickly begging for mercy, knowing that the laboratory was a place of unspeakable torment. This man was Deadran, the manager of Deadran City human trafficking. As he pondered, his subordinate interrupted him, informing him that Ricardo had sent a female prisoner today. The punk doesn't get tired, does he? Deadran should at least keep distance. Wait, didn't Ricardo say he was going to send a girl prisoner here today? Deadran asks his subordinate, who then confirms that it was a female prisoner who committed assault. If it's assault, then could it be the one who beat our guys? At that moment, Rurin and other prisoners were bound by their hands and escorted to a dark, sunless mine. Rurin didn't expect so many slaves to be held here, as the Empire explicitly forbids slave trading. These people were clearly trafficked through illegal channels. Seeing the overseer leave, Rurin immediately activated a transport space, intending to inform Ellison of these circumstances. Although she wasn't sure if this was the exact place Ellison was looking for to manufacture the poison, she felt it was essential to notify him promptly. However, when she spoke through the transport space, she received no response. She looked into the transport space, her eyes widening in shock to see a woman on top of Ellison. Ellison was instantly sweating profusely, hurriedly explaining, this must be a misunderstanding. This statement made Rurin incredulously watch the scene unfold. Suddenly, a terrifying energy burst from her body. However, the woman suddenly said, Master, please give me your order. Rurin was immediately furious, her hands crushing the chains. Ellison hurriedly tried to calm Rurin. This really is a misunderstanding. The woman in front of you has been controlled, and your released aura might attract their leader's attention, especially since we've barely infiltrated the Count's residence. Hearing this, Rurin slightly retracted her aura, but coldly said, do some research on what the cultivation room is about. We'll discuss this matter later. You better be prepared. Ellison felt aggrieved, thinking, who can judge this? Meanwhile, the patrol guard noticed something unusual in the cell, so he hurriedly opened the cell to check it while Rurin had to quickly close the transport space to avoid further trouble. Ruren quickly changed the subject, laughing as she said, I just wanted to point out that your chains are of poor quality. I'd like a new set. This statement left the nearby guard dumbfounded. Ruren's actions were closely observed by Deadran from the shadows. He deduced from her aura that Ruren was actually a dragon. Hearing this, the deputy commander was profoundly shocked, and knowing he couldn't defeat her, Reeden had no choice but to seek someone else to handle it. The next day, Ricardo visits Ellison's room again, smiling as he asks, did you enjoy the gift I sent yesterday? Mentioning this, Ellison got angry, nearly failing to explain himself to Ruren. However, he suppressed his anger and responded casually, I quite liked your gift. That woman I'd like to keep for a few more days. By the way, it's not the first time I've seen slaves, but she seems a bit different. Hearing this, Ricardo's smile broadened slightly. You noticed their special feature, didn't you? These slaves are completely obedient through mind control, so there's no worry about them escaping or rebelling. They will execute any order you give without reservation, so they can do anything you want them to do. Ellison hadn't anticipated, aside from the poison issue, such a severe slave problem. He pondered whether to uproot this slave market. If left unaddressed, who knows how many innocent lives would be ruined. So, are you thinking of expanding the slave market using my identity to open a route for selling slaves to influential nobles within the empire? Ellison asked coldly. Ricardo stroked his beard, pleased. It seems like collaborating with you is the right choice. Ellison quickly changed the subject, but before that, I want to confirm something about the origin of these slaves. Does it have to do with the place called the cultivation room? Ellison asked calmly. This caused Ricardo's pupils to shrink suddenly, clearly not expecting Ellison to know even this. Ellison gestured for him to relax. I wouldn't cooperate without understanding the situation. Can I now see the entire process? Ricardo smiled. Since we're partners now, you can certainly know about these processes. It's a lot closer than you think. Meanwhile, Deadran was heading to a room, then he knocks on a door. He is instructed to come in. He opens the door saying, I have a bit of a difficult issue here. The person in the room was the red dragon Sydney. Because Deadran noticed that Ruren's aura was similar to Sydney's, he had no choice but to ask Sydney for help. After all, the business also involved the red dragon. Meanwhile, led by Ricardo, Ellison finally arrived at their cultivation room. The place was filled with traces of magic, leading Ellison to surmise that a powerful mage was involved. Moreover, the workers' physical condition seemed quite poor. Ellison knew that the next step was to identify the components of the poison. Ellison then asked, can these ingredients produce an untraceable poison? Thinking Ellison was interested in other drugs, Ricardo was about to pull out some samples from his coat. However, at that moment, Deadran suddenly interrupted him, asking calmly, why bring others here? Before Ricardo could answer, a blade swiftly crossed his throat. Deadran coldly stated, you made a basic mistake, and now I'm correcting it. Ellison hadn't expected them to be so ruthlessly against their own people. At that moment, Deadran's gaze fixed on Ellison. Seeing this, Ellison no longer hid his intentions, smirking, it seems this role-playing game is over. At the same time, Ruren heard the commotion from afar and sensed a trace of magic. She knew things were starting to change. Just then, danger approached. Sydney found Ruren and taunted, my cage even holds a black dragon. Meanwhile, Ruren, surprised to meet the red dragon Sydney here, was even more astonished that she hadn't sensed her presence. At that moment, Sydney looked at her and slowly said, although you do not know who I am very familiar with your affairs. Ruren, Varen's daughter. This left Ruren stunned. You know my mother's name? Sydney revealed a sinister smile and let out a chilling laugh. I know not only her name, but also remember when she took her last breath. Do you want to hear about it? Hearing this, Ruren's aura darkened. Thank goodness Ellison isn't here. He would have tried to convince me to give someone like you a chance. Dragon energy is bursting from her body. As her words ended, the entire iron cage instantly melted. Ruren was once again forced to assume her dragon form, which she least wanted to use. At that moment, Sydney, far from panicking, sneered, let's see just how much Varen's daughter has grown. Just now, under Sydney's continuous taunting, Ruren started gathering energy in her mouth and launched a fierce dragon breath attack. The blast of dragon's breath left a huge hole in the ground, stunning the nearby soldiers. They had never seen such a terrifying scene and quickly got up to flee. Ruren is looking for Sydney. When she looks up, she notices a red glow. In an instant, several red dragon breaths blasted towards her. The red dragon Sydney continued to provoke, you should have stayed in Gre City, playing house with that human man who brought you here. Hearing this, Ruren grew even angrier. Next, the battle between the two dragons officially began. Meanwhile, at the cultivation room, Deadran, watching the materials being burned, did not care. Instead, coldly said, perfect, you're helping me destroy the evidence. But how could Ellison let his plans proceed? He coldly watched, already prepared to take his next steps. Ellison casually cast an ice spell to extinguish all the flames, coldly stating, it would be a pity if it destroyed all the evidence. Seeing Ellison easily use high-level magic, Deadran tensed up, realizing the man before him was no ordinary official. Thus, he pretended to ask why Ellison was there, trying to distract him, and took the opportunity to launch a sneak attack. However, the attack did no damage to Ellison. It seems your magic is indeed quite formidable, Deadran coldly remarked. Ellison had not expected Deadran to be a first-level knight. He casually remarked, "So, you came from the palace, didn't you?" This caused a shock to Adrian, who didn't expect Ellison to guess his origin just from a casual strike. This made him feel the situation was increasingly complicated and also felt it was dangerous. Adrian then used a more powerful sword technique and quickly attacked. Ellison waved his finger trying to restrict Adrian's movements, but Adrian agilely dodged his magical attacks, as he could see through the flow of magic. In just an instant, Adrian had closed in on Ellison with such speed that Ellison was momentarily stunned. But fortunately, Ellison reacted quickly and immediately deployed a defensive spell. Adrian had evidently noticed that Ellison wouldn't use a large-scale magic attack because he needed to preserve the evidence at the scene. This gave Adrian a chance to strike. Countless flashes of the sword quickly surrounded Ellison. He realized that this was beyond the scope of a first-level knight. Adrian's swordsmanship was exquisite. It seemed to attack from all directions, but all the damage was concentrated at one point, the best strategy for assassinating a mage. With Adrian's full-force sword energy, Ellison's shield was instantly pierced. However, despite this, Adrian's attack still failed to inflict substantial damage on Ellison. Ellison, seeing himself unharmed, couldn't help but smile. That was indeed a powerful move. Logically, it was the right thing to do, but you overlooked the strength of your opponent. Seeing Ellison completely unharmed, Adrian was incredulous, having never encountered someone who could withstand his attack. However, before Adrian could react, Ellison had already appeared in front of him. Accompanied by the release of powerful magic from Ellison, Adrian was harshly knocked back several meters, but Adrian quickly stood up again, causing Ellison to frown slightly, as Adrian's body seemed to have been modified to withstand such a powerful attack. Meanwhile, at the restaurant, Deadran just arrived. Just then, Mrs. Verna already recognized the prince. She exclaimed in surprise, "Are you here because of the Deadran affair?" The prince gestured for her not to be anxious and said lightly, "I already know. It's all due to Deadran's actions." At that moment, Deadran found the prince, and the prince asked about the interrogation of Deadran. Deadran shook his head helplessly from start to finish. He didn't say a single complete sentence. It seems that the castle incident hit him hard. Just then, the prince suddenly asked Deadran very seriously, "If you and Ellison fought a battle, who would win?" This question startled both Deadran and Deadran. "Your Highness, what do you mean?" they asked. Puzzled, the prince smiled and gestured for them to hurry up. "I'm serious. Answer me." Hearing this, Deadran answered seriously, "Although it's a serious question, it sounds somewhat foolish. Even if Deadran and I join forces, we would never be able to win against Ellison." Hearing this, the prince realized that Ellison's strength far exceeded his expectations. Meanwhile, Deadran suddenly thought of someone, saying, "However, there might be one person who could last a few more rounds against Ellison. He is a genius swordmaster who redefined the swordsmanship of the First Order of Knights, Commander Adrian Pierce. I've never seen a swordsman as talented as he is. He's the reason why I'm still a vice commander." The prince sighed helplessly, as he had also heard of this person, but that was when he was studying abroad. Didn't he disappear at the start of the Great War? At that moment, Adrian inquired about Ellison's true identity, and when he learned Ellison's name, Adrian seemed to know quite a bit about Ellison, coldly laughing. "So, you are that deserter." Ellison did not expect him to know this title, which made him increasingly curious about Adrian's identity. However, Adrian obviously did not want to stay here long and suddenly swung two sword energies at the ceiling, trying to create chaos. He knew that the laboratory and those slaves would distract Ellison. "If I had met someone like you earlier, perhaps my choices would have been different," Adrian said softly, then disappeared into the chaos. Meanwhile, fire is also fuming at the cave. The battle between Rurin and Sydney had ended, with the red dragon sprawled on the ground. Rurin coldly asked, "Tell me, how do you know my mother?" However, Sydney was still defiant, taunting, "I know all your mother's secrets, including how she created the essence crystal, was imprisoned, and pitifully died there." Before Sydney could continue, Rurin ended her life with one strike, coldly saying, "If the secret is leaked, I can just kill everyone who knows." With Ellison's help, those under control quickly regained consciousness. They are immediately grateful for Ellison's help. Just then, they found a corpse nearby. When they saw the corpse clearly, anger surged because the body was that of Ricardo. They immediately stepped on the corpse. Ellison noticed this and also showed understanding, as Ricardo had committed many evil acts, and he even felt like stepping on him a few times. Meanwhile, Iramantium quietly infiltrated the building by mind-controlling everyone and making them fall asleep, as Ellison had given him a special task. Iramantium pushed open a door, finding that the slaves Ricardo had sent earlier were still lying there. On the other side, Rurin opened the cage door, but the slaves inside appeared confused. Rurin quickly realized they were under mind control. Just then, Ellison arrived. He looked around, noticing the corpse of the red dragon on the ground. Rurin then recounted the events to Ellison. Rurin informed Ellison that some red dragons knew her mother had once created an essence crystal, and the fact that she absorbed that as well. Ellison realized that the matter of the essence crystal was becoming increasingly complicated, but for now, the Deadran poison affair seemed to be resolved. Rurin then asked Ellison what to do with the slaves. They were brainwashed and won't react to anyone except those they recognize as their masters. Ellison was already prepared with a plan. Soon after, Iramantium appeared before them, and Ellison promised that he would let him go back if he completed this task. Adamantium cast a spell, and the slaves who had been listlessly wandering soon regained their consciousness. Everyone is cheering as they celebrate their freedom. At that moment, Ellison called out to everyone. He had already prepared food for them. Ruren, first time seeing this, curiously asked what it is. These are cup ramen. I bought them from the other world. Just add the right amount of hot water, cover it, and wait 3 minutes. The slaves cautiously try to bite, and soon enough, they slurp down even the soup to the last drop. Seeing this, Ruren couldn't help but join in the noodle feast. After all this, Adamantium quietly left. At that moment, he fell into deep contemplation about his medical skills. Within the dragon race, no matter how hard he tried, he was mercilessly mocked, simply because he didn't have a handsome face. Everyone dismissed his medical skills, but after these recent events, he gradually understood that his medical skills able to help many people, and they are extremely grateful to his skills. Therefore, he decided to reassess himself and not waste his abilities. Night comes. Ellison and Ruren safely return to the restaurant. Ellison hadn't expected Adamantium to be so proficient in medicine, even curing that woman from last time. At that moment, Ruren seemed to recall something about what happened that time and asked, "So, are you prepared to pay the price?" Hearing this, Ellison was shocked. In the next instant, Ruren longed at Ellison. Ellison thought Ruren was about to teach him a lesson, but it wasn't as he expected. Ruren stepped forward and simply hugged him, which was her form of punishment for Ellison. Ellison, smiling, assured that such incidents would never happen again, but he wouldn't mind if such punishments occurred a few more times. Just then, Ellison suddenly remembered that Ruren had seemingly dealt with the red dragon's body. Ruren denied it, shocking Ellison. Ruren thought Ellison had already taken care of it. That meant the red dragon's body had disappeared. It turns out it was just a clone of Sydney, with only half of her actual strength. Then, a man appeared behind Sydney, the very one who had slipped away from Ellison's grasp earlier, Deadran. When Sydney heard Deadran praising Ellison, she wasn't surprised, knowing well that Ellison's identity was no ordinary one. The next day, the prince had Deadran sweep through Gre City, finding the situation there more severe than expected. Not only was there poison production, but also the use of dark magic for mind control. Yet, Ellison easily resolved all these issues. The prince expressed his deep gratitude. However, what the prince hadn't expected was the involvement of the dragon race. Ellison then cautioned him against meddling in dragon affairs without understanding the situation. The prince nodded, as he certainly didn't want to die young. Ellison was also curious about whom the prince would appoint to take over Deadran. Next, the prince pulled out a scroll and handed over the orders to him. Reading this, Ellison was incredulous at the prince's arrangement. The scene shifts to the prince arriving at the Earl of Gre's estate. Unaware of the situation, Ridden thought they were there to arrest Verna, leaving the prince stunned because that wasn't their purpose at all. When Ridden saw the contents of the document, he was shocked. Ridden had performed excellently during this period, which the prince had noted. Therefore, he decided to merge Gre and Deadran, appointing Ridden as the new lord. Mrs. Verna was unable to believe what she was hearing. Just when the prince thought Ridden would happily accept, he unexpectedly declined the offer. The prince was momentarily dumbfounded, unable to understand why Ridden would reject what many dreamed of. Although Ridden was unwilling to take charge, he could recommend a suitable candidate. Meanwhile, the sun set, and Prince Leon and Darian were satisfied, leaving Gre City. Back at the Gre's estate, Deadran was called into the room by his father and also learned of the merger of Gre with his father as the new lord. However, Ridden had other plans, noting that his son was already 17, and then inquired if he had any romantic interests. At that moment, Deadran was startled, not expecting his father to bring up marriage so soon. Yet, the more shocking news followed because Ridden wanted him to manage Gre City. Although Ridden had been comatose during this time, his consciousness was clear, so he believed Deadran could effectively manage Gre City. Seeing such trust from his father, Deadran was very happy and resolved to manage Gre City well. A few days later, Deadran went to inspect Gre City. He didn't expect to find the environment so appalling, and he also wondered where had the military team gone. When he entered the room of the military team, he found them gambling and drinking, completely undisciplined. Seeing this, Deadran was shocked, and then he felt his knees weaken as he fell. What on earth am I supposed to do? Where do I even start? Meanwhile, at the restaurant, Linty is cooking while Ellison and Ruren evaluate the dish he prepared. Ellison is impressed by his cooking skills, while Ruren said that she can cook this well too, which Ellison immediately disagreed with. Mrs. Rain is enjoying her meal as usual when she remembers that Deadran went to Gre City. Mr. Knoll also knew this and is proud of Deadran making a name for himself. Just then, the restaurant doors open and there is Deadran looking extremely exhausted, ordering one hamburger. Then he dives down his face to Mr. Knoll and Mrs. Rain table, which made them speechless. Ellison asked Ruren who ordered the hamburger, and Ruren, who saw what just happened, answered that it's a corpse who order. When the food was ready, Deadran immediately grabbed it and began munching it happily. Seeing this, all of them were worried about him. Deadran was shocked that they were able to notice it immediately. Then he began contemplating whether to say it or not. I can't keep relying on Master whenever there's a problem. I can't keep doing this forever. Seeing this, Ellison becomes more worried, asking if he can be of any help. Hearing this, Deadran Deadran forced a smile and thought, "No, I'm fine. I just stopped by because I was craving the food here." But his reply was the opposite. "Yes, I'm dying. Please help me."